So guys, how are friends? What if Naruto had alternate harem with bashing Ino and Sakura movie? The first sensation that came back to Ino was that of warmth and comfort. The sluggish firing of her pre-awake neurons was not capable of registering anything but physical sensations at the moment. And what she felt was a bone-deep weariness, the type of exhaustion that comes from having pushed the body well past its physical limitations. A familiar friend to most shinobi, but oddly enough Ino felt rather content. It was the same feeling of having become aware of being awake on a cold winter morning where even without stepping out of bed you knew it was freezing cold, but you also knew you didn't have anywhere to go or anything to do, so you could just snuggle deeper into your covers, and snuggle closer to her source of warmth. She did, squirming closer to the strong pair of arms draped around her body. There was a momentary pause as her mind finally processed her own observations. Slowly she cracked an eye open to take in her surroundings. The first most notable thing was the fact that she was most definitely not in her own room. The second being that the room she was in was trashed. Items and knickknacks were scattered around the room, as were a number of articles of clothing, many of which were recognizably hers. Oh yes, the dark lacy panties strung over the chair was definitely hers. A wooden chair near the window letting in the beams of sunlight through the closed drapes had been tipped over, and the drawers to a standing dresser had been pulled out and even torn out in one case. A desk stood neatly in a corner, the stationery that it held scattered across the floor as if someone had swept the tabletop in a hasty desire to clear it, and a dark beanbag chair lay ripped open with its fillings spilling out from its guts in a foamy mess. The mattress of the bed was half hanging off the frame a little ways from where her blanketed foot lay, but most distracting was the feeling of someone else's bare legs pressed up against hers. Oh look, she ideally thought, I think those are condoms. In fact, there were quite a few of the condemning little plastic rubbers scattered around and across the floor, winking back innocently at her in silent testament to her activities the night before, shifting her body so she could pull back and take a look at who she had apparently decided to lose her virginity to on a whim. She was rewarded with a grunt before she could sneak a peek at her bedmate. Turning her head and looking up, she was rewarded with a pair of blue eyes gazing blearily back at hers. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but nothing came out as she stared back at her former rival's teammate. While Naruto had never been particularly bad looking, he wasn't exactly going to win any beauty pageants when he was younger. His most distinguishing feature being those deep soulful eyes of his. But that had quickly changed after his little 3-year stint off in the world with Jiraiya. The boy had returned home quite the man and had become the talk of the women in the village. Whispers and giggles followed the clueless blonde around wherever he went, hungry eyes eating up his backside as he walked. Even Sakura, whom everyone was pretty sure was still absolutely hung up over the treacherous Uchiha, could be seen eyeing the blonde whenever she thought no one would notice, which amusingly enough quite a few people didn't fail to notice. The irresistible baby blue eyes that had trapped Ino's own gaze held a warmth and amusement to them that should have been pissing her off to no end, seeing the circumstances of how they had apparently gotten together, but she just couldn't bring herself to break away from the feeling of utter satisfaction coursing through her body at the moment. Hi. His morning voice was a deeper husk than his usual rough timbre, sending a shiver down Ino's spine as she felt her skin break out into gooseflesh from his tone. Hi. She returned with a quirk of her lips. His eyes finally released hers to gaze around the room, his eyebrows shooting upwards much to her amusement. Naruto pushed his upper body up to get a better look, taking Ino up with him slightly as she had been resting lazily against his rather well-defined chest. Finally he looked back down, meeting her gaze with a sheepish smile. Some night, huh? He asked, unable to force her widening smile into a scowl she really felt should be directed at the man responsible for taking her virginity. Ino blew a stray strand of hair from her bangs out of her face. Some night, she replied through half-lidded eyes. We should probably talk, Naruto. Why don't you go take a shower while I clean up and make us? Here he paused to take a look at the alarm clock on the bedside. Air lunch apparently. Okay. Ino sat up and rolled off her blonde companion, taking the thin bed sheets with her to cover her body. The curvy blonde took a moment to cast an appreciative gaze at her friend's exposed body, but she felt her eyes widen as her sight-seeing strayed below his waist. While she had seen diagrams and videos of what the male organ was supposed to look like erect, she had never seen it in person before, and certainly they had never been quite that big. Naruto flushed with embarrassment at his saluting member, unsure of exactly what he was supposed to do. It certainly wasn't his first time sleeping with a woman, but this was the first time had done it after being blackout drunk and with a friend no less. On second thought, why don't I use the bathroom first? He mumbled as he stood up. Ino burst into a fit of giggles that she failed to cover up with her hand at the rather large throbbing protrusion waving about in her face. Yeah, you look like you could use a cold shower or two. Flushing slightly, the blonde male hurried on to the bathroom, unaware of the pair of teal eyes glued to his firm buttocks. Oh Ino, the blonde teen murmured to herself as she heard the shower turn on. What have you gotten yourself into, girl? Stepping out of the steaming shower, Ino was surprised at the state of tidiness of the torn-up room she had left behind just 20 minutes prior. All the randomly strewn clothing had either vanished or, in the case of her clothes, neatly folded and left on the bed whose mattress had finally nestled back into its frame. The furniture had all been put back to a more respectable location, and the majority of the trash had ended up in the now rather full waste bin between the desk and doorway. Smiling to herself slightly as she could hear and smell the sizzling of something delicious wafting in through the doorway, the blonde Yamanaka dropped the towel wrapped around her body to reach for her clothes on the bed. Of course, the moment the towel touched the floor was when she heard the rapping noise from the entryway to the bedroom. Turning, she faced her blonde lover, who was currently leaning up against the doorframe, arms crossed and eyes most definitely not averted. "Hey," he murmured while his gaze continued to roam across Ino's body in a notably hungry manner. "Thought I'd let you know that lunch was ready." Fighting back an instinctive urge to blush and cover up, Ino instead placed a hand on her hip, turning so that she was even more exposed. Two could play at this game. Message received. "Can I help you with anything else?" she asked with a cocky smirk. Naruto chuckled, the soft predatory laugh sending a shiver down Ino's naked spine. Just admiring the lovely view, he murmured huskily, his baby blues locked onto hers. This time Ino could not quite repress the blush that came to her cheeks. Snatching the towel holding her drying hair up, she hurled it at the blonde, causing him to duck out of the doorframe with a laugh. "Hurry up, Ino-chan," his playful voice echoed as he headed back towards the kitchen. "Food's getting cold." Muttering to herself about perverted boys, Ino quickly put on the rest of her clothes, using the large towel previously used to cover her body to hastily dry her hair. Walking into kitchen, she found herself surrounded by the wonderful scent of freshly brewed coffee along with the sight of a meal fit for royalty laid out on the rather sparse dining table. "Coffee." Ino nodded wordlessly at Naruto as she took a seat at the table, noting that the food was actually quite delicious looking, something she had not expected from him. For a guy who had lived alone all his life and practically survived off a diet of ramen, he was apparently a decent cook. Correction, Ino thought as she took her first bite, and her taste buds practically cried out in ecstasy, an amazing cook. Taking the offered cup of brown brew from Naruto, she added some cream and sugar until the color was to her liking before taking a sip of the hot coffee. Watching the blonde male bustle about putting things into the sink, she couldn't help but smirk slightly at the domestic scene. Just how many people knew this side of him, or got to see it? "Thought you were making us lunch?" she asked after blowing on her coffee to cool it some. "I lied," he replied with a charming smile that showed oversized canines as he finally joined her at the table. "Hope you don't mind the Western-style breakfast I laid out. Found a taste for it while traveling with Jiraiya." Ino certainly had no complaints. There were a stack of golden brown pancakes piled half a dozen high, its varying color and textures suggesting a mixture of nuts and fruits in the batter that she couldn't wait to get a taste of. Her own plate was made up of some perfectly cooked scrambled eggs. Not too runny but not hitting rubbery either, with a mixture of some salted meats and other vegetables lending the yellow concussions a nice appetizing color. There were also a pile of potatoes rubbed with some sort of herb she was not familiar with, all mixed in with shredded corned beef. Along the side was a slice of ham with dark brown griddle lines that still wafted steam, some strips of juicy thick-cut bacon that glistened with grease, and half a dozen finger-sized sausage links grilled to perfection. There was a dish for butter between them, along with salt, pepper, and small flask of honey along with a bottle of store-bought ketchup. 2 glasses of orange juice was placed within reach of the two diners along with a medium glass jug filled with more of the cool fruit juice. A small woven basket with a red and white plated cover made up the centerpiece of the table, and based off the heat and smell it was most likely filled with fresh baked bread. Taking another bite of her food, Ino fought back a groan of pleasure as her taste buds triggered all sorts of pleasant reward pathways in her brain. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" she demanded as she shoveled down another forkful. "If you ever quit being a ninja you should go be a chef." Cracking a smile, the blonde male prepped his own coffee, which mainly consisted of a spoonful of sugar and a dash of cream. He liked his strong. "Why is everyone always surprised when they learn that I can cook?" Ino waved her fork in his face as she swallowed another before answering. "Well duh, mister. I eat nothing but ramen. You ate nothing but ichirakus when you were younger. The natural assumption would be that you can't cook to save your life." Chuckling as he buttered the bread roll he had taken out of the basket, Naruto grunted in satisfaction as he sank his teeth into the warm hearty grain. "About the only pleasure in life you can afford as an orphan is good food," he replied with a careless shrug. "I got good at cooking real young. I just went to Ichiraku so I wouldn't have to be alone." Feeling her own spirits dim somewhat at the reminder of her friend's difficult childhood, Ino continued eating the delicious meal, albeit at a slower pace. I can't imagine what that was like, she said sadly as she recalled how she had not exactly been the kindest person to the blonde seated across from her when they were younger. Surprisingly, Naruto simply laughed it off with a dismissive wave of his hand. Don't worry about it, Ino-chan. Leave the past in the past. I am doing all right now and I've got you guys. Smiling at his infectious grin and genuinely upbeat outlook on life, Ino resolved not to bring the mood down with her own feelings. The two continued eating in companionable silence, quickly demolishing the enormous breakfast set out before them. They made idle chit-chat for a while about all sorts of random topics, Naruto regaling her with tales from his exploits under the tutelage of the Toad Hermit, and Ino in turn filling him in with all the latest village gossip. Really? Shouted Naruto after he had finally cleared his throat from a choking fit he had suffered through after Ino had dropped a bombshell on him while he had been drinking juice. Kakashi-sensei and the snake lady? Why? They make a cute couple. Defended Ino. You the man, Kakashi, mumbled Naruto while wiping his mouth, must have a brass pair. She's not that bad once you get to know her, laughed Ino. Seeing the disbelieving look directed at her across the table, the Yamanaka crossed her arm in a huff. Seriously, she's a bit exuberant, but once you get past that she's nice enough. Unable to sustain a straight face while being confronted with Naruto's silly look of disbelief, the blonde girl broke into a fit of giggles. Stop it. Stop what? He asked innocently as he grinned back at her from across the rim of his glass of juice. That. Curling his lip, he gave a distorted sneer back at her, causing her to erupt into a new bout of laughter. The two blondes fell into a cycle of triggering each other's laughter with their own. After a few minutes they finally managed to pause long enough to catch their breaths. So, began Naruto, about last night. Instantly all the levity left the table, replaced by an awkwardness that hung in the air like a sticky fog. Right. There was still that giant white elephant parading in the room, waving its ass in their face, waiting to be dealt with. Ino couldn't help but stare down at her lap in embarrassment as the subject turned to the events of the night before. How much do you remember? He asked tentatively. Heat flooded Ino's cheeks as his question triggered exactly what she had been trying very hard not to think about. Most of the night had been a relative blur. She had gone to a party to celebrate Asuma finally proposing to Kurenai, cementing their relationship for good. Somewhere along the way she had hit it off with Naruto rather well, and apparently she had followed him home and taken resident in his bed. The rest was evident in the state of the room they had woken in. Not much. Well, that wasn't the entire truth, while the sequence of events was relatively hazy. What was clear in her memory were the activities that had taken place once they had gotten home. It was very apparent from the snatches of what she could recall that Naruto was a very intense and frighteningly focused lover. All that energy he directed into training that allowed him to often tunnel vision to his goals was focused solely for her pleasure the night before, and what little results she could still remember was enough to elicit an embarrassing dampness between her thighs as her crotch ached with desire, her body singing its want to repeat the dirty deeds of the night before. But don't worry, she continued hastily, I won't tell Sakura. The blonde male stared back blankly for a moment before raising his eyebrows in confusion. Thanks. Really though, isn't that the sort of things girls share with each other? Don't let me stop you if you feel like it. Well, I wouldn't want to ruin your chances with forehead, she teased back. The confusion on his face deepened if possible, before understanding flooded it. Well, actually, Ino, I was thinking that maybe you and I could give it a try. Ino froze at his words as she considered her friend sitting across the table. This was not what she had expected as a conversation after a night of drunken passion. Maybe an apology or even another quick tryst between the sheets, but certainly not a proposition for an actual relationship. What? She squeaked, but I thought you still liked Sakura. The blonde leaned back against his chair and made a thoughtful noise in the back of his throat. Well, yeah, I did, but I had a lot of time to think about it during my trip with Ero Sennin, and I've decided to put that behind me. We have a strong friendship that I don't want to jeopardize for something stupid, and to be perfectly honest, I don't think we'd make a good couple anyways. Ino continued to stare blankly at Naruto sitting calmly across from her, patiently waiting for her response. Finally she burst into a fit of laughter, grasping her knees with her hands to steady herself as her body shook with mirth. Naruto continued to observe her from his position through bemused eyes. Care to let me in on the joke, Ino-chan? Okay, she gasped out. You got me, Naruto, good one. She wiped a tear from her eye as another fit of giggles burst uncontrollably from her lips. I am not joking, Ino. Staring back into serious blue eyes, Ino's brain felt like it was short-circuiting. Crossing her arms on the table, she allowed her head to fall onto them with a dull thunk. Naruto, you're confused, she said in a muffled voice through her arms. We had some great sex, fantastic sex, and now you're convinced you're in love with me. It doesn't work that way. Of course it doesn't work that way, he laughed, and I am not in love with you. I've put a lot of time and thought into it, Ino. Fact is I don't think I ever liked Sakura for the right reason. I decided long before I came back that I would settle for our friendship and move on, and I have. This wasn't exactly my first time. It was mine, mumbled Ino, still in her prone position. Hearing the momentary pause, Ino peeked out between her arms, shielding her face to see Naruto's stunned expression. What? He spluttered. She glared back at him defiantly, feeling her anger rise at his disbelief. And what's that supposed to mean? You think I am some airheaded slut that spreads her legs for every guy that manages to sweep me off my feet? Was I just an easy lay? She demanded in a dangerous tone. No, that's not it, protested Naruto with his hands raised defensively. I just thought a beautiful smart girl like you would have had a chance for a more serious relationship. Hell, I'd jump at a chance to just take you out on a date, Ino-chan. Ino turned her eyes aside in embarrassment at his frank assessment of her. Truth was she had more than her share of dates and guys lined up to take her out and no doubt try to get in her pants, call her a hopeless romantic, but it had just never felt right to move beyond some kissing and heavy petting with someone who wasn't invested in an actual relationship with her, well until last night anyways, though it seems Naruto was actually considering a relationship, something she couldn't quite wrap her brain around. She felt her hands being tugged into a larger pair, his hands were warmer than hers and she could feel calluses on his palms through the searing heat of his flesh, evident of his hard work ethic. Looking up into his blue eyes so full of honesty, Ino couldn't help but flush a little as she felt her body physically react with desire to his rather dominating presence. Look Ino, he said softly, I am not demanding anything here, just give me a chance to take you out. I feel bad enough that we slept together while drunk, and I'd be lying if said the thoughts never crossed my mind, but I never meant to take away your first time when it should have been with someone special. I don't know if I can make that up to you or become that someone special for you, but I'd love to give it a try. Here he smiled that sweet gentle smile of his and tightened his hold on her hands, causing a warm pit to open up in her stomach. Butterflies? Hell, they were more like dragonflies. You're a beautiful and intelligent woman that I've always managed to have a lot of fun around, he continued with a genuine grin. Give me a chance to get to know you better? Ino stuttered a bit as her brain failed to come up with a proper response to that. She'd heard it all before, of course. Men of all ages praised her for her beauty and skill. Hell, she'd even had her share of young men serenading her, but never had anyone delivered it with such blatant honesty while looking her straight in the eye without turning their gaze. The tender smile that graced his face as he rubbed circles into the back of her hand with his thumbs caused Ino's insides to melt, and suddenly a very large part of her could not help but wonder why the hell not. I know it's not something you can just give me an answer to on the spot, Naruto continued as he pulled up her hands and brushed her knuckles with a gentle kiss from his lips, unknowingly fanning the desire building up in the young woman rooted to her chair. Why don't you take some time to think about it and we can talk about it again later, okay? Still not trusting herself to form words, Ino simply nodded once and got up from her seat before she fled from Naruto's kitchen. Sakura blew out a sigh of resignation as she finished lecturing the senior man sitting contritely on the paper-covered patient bed about the necessity of taking his medication on time. Honestly, sometimes she wondered what people were thinking. The labels on the pill bottles handed to him a week before when he came in for pneumonia were as clear as instructions could be. Take 2 tablets together after every meal. How anyone managed to forget such simple directions when their own life was at risk was truly astounding. After finally relenting in her gentle scolding of the embarrassed elder, she shooed him out with another reminder not to forget to take his medication if he didn't want to have his upper respiratory infection to have a sudden relapse. Scratching away with her pen on the patient form the date and reasons for the visit. She completed the 6 pages of micro font with the ease of someone who had done it hundreds of times before, making sure the room was as neat as she had found it for the next doctor. She headed back out into the hallway, exchanging a greeting and an eye roll with another doctor who had given her a knowing look. It hadn't been the man's first return visit, and Sakura was willing to bet her month's hospital salary it wouldn't be his last. The pink-haired teenager weaved through the number of patients and hospital staff, making a beeline for the sign-in station. There she filed away her paperwork under her patient's rather extensive file, and made a note in the computer along with the physical copies being archived away. Hard at work, Sakura-chan, chided the kindly matron who was the head nurse of the entire Konoha hospital, a rather prestigious position. A young girl like you should take more time off to have fun with her friends. Sakura laughed as she brushed a stray pink lock from her face and behind her ear. The older woman routinely admonished her for her diligent work habits, but the kunoichi knew the other woman did so in jest. I have plenty of fun with my friends, Masiaki-san. In fact, it's our girls' night out tonight. The older woman clucked her tongue in a reproving fashion, spinning in her wheelie chair so that she could glare playfully at the younger girl. Oh, that's all good, Sakura-chan. But I am talking about the sort of fun that involves boys your age. What about that young man who's always visiting you at work? There's a strapping young lad. I would have jumped in an instant if I was 10 years younger. Color flooded Sakura's cheeks as she looked determinedly anywhere but at the nurse. Masiaki-san, she exclaimed, scandalized, you're married. Well, that makes it more fun, doesn't it? Asked the other woman with a cheeky grin. Though in all seriousness, why haven't you thrown the poor boy a bone? Does he have a woman already? Naruto-kun is a teammate, and just a friend, growled Sakura firmly, even as her belly did a small familiar flop as it was so often prone to doing whenever her thoughts strayed to the blonde as of late. Naruto-kun. Huffing out in annoyance at the teasing, Sakura snorted and tossed her hair back imperiously. Yes, Masiaki-san, a friend. Chuckling, the older woman raised her hands up in surrender and turned back to her own pile of paperwork, waiting for attention. If you say so, Sakura-chan. But don't stay in denial too long. A boy like that will be snapped up very quickly by other women if you're not careful. Heat still burning her cheeks, Sakura left the information desk. Uncertain as to why her colleague's last statement had left a sinking feeling in her gut. Stewing slightly in her own emotions, she made a beeline for the general admissions desk where she was scheduled to spend her last 4 hours administering to the basic requests of patients who didn't necessarily require an in-depth session to determine their needs. While usually a duty fulfilled by nurses, there was always a doctor on hand to serve as a reference point for when more information or attention was necessary, though given how busy it was, the doctor on call usually ended up working alongside the nurses. Making her way across the hospital, Sakura had the time to really reflect on her relationship with her remaining teammate. It had been more than half a year since Naruto had returned from his training trip with Jiraiya, and in that time their friendship had strengthened well beyond anything they had before he left. Sakura had been surprised by how much she had missed the goofball while he had been away. Naruto had always had a way of cheering her up at just the right moment with his bright and admittedly often very loud personality, something she sorely missed over the past 3 years. She had kept her focus on her studies, but more than once she had wished her blonde-haired teammate had been around. His return had heralded a much more quiet though no less positive personality change and a deeper maturity than most people had thought him possible. And when Sakura could put aside fighting the butterflies in her own stomach long enough to be objective about it, then yes, even she could see how much more handsome the blonde had become. Gone was the baby fat, replaced by lean hard muscle that rippled subtly beneath his clothing regardless of what he was wearing, and a face that had left behind childhood in favor of a more masculine overtone. The shorter-than-average blonde had shot up into a broad-shouldered male whose height and width was only matched by Kiba out of all the men in their graduating year. Sakura was still getting used to having to look up when talking to her teammate. There was also a certain hardness in his eyes that hadn't been present before. The way he carried himself screamed of a change she couldn't quite put her finger on, but when their eyes did meet she often felt a shiver down her spine. She still wasn't sure if it was a good one. Arriving at the station, Sakura was so lost in her thoughts that she ran headlong into the nurse leaving her shift. Being a kunoichi, Sakura easily regained her balance, but the other woman was not so skilled and tumbled to the floor with a squeak of fright. Fuchio-san. I am so sorry, exclaimed Sakura as she reached down to help the other nurse. I should have been paying more attention to where I was going. Are you alright? Mito Fuchio was only a year or two older than Sakura herself, but boasted a bust line that could have rivaled Tsunade's. Something that Sakura was secretly rather envious of. Coupled with an almost inhuman hourglass-shaped figure and a face that would not have looked out of place on a magazine cover, it was no secret why she was the favorite nurse amongst the male patients at the hospital. With that sort of a body, it would have been no surprise if the other female staff would dislike her simply for that, but she had such a sweet, disarming personality that even the most grudge-prone individual would have trouble disliking her. Oh, Sakura-san. I didn't see you there, she laughed as she regained her feet with Sakura's help. I am alright, just a bit of a fright from out little bump in there. The other girl's laugh was infectious and Sakura found herself giggling as well. Are you off your shift soon, Fuchio-san? Oh please, Sakura-san, no need to be so formal, call me Mito. In fact, I am off as soon as I sign out. Smiling at the other nurse who had her clipboard clutched to her rather voluptuous chest, Sakura gave a polite bow. Of course, Mito-san, I hope you have a nice afternoon. Sakura-san, I had a question I was hoping you could answer. Sakura looked on with curious eyes as the other woman seemed to suddenly take on a bashful posture, hooking her hands behind her back and looking down on the ground. How can I help you, Mito-san? The kunoichi asked encouragingly. Unlike shinobi, civilians she found often had to be prompted when they mean to ask for something. You were teammates with Naruto-kun, correct? Fighting the sudden unease that had filled her form, Sakura nodded slowly in affirmation. Is he single? The rather blunt and unexpected question left Sakura's mouth hanging slightly as Mito continued avoiding her gaze, a hint of pink flooding her cheeks. What? Spluttered Sakura incoherently. You Naruto, huh? The chesty nurse bit her lip and turned sad eyes up to look at the kunoichi. It's hard for me to find an honest man, harder still to find one who can speak to me while looking me in the eyes rather than, well, elsewhere. I've had chance to talk with Naruto-kun a few times while he visited you here, and I'd like the chance to get to know him better if there isn't a woman in his life already. Sincere though the words were, there was a hint of a challenging look in her eyes that Sakura couldn't quite place. Of course that didn't stop her hackles from rising slightly, ruthlessly crushing the sudden surge of aggression. Sakura mentally shook her head to get her bearings. Well, she said hesitantly, as far as I know he's single. The worried expression on Mita's face brightened up like a ray of sunshine through rain clouds. Smiling happily, the other girl bowed to Sakura with an exclamation of thanks before heading off with a wave of her hand, humming softly as she left. Sakura stood there watching the other woman's retreating back, trying desperately to relax the clenched fist her free hand had unconsciously formed. Breathing out a disbelieving sigh, Sakura decided to put the event behind her, cataloging her reaction to the unexpected news of her colleague's attraction to her teammate to be sorted through and examined at a later time. Marching into the desk station, Sakura penned in her name and time at the sign-in board, giving a nod of greeting to the other hospital worker before snatching up the next client form. The name on the top of the paper caused her eyebrows to shoot up as she recognized her longtime rival's untidy scrawl even without the need to see Ino Yamanaka in the name box. Flipping through the pages of personal information that was standard for all patients to fill out, she got to the point of the reason for the visit. Sakura's jaws dropped again as she saw the paperwork signed with Ino's unmistakable signature for the morning after pill. Ino. Her normally neutral announcer voice when calling out the next patient's name came out more as a disbelieving cry that startled most the patients in the waiting room into looking at the pink-haired kunoichi. Barely noticing the reproachful look her superior was giving her, Sakura spotted her blonde friend in the crowd as the other kunoichi had looked up at the call of her name. Ino for her part had taken one look at Sakura before uttering an audible groan and dropping her head into her hands before standing up and closing in on her friend at the desk. Ino. Sakura hissed in a much lower voice once her friend was closer. What the hell? Morning after pill. Who did you? The blonde kunoichi whose casual strut up to the station had attracted more than one stray eye to her shapely behind groaned again. Look, it's a long story. I'll tell you guys tonight when we get together, alright? I need your opinions on something anyways. Shaking her head in disbelief, Sakura hurriedly grabbed the proper medication, double-checking the dosage label before popping out 2 of the green pills and handing it to her friend along with a paper cup filled to the brim with water. What happened to waiting for the right man? Sakura demanded. You weren't dating anyone last I checked. The blonde tossed back the pills with a gulp of the water and winced at the way the medication rattled in her esophagus on the way down, washing away her discomfort with the remaining water. Well, obviously that went out the window, grumbled Ino as she crushed the paper cup and tossing it in a nearby wastebasket. Throwing her long blonde hair back over her shoulder, Ino leaned down onto the desk station with her hands pressed up against her temples. What am I going to do? She groaned. You did use protection, didn't you? Demanded Sakura with probing eyes. These morning after pills aren't 100% effective. Oh yeah, mumbled Ino, still facing down at the wooden surface. Believe me, he used protection all right, quite a few in fact. Blushing slightly at the rather uncomfortable topic, Sakura wasn't sure whether to comfort her friend or slap some sense into her. Ino who? Look, I don't want to have to tell this story more than once, grumbled Ino as she finally looked back up. We're still on for Amichis tonight at 9 with the girls, right? Nodding dumbly, Sakura could only watch through numb eyes as her friend walked out of the room, shoulders weighed down heavily by the events that were no doubt plaguing her. Suddenly her own fluctuating feelings on her teammates seemed like a small problem in comparison. Amichis was a popular hangout for young shinobi who weren't quite elite enough to get into the Junin and Anbu exclusive bars, but were skilled enough to be recognized as the next up-and-coming generation of ninja who would one day rise to protect their village. The atmosphere to the bar was warm if not a bit dark, but then people of their profession tended to like it darker than most. The soft ambient background music was just loud enough to be soothing, but not so loud that it was distracting, a simple noise to be tuned out by the patrons that frequented the popular watering hole, but it did its job of masking away conversations to make eavesdropping more difficult. There were dozens of tables that were scattered across the center of the relatively large room, strategically placed so that no one group had to feel completely exposed to another thanks to some handy wooden dividers. Lined up along the walls was the bar table with dozens upon dozens of stools for those who wished to drink away their misery alone. the racks furthest against the wall filled with rows upon rows of alcoholic beverages of all sorts from across the continent. The slow-moving ceiling fans often were not enough to help push the humidity caused by the large crowds of shinobi who frequented Amichis at night, but nobody seemed to particularly mind the slight discomfort. For those who did, the company of friends was enough to divert them from the small distraction. There was a stairwell that led up to a partial second floor. Where the center tiles should have been there were none. Cut out so that the ground level was exposed, along the walls of the second floor was a small walkway that heralded a dozen or so shinobi leaning up against the railings having a smoke and observing the crowd milling below, but of interest to most was the number of closed doors that led to the more private rooms clients could rent out should they feel a need for more solitude and could afford the expensive hourly fees in exchange for their privacy. Room 4C was one that was frequented by many shinobi, though perhaps none as often as its current inhabitants, though their group was not as of yet complete. Just having Tenten, Temari and Hinata in the enclosed space was enough to produce a noise level most associated with an out-of-control party, the funny thing being that the alcohol had yet to be touched. Seriously, Hinata? Jeered Tenten, you've been dating the poor boy for almost 2 years now. You really should put out and reward him for his efforts. The red-faced Hyuga heiress poked her forefingers together in a rapid beat, a habit she had yet to break when she was nervous or faced with a particularly distressing situation that didn't involve life-threatening circumstances. And not every relationship has to be about sex Ten-chan, admonished the lavender-eyed girl. It had been a surprise to everyone when shy Hinata, who had a painfully obvious crush the size of the Hokage monument on their resident blonde knucklehead, had gone and agreed to go out with Choji of all people. More surprising was perhaps the fact that 2 years later the two were quite happily going steady to the approval of both their clans. Is that what he tells you? Teased the kunoichi hailing from Suna with a leer, cause that's not what he's thinking with the way you look. Hinata gave a squeak of distress as she folded her arms across her rather ample chest. Out of all the girls of their group, Hinata had always had the distinct lead in body shape. Over the years that lead had just simply widened to the point where the desire of overtaking her had changed to hopes of simply getting anywhere near her, while the heiress tried desperately to hide her womanly shape behind baggy clothing and even resorted to wearing a parka in the middle of summer. There was just no hiding her definition, or as Kiba often put it, Kami didn't grace her with such a figure to be hidden. Seriously, Hinata-chan, you should just let the poor boy have a taste. Maybe then he'll find an appetite for something other than food. Ha Avenue, let him ha Avenue a taste. Hinata shot back defiantly, her face color matching that of a tomato. Both the other occupants of the room sat up straighter at her nervous declaration, eyes alight with interest. Hinata was the only one out of all of them who had a steady boyfriend, yet she remained tight-lipped about anything the couple got up to. A rare opportunity to grill the girl had just unexpectedly presented itself. Oh yeah, when was this? How far did you two go? The two questions came together at the same time and Hinata seemed to wilt under the weight of their words. She opened her mouth to stutter out some defensive reply, but was interrupted with the slamming of the door. The occupants in the room all jumped and turned to stare at the heavily breathing pink-haired apprentice of the Godem Hokage. Her short hair was windswept and disheveled, as if she had been sprinting at high speeds. The light sheen of sweat only added to her appearance of having rushed to get here. Whoa, where's the fire? Demanded Temari. Sakura was the more level-headed one in their group, and anything that had her sprinting her ass off probably meant troubling news. Where's Ino? Panted Sakura as she collapsed onto the space next to Hinata. Did she get here yet? Accepting an offered glass of water from Hinata gratefully, Sakura proceeded to chug it down in one go. Polishing off the water, she stuck the cup back out for another refill. Ino? Asked Tenten, eyeing the pinky curiously. She hasn't gotten here yet. Did something happen? Yes. Shrieked the only girl of Team 7, ignoring her refilled glass. She came in requesting the morning after pill today. Hinata, who had been taking a sip of water from her own cup to calm her nerves after having narrowly escaped her own private interrogation session, sprayed the contents of her mouth out in shock. Temari, having seated herself right across from the heiress, gave a shrieked curse of surprise at the unexpected shower. What the hell? Wah. What? Ha, I knew it. The last triumphant cry came from Tenten, drawing odd stares from the other occupants in the room. The weapon mistress turned her Cheshire grin at her rival from Suna and thrust her palm out, face up. What did I tell you, Temari? Pay up, girl. The fan user groaned and slammed her head on the table with a dull wet thump where skull met wood. God damn it, Ino. She moaned. What are you guys talking about? Demanded Sakura in confusion, her eyes darting between the two women. We had a bet going, elaborated Tenten while making a V sign with her left hand. Whether Miss I am going to stay a virgin until I marry my man will really be able to go through with it. The disciple of Guy prodded the still face down Tamari using her free hand, a gleeful smile adorning her face. Tamari here thought she could do it. I thought she couldn't. We put down an A-rank mission's worth of pay on the line to see who would be right. Guess who's suddenly a whole lot richer? That whore. Growled Tamari as she reached into her purse to pull out the bills needed to honor her bet. Do we know him? Asked a curious Hinata who had finally recovered from the unexpected news. I don't know. Moaned Sakura. She wouldn't say. Shall tell us what happened tonight, she said. Tenten licked her finger and began to gleefully count away at the wad of bills Tamari had forked over, her eyes practically gleaming with greed and satisfaction. Who cares who it was? Grumbled Tamari as she poured herself a saucer of the sake. Normally they waited until everyone was present to begin serving and drinking, but after having just lost about a month's worth of income because of Ino, Tamari wasn't feeling particularly charitable to her fellow blonde. But guys, this was her first time, exclaimed Sakura with worry coloring her tone. She wasn't dating anyone, so it was probably with someone she didn't even really care all that much about. She must be devastated. So she finally boinked a guy, snorted Tenten after pocketing the cash and helping herself to a saucer of alcohol as well. It's nothing that special. If it really was her first time, it probably wasn't even all that fun, especially if the guy was a virgin too. That's not the point. Growled Sakura. There is no point. Tenten shot back with a roll of her eyes. Not everyone thinks sex is special like you rookie 9 girls. It's just an itch that needs scratching, and Ino finally got it scratched. Good for her. Tenten. Hissed Sakura, disapproval fierce in her eyes. Come on Haruno. Grumbled Tamari as she served the remaining 2 girls. The kunoichi from Suna tended to revert to surnames when she was annoyed with people. I am the one who's from the prudish society that frowns on anything even remotely sexual in nature, and I am telling you, it's not that big of a deal. It's not that simple, insisted Sakura with an angry shake of her head. The pink-haired girl glared around the table, but only saw defiance from the older girls and a desperate avoidance of eye contact from Hinata. She opened her mouth to reiterate the point that the psychological consequences for Ino might be much harder to brush off than for Tamari and Tenten, who had a much more casual approach to the act of copulation. But before the words could properly formulate and leave her mouth, the doorway slid open once more to reveal the rather disheveled-looking girl they had been discussing. The normally fashion-conscious Yamanaka was wearing clothing that was slightly rumpled-looking, hinting that perhaps she had not changed at all, and her hair, while brushed, did not have its usual glossy sheen. Cheers to popping your cherry. Toasted Tenten, getting an eye roll from Ino as she sealed the entryway. Geez, tell the world, why don't you? The Yamanka growled as she took a seat closest to the door. And pour me a damn drink, will you? Hinata carefully filled her friend's saucer of sake and handed it over to the blonde, who promptly knocked it back in one shot. So who was it? Demanded Tenten eagerly with an impish glint in her eyes. Anyone we know. Tenten. Shouted Sakura with a glare. That's enough. Ino, don't listen to her. You don't need to tell us anything. We're here for you. The blonde in question mumbled something under her breath and waggled her empty saucer at Hinata. There was a slightly distant look in her eyes that made the girls share a glance of worry. Hey Ino, said the weapons mistress carefully, it was consented, right? Both Hinata and Sakura gasped as they looked at their friend in horror, and even Tamari had pulled herself out of her funk over losing money enough to cast a concerned gaze at the younger blonde. Yeah. Ino said after a lengthy pause. We were both drunk out of our minds, but yeah, it was consented on my part. The tension left the room somewhat, though not entirely, given the mood Ino was still in. So what's wrong, Ino? Asked Tamari. He bad in bed or something? The other girls all watched with interest as Ino blushed profusely and stuttered out something that couldn't be understood. After a few moments the Yamanaka gave up and snatched the bottle of sake from Hinata to give herself a refill, avoiding looking anyone in the eye. Well, drawled Tenten with a grin, that answers that. So what's cutting you up, blondie? Again Ino mumbled something incoherent, and the other girls exchanged confused looks. Come again. Said Sakura. I said he wants to try for a real relationship, grounded out Ino with a heavy glare at her sake saucer as if the poor cup was the source of all her frustrations. Oh, ats a good tea-ing, right? Asked Hinata hopefully. Given Ino's sour expression, it obviously was not, but someone had to be the optimist and Hinata was the least likely to get slapped down for it. Yes. No. I don't know, groaned Ino, burying her face in her arms. That's what's got me so confused. I mean, I know the guy, but I've never really thought of him that way before. He's a sweet guy, but just never to me. I don't know, I don't like him, but I could like him, and he seems to like me. Maybe I want to like him. Or maybe that's the great sex talking. I don't know. This is all his fault. ARRGH. It seems once she started talking, Ino broke down into an incoherent mess of words that gave away all her inner turmoil. It was a good thing they had rented out their own room. Having Ino scream and pull at her own hair probably would have gotten them thrown out eventually. The only questions would have been whether the Anbu with the straitjacket would come before or after they were booted out of the building. Wait, so if you know him, does that mean we know him? Asked Temari slowly. Is it Shika? Cut in Tenten eagerly. That question earned her a glare and a kick under the table from a scowling Temari. The Sand Kunoichi's budding relationship with the shadow user was best described as lukewarm, though that didn't stop the blonde from being aggressive towards any woman showing an interest in the younger man. What? Asked Ino with a look of slight disgust. You know, Shika's like a brother to me, we grew up together. Yeah, so? Asked Tenten. Not all of us are open to the thought of sleeping with our teammates, grounded out Sakura with a frosty glare at the bun-haired girl. It was common knowledge that Team 9 was closer than most, close as in the three members had decided that shared bedroom activity was a good team building exercise. No one wanted to know more beyond that. In fact, probably even that little tidbit should be considered TMI. Tenten shrugged dismissively. Well, you don't know what you're missing out on. So who is it? Probed Hinata gently. Naruto. There was a collective pause as the room fell into stunned silence. In the momentary stillness, the single ceiling fan in the room buffeting air with its dull wooden blades seemed unnaturally loud. What? The collective echoing cry was loud enough that even the outside noise seemed to pause for a moment. No doubt the people downstairs had been distracted by the synchronized screech from room 4C, the supposedly soundproof room. Tenten was practically rolling on the floor with hysterical laughter, tears leaking down the side of her face while she pointed a finger at Ino while gasping out random words or phrases that really wasn't intelligible in any way. Temari had both her eyebrows up so far towards her hairline she resembled her youngest brother's features as she glanced pensively at her fellow blonde. But most surprising was Hinata, who didn't seem too upset about the discovery that her friend had slept with her former crush. The pink hair girl of the group had fallen silent, her eyes unmoving as she stared down at the table, soft words breaking past her lips that was too low for the rest to be heard. I know, moaned Ino. Look, don't touch, but damn if I didn't touch. Downing another saucer of the belly-warming liquid, Ino turned an apologetic look to Hinata. I am so sorry, Hinata. I swear to Kami I had no idea what I was doing at the time. Can you ever forgive me? The voluptuous heiress simply gave her friend a sad smile of reassurance. It's all right, Ino-chan. I've gotten over the fact court that Naruto-kun and I will never be anything more than friends. I have Choji now. Tenten finally managed to regain her seat at the table and had wiped the last of the tears that had streamed down her face. So tell me, Ino-chan, how big was he? Oh my god, Tenten! Shrieked Sakura even as Ino flushed a deeper red. I do not need to hear this. Temari chuckled at the flustered blonde from Konoha. He really is hung like a horse, isn't he? Whoa, wait, hold up, shouted Tenten as she made a crossed X shape with her arms. And how in the hell would you know about the horse-like quality of Naruto's cock? Temari gave a nonchalant shrug as she took another sip of her saucer. Naruto and I had a brief fling when he and Jiraiya swung by Suna. Wait, what? Shouted Sakura and Ino together in stereo. A fling? Demanded Tenten. When the hell was this and how long did you two go out for? Hell, why did you two even go out for? I didn't even know you had an interest in him. I was the former Cage's daughter, and the current one's sister. You know, the guy who just a few years back were regarded as a homicidal maniac who murdered people on a whim. That kinda relation isn't exactly stellar for a girl's love life. Naruto's the only one who didn't give two craps about my background and about the only guy who would stand up to Gaara when it came down to it. Hell yeah, I jumped him. You're lying. Accused Tenten, yanking our chain. There is no way in hell you and Naruto had gotten together. I refuse to believe that. The Suna noble gave an uncaring shrug. Believe what you will, though tell me, Ino, does this look familiar? Temari pulled up the end of her tight black figure hugging shorts, peeling the clingy material until her creamy thigh was exposed to the air. On the inside, half an inch away from the delicate folds of her maidenhood, was a small unobtrusive tattoo of a raccoon, stylized in a cartoonish fashion. Ino dropped her head back into her arms with a groan after staring in disbelief. What the hell does she mean, Ino? Demanded Tenten. Naruto's got a matching one on his thigh, mumbled the face-down blonde. Does Gaara know? Demanded Sakura. Temari smirked. He found out eventually. Last I checked, Naruto and Gaara are still practically best friends, said Tenten slowly. The Kunoichi from Suna laughed. Well, Gaara approved. I think he was severely disappointed when it turned out neither of us had a long-term relationship in mind. Don't think he would have minded having Naruto as a brother-in-law. Here the older Kunoichi broke out into a wistful sigh as she conjured up an image of the current Naruto in her mind's eye. Maybe I was being a bit short-sighted. Tenten finally shook off her disbelief with a throaty chuckle. Well, seems little Naru-chan's quite the man. With 2 endorsements like that, I wouldn't mind taking him out for a ride. Too bad it seems he has a thing for blondes. Looks like we never stood a chance. Hinata, who had remained mostly quiet so far, turned and glared at her friend rebelliously. He's not just into blondes. It took a moment for what the shy girl in their group had mumbled to fully sink in. No, stuttered Sakura as both blondes in the group gaped at their pale-eyed friend. No, just no, no friggin' way. When? What the hell is this? Complained Tenten with a scowl. I thought I was supposed to be the slut in the group? You know, slept with both my teammates? Hinata, cried a disbelieving Ino, you're been with Choji for 2 years. It was the night before he left, mumbled the raven-haired Hyuga, reverting back into her more shy mode as her courage failed her again. I went to confess to him and my feelings, fearing I would lose him forever otherwise. And he took advantage of you? Demanded Sakura angrily. In her mind she was already preparing to pound her teammate's face in. Best friend or not, she wasn't going to let him getting away with coercing Hinata into giving away her virginity like that. No, replied Hinata with a faraway look. He told me he had always kn no own, but we so old never be together beck cause of what he was. Wait, said Ino slowly, so you knew all the way back then that he held the Kyubi? The shy heiress nodded in affirmative. I understood. Finally he never gave me any hope. Okay. That's nice and all with all the touchy-feely crap, interrupted Tenten impatiently, but how exactly did this lead to you two making the beast with 2 backs? Again the next in line for the leadership of the Hyuga clan flushed a deep red, turning her gaze to avoid eye contact with her friends. I told I am. That if I couldn't avenue him for my Ife, then I would old at least Ike to have him for one night. And of course being the nice guy he is, grumbled Ino with a sarcastic scowl, he agreed. Is that why you won't let Choji go all the way? Don't want to be disappointed? Asked a curious Tamari. Cause I know from personal experience that Naruto sets the bar pretty damn high. Okay, who has not slept with Naruto here? Raise your hand, demanded Tenten. Am I the only one? Sakura, have you slept with him too? No. I just, what the hell, shouted the pinkette, face aghast with emotions. Okay. Now that we've established the fact that Naruto is in fact a man-slut, ground out Ino, that really still doesn't help me answer my question. Now hold up, that's rather unfair, defended Tenten. All we've established is that he's slept with you Tamari and Hinata, all on separate occasions in a 3-year interval. That hardly qualifies him to be a man-slut. Those 3 are the only ones that we know of, muttered Sakura darkly. Who knows how many girls he met during his training trip. Again, not helping, grumbled Ino with a glower at the thought. Seriously though, what the hell should I do? I think you should give him a chance, said Tamari with a shrug. He really is a sweet guy, loyal to a fault, a bit clueless, but a for effort where it counts. Let me know if you don't want him, Ino, said Tenten with mischievous glint in her eyes, cause now you've got me all curious. If you're not riding that bronco I am gonna give a shot at him. Winking at Sakura, Tenten's smile turned evil. Come on Sakura, 3 out of 5 of us have taken him for a ride. What say we make a group experience we can all share about? You and me can go give Ino's boy toy a night he won't forget. Ino glared back at her dark-haired friend, raising her left hand in a silent one-finger salute as a reply, getting a bark of laugh from Tenten even as Sakura shot daggers back with her eyes. I think that Tamari's right, said Hinata, adding her own 2 cents on the matter. What do you think, Sakura? Asked Ino, you've known him the longest. Sakura toyed with her own untouched saucer of sake, staring down into her own reflection in the liquor. A profound sense of sadness radiated from the green eyes that looked back out from the liquid. It was odd really. Back when Naruto had pestered her for a date on a daily basis, she had practically dreamed of a day like this when he would finally get a girlfriend and leave her all alone with Sasuke. Though she had come to think of her blonde teammate as a friend by then, she had nonetheless imagined it as one of the happiest days of her life. Now that the day was here, Sasuke was the furthest thing from her mind. A tight feeling of jealousy burned in her chest at the thought of Ino being with Naruto, stronger than any feeling she had during the days of rivalry with the blonde over the Uchiha. Sasuke had been a thing to have, the newest latest fashionable handbag a girl could drag about to watch the envy ooze from the eyes of other girls. Losing Naruto was a blow straight to the gut that made her want to heave bile. When had Naruto's dating life suddenly mattered so much to her? Sakura? Prompted Ino, warily seeing the stormy expression on her longtime friend's face. I don't know, the Mednon mumbled at last, I really don't. I guess it wouldn't hurt to give it a shot, muttered Ino after a long moment. Besides, it's not like I am in love with the guy. We'd just go out on a few dates, get to know each other a bit more. I bet we're not even all that compatible and it'll fizzle out after a while. Tenten rolled her eyes as she poured the last of the sake. Hello? Horsecock? The Yamanaka flushed and threw her empty saucer at the weapons specialist, who easily dodged with a laugh. Somehow that small action broke the tension that had been hanging over the group like an unpleasant fog. And the festive air that was more common to their get-togethers came back in full force, though they laughed and drank away merrily enough. A certain pink-haired kunoichi couldn't quite put all her heart behind the drunken toasts for long years of happiness between the new blonde couple. There surely would be the sounds of many breaking hearts in the village once it became official, though the tinkle and cracking of one in particular could already be heard. Ino stretched her hands lazily above her head, lacing her manicured fingers together as she worked at the kink on her back, fighting desperately not to give in to the yawn threatening to escape her mouth. She blinked back tears from the effort it took to contain the often unstoppable biological phenomenon. Giving in to mental fatigue, Ino allowed her head to drop dully onto her desk with enough force to cause her to wince. Catching sight of the pink rubbery eraser ending of her pencil in her periphery, Ino snaked out her tongue to draw in the offending stationery into mouth. Absent-mindedly chewing on the eraser, she sent the pencil tip waggling through the air in wild figure 8. After the amusement at her own actions had worn off, the tired teenager allowed her exhausted mind to wander. Working in the IT department was supposed to be interesting and a stimulating challenge for her intellect. When there was an active time-sensitive case going on, that was true, but when there wasn't, she really didn't care that there had been a 0.4% increase in the food requisition orders from Mizu, and she sure as hell didn't care to write a 30-page report speculating on why that might be the case. It wasn't like anyone was going to actually read it. The Hokage clearly didn't. And the monotony wasn't just limited to the paperwork. Even their uniforms reflected the dreariness of their department. Why gray? It countered everything fashionable, and putting that aside, the drab color simply weighed on the mind like concrete anchors, not exactly the type of stimulant you wanted in a workplace that emphasized having an agile mind to analyze data and intelligence reports. A brief glance around showed her fellow floor staff was hardly faring any better. She was seated on one of 20 desks placed in a 5-row by 4-column formation where the majority of the intelligence officers sat to sift through the tons of information gathered by shinobi out in the field. The cookie-cutter workstations were made of solid metal, complete with squeaky drawers on both sides for endless files full of aged papers that hardly ever saw light. The solid mahogany finish for the top of the desks was a nice touch though. A pigment of color in an otherwise dull black and white snapshot of the intelligence and torture department. The IT employees were trapped in an underground facility. A strategic decision made mainly to demoralize prisoners who never got to see anything but the 4 walls of their cell and the hallways leading to their interrogation cells. But what the designers hadn't kept in mind was how the environment would affect the people working there. While they did get to go home after work, unlike the detainees, the majority of their day was still spent facing those same depressing architecture, not exactly motivation for work productivity. While there were no windows to gaze out of, that certainly didn't stop people from zoning off. It was early afternoon, slightly after the lunch hour, one of those warm hazy days that made you want to curl up under the shade of a tree in a park with a good book or perhaps watch the clouds roll by. Most of the staff was still recovering from slight food comas, so it wasn't surprising to see vacant stares aimed at anything but the paperwork. Noticing how a few of her male coworkers had been sneakily sending her glances, Ino frowned and hastily put her arms back down. Being an attractive young woman, Ino was rather partial to being complimented for her beauty through wordless admiration, but that didn't mean she wanted to be ogled like a piece of meat at every turn. There was appreciation for beauty and ogling. She didn't mind the first, but the latter made her hackles rise and her stomach revolt. Idly tapping her pencil against the tabletop, she allowed her mind to continue roaming away from her current assigned task. And as it so often did these past few days, the first thing that came to mind was a certain blonde goofball she had ended up in bed with the weekend prior. It had been an odd week for Ino since she had decided to give Naruto a chance, mainly because she hadn't seen the boy since the morning after they had roused from their night of X-rated activities. Waking up to an epic hangover from her outing with the girls the night before, Ino had cleaned herself up and marched on over to Naruto's house to tell him that she'd be willing to let him take her on one date, just one. When she didn't receive an answer after knocking for a few minutes, she had assumed that he had already left his home, wandering through the few locations he hung out at that she knew of, namely Team 7's training field, Ichiraku ramen stand and the Hokage's tower. She had seen neither hide nor hair of the Jinchuriki. More than a little miffed at his sudden vanishing act, Ino had stormed off to find Sakura to see if she knew where her teammate was, An annoyed and harassed-looking Sakura had informed her that the blonde in question had apparently been appropriated for an A-class mission the night before, something about infiltrating one of the minor shinobi villages in order to retrieve a man Konoha wanted to ask some very pointed questions towards. The disappointment that pooled in the bottom of her stomach was brushed aside hurriedly as she did not want to examine her own feelings on the matter too closely. Instead, Ino had told herself that it was probably a good thing that she wouldn't be seeing him for a while. Time and space would give her a better perspective on what was going on between them. It hadn't exactly worked out like she hoped given her mind's penitence for fixating on the nine-tailed demon's host. A pair of warm hands clapped themselves over Ino's eyes. Startling her out of her sleepy funk, it took a monumental effort to suppress the instinctive response to smash the back of her head against her assailant's nose to disorient them. But she was in friendly territory, so the chances that someone was trying to kill her was pretty low, and binding the eyes would hardly be the first choice for most assassins. If that someone was trying to kill her, the fact that she hadn't sensed anything up until that moment meant they could have left her dead without her even realizing it, plus the warm rough-skinned palms were tantalizingly familiar. Guess who, Ino-chan? The low throaty rumble was akin to a large predatory feline's purr, coupled with the warm breath tickling her ear. The spine-tingling combination sent her pulse racing. A pleasant shudder threatened to escape, making the poor Yamanaka want to squirm in her seat, but she wouldn't allow him to have the satisfaction of getting to her. Let me think about that, she pondered aloud with a sly grin that she knew he couldn't see. Does it happen to be a blonde loudmouth who has a hideous fetish for orange? Oi. It's not a fetish. And orange is awesome, the faceless voice of her captivation protested. The hands left her eyes and instead dropped down to her shoulders, where they began a sensual rhythmic kneading motion that drew a soft moan from the seated young woman. Leaning back in her chair, Ino closed her eyes and allowed her fellow blonde's skillful hands to quickly work away at the kink she had been desperately trying to get rid of. Waves of pleasure rolled through her as her body crooned its approval. Oh, yeah. Right there. Her instructional groans devolved into meaningless sounds of satisfaction as Naruto continued working away at all her sore spots with the attention of a master masseuse. Real kinky, you too. If I closed my eyes I can almost imagine my bedroom a couple of nights ago, cut in a sultry voice, interrupting Ino's blissful moment of distraction. Dark lavender eyes popped open and Ino felt herself flush slightly when she noticed how quite a few of her colleagues were red around the cheeks and desperately trying to avoid looking at the two intimately positioned teenagers. Glaring slightly at the purple-haired woman who was smirking at her, Ino stuck out her tongue childishly at her superior. Real mature response there, Yamanaka, snorted Mitarashi Anko. The snake mistress hadn't changed much since they first met her as Genin. She still sported the tan trench coat along with the semi-transparent fishnet underclothing that left nothing to the imagination. The shadowed form of her nipples was just teasingly out of view, giving the impression of erect buds when the light struck her at the right angle. The only notable difference was that Anko had allowed her hair grow out to shoulder length, something that started back when she first started sleeping regularly with Kakashi. The one-time apprentice of the snake Sanin was a sabotage and assassination specialist. But when she wasn't off killing someone or slipping mercury into a well somewhere, she hung out in the IT department. Of course, she was much too temperamental to be given paperwork, so she spent most her time either intimidating the prisoners for fun or helping Ibiki pour boiling tar on some poor inmate's chest. She didn't have any official rank within the intelligence department as she had never sat through the exams, but she was widely accepted as the unofficial second-in-command in interrogation, the physical aspects of it at any rate. You're just jealous. Kakashi would never give you a massage, shot back an amused Naruto as he continued the circular motions of his thumb on Ino's trapezius. The Mindwalker couldn't help but marvel at the ripples of relaxation that was coursing through her being from that one simple motion. He massages me in other places, sang Anko with a knowing gleam in her eyes. I can teach you if you want, Naruto-chan. Naruto shivered slightly as he crossed his arms protectively over Ino's chest in a slight hug, careful to keep his hands away from anything inappropriate. Yeah, let's not even go there. It's just wrong in so many ways. Why? Asked a genuinely surprised Anko. I am sure Kakashi would be open to that sort of thing. Yeah, well, I am not. Grumbled back the blonde male with another comical shudder, though I have to ask, does he keep his mask on when you two? Anko threw her head back and laughed. Only one way you'll ever find out, little man. Naruto raised his hands in a warding motion. Yeah, not that interested. You get that guy we nabbed all squared away yet? Sure did, Uzumaki. Nice working with you again. If you ever get tired of Blondie here and decide to satisfy your curiosity on how a real woman's like in bed, you know where to find me. Shooting Naruto a sly wink, the purple-haired Kunoichi turned and sashayed away towards the interrogation facilities with a disturbing expression and an odd bounce in her step. She's alright once you get to know her. Naruto parroted with raised eyebrows. She's a fucking nutcake. She is not. Laughed Ino, she just acts that way cause she likes to see people's reaction, it's all a tactic. Right, said Naruto doubtfully as he rubbed at his chin. I guess this is a case of living a lie for so long it becomes the truth. Ignoring her friend's musing, Ino prodded him with her foot. So where have you been? You've been gone all week. Ah, Ino-chan. Did you miss me? Teased the orange-clad male as he wrapped her up in another hug. Yeah, like a yeast infection, shot back Ino while wiggling out of his grip. The loss of warm bodily contact when she finally escaped filled her with a rather surprising amount of regret. Did a snatch and grab of an informant that decided he didn't want to talk anymore out in some new upstart village, grunted Naruto as he leaned up against her desk with his palms resting on the edge of the tabletop. Seems after Sound managed to make it big everyone and their mother thinks they can set up a hidden village. Hell, I probably could have wiped them off the map by myself. Laughing at the annoyed expression on her classmate's face, Ino poked a finger against his stomach, marveling internally at how hard it was. Someone did their sit-ups. Yeah, well, we don't all have an endless source of chakra stuck in our stomach now, do we? She asked rhetorically. Scoffing, the container for the Kyuubi turned Ino around in her wheelie chair and went right back to work on her shoulders much to her approval. So Ino, began Naruto with a tentative look on his face, you've given what we talked about more thought? The Yamanaka heir hummed lowly while smirking devilishly at her fellow blonde's apprehension. She really should make him suffer after running off on her after she had finally made up her mind and causing her to wait, but she was a nice person, plus that massage at the moment made up for everything. Well, she drawled imperiously, I've decided that because I don't have much else going on that I'll give you a chance to blow your money on me. I mean, who in their right mind wouldn't want to? One day you can tell your grandkids you managed to get a date with the Ino Yamanaka once upon a time. Naruto tossed his head back and gave a rich throaty laugh, earning him more than one dreamy looks from the women seated behind Ino. Well, aren't you generous, Ino? How about tonight? You got any plans? Startled slightly at the quick response, Ino grabbed the end of her ponytail and fiddled with the tips of her long hair. The butterflies had returned, turning her stomach into a lottery raffle cage filled with bouncy balls. She hadn't quite expected being asked out so soon, and in front of her coworkers no less. Glancing up, she didn't see a hint of mortification on her fellow blonde's face after having so openly propositioning her in front of an audience. Tonight? Well, yeah, I am not doing anything else after work, I suppose, she said cautiously. Great. When do you get off? At 6, but I am not going out dressed like this, Ino protested while gesturing down at the drab gray uniform that had zero sex appeal. Wouldn't dream of it, though I can't think of anything you wouldn't look good in, Ino-chan. The offhand compliment caused heat to flood her cheeks and the girl silently cursed her body. What the hell was wrong with her? Was she coming down with a fever? If only she could sink into the floor at will, there was probably a jutsu for that. Why don't I come pick you up at 7 o'clock? That should give you some time to freshen up and change. Do you want to risk running into daddy? Asked Ino with raised eyebrows. Most boys who had asked her out steered as far away from her home as possible, opting to meet her out at an agreed-upon location rather than risk coming within 100 meters of her mind-reading father. Well, there's only one thing I need to hide, chuckled Naruto with a wink. Ino burned crimson at the blatant reminder of what had taken place between them. That was definitely something she didn't want her father to accidentally stumble upon. She wouldn't be surprised if the man decided to do a brief cursory scan of any boy that walked within a meter of her to make sure they had pure intentions, let alone one she brought home. Good thing Daddy doesn't have any heart issues, she thought. She may have been known as the village gossip, but she certainly hadn't learned that habit from her mother, a rather quiet and reserved woman. No, there was no doubt that her father was very much aware of Naruto's recently elevated status from village pariah to low-town bad boy. The question was how close the poor boy could get to the Yamanaka household before killing intent began pouring out of the house. Plus, I think it'd be scarier for you guys than me if you decided to go for a stroll in my mind. Naruto jabbed a thumb at his navel and Ino nodded in understanding after a moment. Yeah. Anyone who tried to infiltrate Naruto's mind would probably find themselves worrying about something much nastier than having to dig through some buried memories. Some people had natural mental defenses. Naruto had a soul-eating demon guarding his mind. If anyone could survive meeting her overprotective mind-reading father with their sanity intact, it would probably be Naruto. So 7 o'clock? He asked hopefully. Ino bit her lip as she imagined her parents meeting Naruto. Not that he was a bad guy or anything. It was just that she had never brought a boy home before. She had a fair idea on how her father might act, and her mother, the woman, would probably be shooting Ino silently insufferable knowing looks for weeks after meeting Naruto. Well, nothing ventured, nothing gained, right? Plus it was one date, and it might be fun to watch her father make Naruto squirm a little. That would be her vengeance towards him for deflowering her while she had been hammered. Yeah, sure, that sounds good, she replied with a wicked smirk. What will we be doing? Tutted Naruto, wagging a finger in her face. That would be telling. Oh come on, she whined. How am I supposed to know what to wear? Didn't I tell you? Replied Naruto softly as he took up one of her hands in his. You'd look good in anything. Coloring at his compliment, Ino pouted as he gave her knuckles a brief brush against his rough lips before getting up to leave. Seriously Naruto. What should I wear? She shouted at his retreating back. Laughing and waving goodbye without turning, he yelled back, something nice, we should probably look the part where we're going. Watching her fellow blonde vanish around the corner, the Yamanaka folded her arms across her generously developed chest and grumbled about bakas in orange. Something nice, he says. HMMPH, does he even have anything that qualifies? She grumbled uncharitably. Turning back, she noticed several jealous looks she was receiving from the other kunoichi and one of the shinobi seated at their desks. Rolling her eyes, she turned back to the pile of paperwork that seemed to have grown in size while she had been preoccupied with Naruto. Getting back to it, she couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. Somehow the dreary work suddenly didn't seem so bad now that she had plans for the evening. Mio Yamanaka stood at the entrance to her daughter's room, watching on in bemusement as her only offspring hovering before the bed in her undergarments. While her daughter was rather well acquainted with the latest fashion trends that seemed to take off in a different direction every other season or so, the girl was rarely seen spending much time being indecisive on what to actually wear. It wasn't just pride as a mother speaking when Mio said that her daughter looked good in just about anything. Ino was giving herself a hard stare in front of the full-length mirror situated in the room, frowning at the slightly haggard appearance of her reflection. Spending all day underground was not good for her complexion. Black or blue? The younger girl directed the question at her mother, who was still observing her daughter amusedly from the shadow of the doorway. Well, that depends, Ino-chan. Are you going out with a friend tonight or trying to bring a man home? Chuckling at scandalized expression reflected in the mirror, the older Yamanaka stepped up behind her daughter to peer at the two outfits that was the source of conflict. One was a stylish floor-sweeping open-backed evening gown that was a brilliant sapphire. The delicate fabric was dotted with sparkling gems at the chest, showing off just enough cleavage to entice, but not so much as to scream for attention. The blue material seemed to thin out in layers as it went down the body until it was practically transparent at the legs, allowing a bit of skin to show behind the translucent cloth. The fine silky garment would not have looked out of place in the court of the feudal lord. The second choice was a body-hugging black cut that accentuated every tantalizing womanly curve. The soft silk-like material managed to hide everything and nothing at the same time. The elastic fabric allowed for not a single scrap of cloth to hang, as it would mold tightly to the contour of the wearer. It was the perfect illustration of the phrase, little black dress, and left nothing to the imagination. The stylish black dress was cut off right before the knees, showing plenty of leg, but falling just short of being appalling. The designer managed to skillfully turn up the sexiness factor on the chic threads without abusing the skin card. Without a doubt the dress would turn heads and send tongues wagging wherever its owner walked. The matriarch pursed her lips as she considered the two exquisite examples of her daughter's fine taste in fashion, marveling at how quickly her Ino-chan had grown up. On one hand, she wanted her daughter to be safe and not send off the wrong signal to the boy that was taking her out tonight, but at the same time Mio herself was a woman and understood all too well her young daughter's desire to flaunt her feminine qualities in order to attract the attention of a man. The internal struggle between mother and woman swirled like a storm, but after a long pause Mio came to her decision. You said he's coming to pick you up tonight? The older woman asked her daughter curiously. Ino was no stranger to dating, but she had never brought a boy over to their house before. No doubt her husband's fearsome reputation as a mind reader working in IT, well known for their liberal dispensing of torture, had something to do with that. Yeah, he said he'd be coming by around 7 o'clock. Ino glanced at her clock and bit her lip nervously when she saw that it was 5 minutes away from the appointed time. Mio pulled up the dark dress and gave it an appraising once over. Well, I think if the boy is brave enough to come face your father, then he deserves a little something special, hum? Ino stared pensively at the dark dress, weighing the pros and cons of donning the more provocative outfit. On one hand, she would look extremely nice and more than likely blow poor Naruto's mind out of the water. His reaction alone would be worth it, but was that what she wanted to do? She had bought that dress because it had looked stunning on her. However, Ino had never had a chance to wear it before, since she had never wanted to gain the kind of attention that dress would bring. This wasn't just a cocktail party dress. It was an open invitation to try to take me home so you can remove it kind of dress. Well, no point in buying it if I was never going to wear it, she thought sheepishly. Taking the midnight-hued dress from her mother, she quickly slipped into the material, reveling in the gentle caress of the wispy silken fabric against her skin. The cool glossy material raised goosebumps where textile touched skin, but she looked undeniably striking, the dark contrast bringing out her hair and eyes. As she pulled on the black 4-inch stilettos bought specifically for the outfit, her mother walked up behind her and began to carefully coil her long blonde hair up. Straightening, the younger Yamanaka watched her mother work away at her hair in the mirror, skillfully weaving the long strands into a beautiful work of art complete with a pair of silver chopsticks engraved with miniature dragon carvings. It had been years since her mother had helped her put her hair up. Once Ino had been accepted into the ninja academy, she had insisted that she was old enough to take care of her own grooming, and her mother had accepted that without a fuss. The blonde girl hadn't realized how much she missed this bonding moment until she was sitting there under her mother's tender ministrations again. "So tell me about this boy. What is he like?" "He's an idiot," Ino blurted out immediately before she could even really think about it. Her mother laughed at her response, casting a critical eye at her daughter's reflection before making micro-adjustments here and there. "All men are idiots, Ino-chan," she responded absent-mindedly. "What's his name?" "Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto." Ino didn't miss the momentary pause in her mother's hands, but the older woman continued on without comment, leaving Ino to stew in her own thoughts. "Like I said, he's an idiot, an attention-seeking loudmouth who was dead last in our graduating year." Ino paused as she reflected on what she knew about him. "I guess that's who he was anyways. A couple of years ago he left with Jiraiya-sama and trained with him for 3 years. He came back a year ago, but he's different now, more reserved and thoughtful." "Sounds like he grew up," commented the older woman thoughtfully as she turned to eye her daughter's makeup kit. "I guess. It's weird though, he used to be all dead set on Sakura, but out of the blue he decides to ask me out," said Ino with a frown. Well, maybe not entirely out of the blue given what had taken place the night before he had expressed his interest in her. Ino still didn't know how to feel about the 180 her fellow blonde had done. He had been gone for the better part of 3 years, and since his return no one had seen him pester Sakura for a date, but given the amount of time those two spent together, people had simply assumed they had quietly gotten together and wasn't too keen on letting others know about it. It wasn't so uncommon in their field of work. Loved ones were a weakness that could be used against a shinobi. "Sakura-chan?" inquired Mio in surprise. You two seem to always cross paths in your love interests." The young mink walker felt her face flush slightly at her mother's observation. "He's not a love interest. We're just going out 'cause I didn't have any other plans." After a night of fantastic sex, she added silently with an internal wince. "Oh, is that why you were agonizing over what to wear?" teased the clan matriarch. "Because the last few times you went out with a boy you just threw on the first thing you grabbed from the closet, if I remember right." Ino looked away, embarrassed that her mother had noticed. It was true that she had probably spent more time worrying about her appearance for this one night than all the other ones she'd been on combined. For her prior dates she had the unshakable belief that she would look good in anything she put on. Hell, they should be thankful for her presence, let alone judge her for her appearance. But for tonight Ino didn't want to just look good, she wanted to look fantastic. Why that was the case she was still puzzling through in her head. Mother and daughter fell silent as Mio carefully applied a minimal amount of makeup to Ino's face. The blonde girl had never particularly cared for using makeup, but she kept some in her room for those rare occasions where she did need a brief touch-up in appearance. Those occasions were rare and far between. A light touch of foundation, followed by some eyeliner and a light application of lip gloss was all that was needed. "Perfect. I don't think that poor boy will be able to keep his eyes off you tonight, Ino-chan," said Mio in a self-satisfied manner. Turning to examine her reflection, Ino couldn't disagree. She looked damn hot if she had to say so herself. Picking up the black purse where she kept some money and identification, Ino twirled once in front of the mirror to make sure nothing was out of place. Nodding in satisfaction, the kunoichi proceeded to slip a few blades into areas where they would not be too noticeable. Not that she was afraid that Naruto was going to try anything that would require her to defend herself, but it was just good practice to always be armed. Smiling at her mother's approving look, she drew a breath and prepared to head downstairs where no doubt her father was busy burning a hole into Naruto's head for daring to even set foot into the house, let alone take out his little princess. Her mother's hand on her shoulder stopped her descent and she turned a curious look to the woman's rather serious face. "Ino-chan, do you have some condoms in your purse?" The blonde bombshell felt her jaw drop as she stared back at her mother in disbelief, uncertain if she had heard correctly. What? Why would I need that?" Ino spluttered with heat blossoming on her cheeks. "I've seen that boy," laughed Mio with sly knowing gleam in her eyes. "A strapping young lad like that isn't in demand for his ability to spout poetry. You're a grown woman who can make her own decisions, regardless of what your father might believe. If you do decide to stay for the night with Naruto-kun, I want you to be safe. Now if you don't have any protection, I'll go get some from my room. Ew mom, I did not need to know that, yelled Ino, the volume of her voice fueled by mortification, and that is not happening between me and Naruto. Again, she amended guiltily, her mother raised both hands up in an appeasing manner to calm her daughter. Well, you're a smart girl, Ino-chan. I just want you to be happy. Though take some advice from your mother. I would make my decision on whether you like him or not quickly. A man like that won't be on the market for long. Attraction is a funny thing. When you have it you might not care for it, but when you lose it you suddenly crave it. Sakura-chan might change her mind about Naruto-kun if you remain indecisive for too long. Ignoring the way her heart had plummeted into her stomach at the mention of Sakura, Ino rolled her eyes at her mother. Hell, if Sakura wants to take this headache out of my hands, I'd gift wrap him with a bow tie for her, she grumbled half-heartedly. Shaking her head with an amused smile, the older woman shook her head and ushered her daughter towards the stairwell to their two-storied home. Whatever you say, Ino-chan, let's go meet that man of yours before your father figures out where he wants to hide the body. The two women descended into the living room expecting to find a frigid atmosphere with a glaring Inoichi and cowering Naruto set apart as far as physically possible. Instead, what they found was the two men conversing inaudibly about something in the kitchen area, two bottles of beer opened before them. Naruto was saying something while repeatedly making a triangle figure with his hands for some unknown reason as Inoichi looked on intently with an intrigued expression on his face. The two women shared a stupefied look as the Yamanaka clan head burst out into rueful laughter while shaking his head. Clapping his hand onto the younger man's shoulder, Inoichi leaned forward, making a circular motion with his finger while replying back, causing Naruto to crack up as well. Mio steered her befuddled daughter over to the two oblivious men, clearing her throat to get their attention. Inoichi turned and his mouth fell open when he set eyes on his daughter, having rarely seen her dress up for anything. Ino, however, only had eyes for her date for the night. She was pleased to note that Naruto had a stunned expression on his face, as if someone had told him that Ichiraku's ramen was closing down for good. Oh yeah, she thought with an internal fist pump, so worth it. After a moment of muteness, Naruto finally seemed to have found his tongue again. His face morphed into a calm smile before stretching into that irresistible grin of his which set off a similar one on Ino's face as well. Wow, he breathed, eyes lit up. Ino-chan, you look gorgeous. Blushing self-consciously at the blatant honesty in his voice, Ino averted her eyes in embarrassment. She was in for a surprise when he reached behind the counter and pulled up a batch of a dozen white roses with a single red one centered in the beautiful formation. The dark ruby stood out like a beacon against the field of gentle white surrounding it, accentuating the beauty of the single red rose in the skillfully fashioned bouquet. Gasping in delight, Ino took the flowers from him and gave them a brief sniff before handing them over to her mother, who had already retrieved a vase. The analogy he was trying to draw with his offering was not lost on her. It hadn't escaped her mother either from the pleased expression seen on her face. Ino felt herself melt a little on the inside at the wordless compliment he had just handed her. Sometimes the best compliments were the unspoken ones. You didn't buy that from a competitor, did you? She joked even as her happy smile refused to die down. Naruto chuckled and scratched at the back of his head. There's no good answer to that, so I am going to keep quiet. Smart move, she laughed. Thanks for the roses, breaking out of her own internal delight to take in his appearance. Ino couldn't help but marvel at how neatly her fellow blonde cleaned up. She had never seen him outside of his gaudy orange jumpsuits when they were younger, and while he had added a lot more black to his ensemble now that he was older, he was still rarely seen wearing anything but one of his signature orange-trimmed jackets. It was practically his trademark by now, something that was in fact noted in his bingo book entry. For their night out, the blonde had opted to go for a less traditional outfit. Simple slacks ran all the way down his long legs to a pair of expensive-looking dark leather shoes that had been polished meticulously to a fine pearly sheen. A dark sleek suit jacket hung snuggly over his well-built figure, framing a crisp white shirt that he kept casually unbuttoned at the collar to expose just enough flesh to hint at the lithe rippling chest muscle hidden behind the cloth. He had foregone the leaf headband, allowing his naturally spiky blonde hair to flow backwards in a messy but appropriate look given his informal approach to dressing up. The dark green gem that was always on his person hung from his neck like a blinking star, adding to the slight rebellious air about him given his flouting of convention on what was acceptable for formal wear, but she had to admit, he looked damn good doing it. You're welcome. His charming smile was quickly diverted to Mio, who had returned from having put away the roses onto a table kept in the hallway for such displays. And you must be Mio-san. I guess I have you to thank for raising such a lovely daughter? Mio laughed and gave Naruto's shoulder a playful swat. I'd like to think I did most the hard work. Exchanging a quick handshake, the two broke apart as Inoichi cleared his throat. Turning, Naruto gave an apprehensive grin at the stern look he was receiving from the older man. Now I like you, Naruto, began Ino's father steadily, but if I catch even a hint that you're not treating my daughter right, well. The older man trailed off with narrowed eyes before making the signature Yamanaka mind-delving seal. Mio gave him a good whack across the back, dissolving the rather intimidating air he had been putting off when he let out a yelp. Oh, leave him alone, you big brute, scolded the Yamanaka matriarch playfully. Ignore him, Naruto-kun, you and Ino-chan go have fun tonight. The rather murderous look that Inoichi was sending Naruto implied he wanted them to have anything but fun. The older man quickly found himself being pushed out of the living room by his wife, who was telepathically threatening him with a dry spell for the history books if he didn't leave the young couple alone. Pinching the bridge of her nose in humiliation at her parents' antics, Ino opened her eyes again to catch Naruto giving her body a bold unhidden once-over now that her family was no longer present. The Mind Walker smirked as blue orbs finally finished their slow greedy crawl back up to her eyes. So he wasn't entirely a gentleman after all. Well, Ino was aware of that already given some of the unspeakable things he had done to her that still had her blushing a week later. So where are we going? Seeing as you're all dressed up fancy, I am guessing we're not going to Ichiraku's, she snarked, falling into the easy routine of ribbing the former class dunce. The offended look on his face prompted Ino to burst out laughing. Oh come on, Ino-chan, Naruto whined, you didn't really think I'd take you to Ichiraku's, did you? Well, he huffed and crossed his arms, pouting childishly, yeah, well, maybe we will go there. Allowing her giggles to subside, Ino stuck out her tongue mischievously at her fellow blonde. Yeah, well, maybe I'll just stay here then. Snorting, the blonde male stuck his nose up arrogantly and gave a rather impressive sneer back at her, like you could resist me. The two broke down snickering and spent a good minute swallowing back fits of giggles before calming down again. So where are we going? Ino probed curiously as he held the door open for her. To Kyoto, he replied easily while scanning the front porch of her home. Drawing up to a halt at his reply, she gave him an incredulous look. Kyoto was a neighbor city in Fire Country near Konoha, completely run by civilians. Unlike the Leaf Village, due to the lack of military leadership in the city, there was a lot more entertainment and restaurants to be found as it was primarily a tourist attraction. It wasn't a bad place for a date, but the city also happened to be a good hour away even for a shinobi moving at a steady pace. Naruto, Ino began slowly, Kyoto's like at least 20 miles away. Yeah, it is, he replied distractedly while continuing to scan the crowd of people headed for an evening out. Tapping a heeled foot, Ino crossed her arms with a glare. And how exactly are we supposed to get there? I am not exactly in running footwear, and even if I were, I am not running to another city just for a date. Naruto turned around and took one of her hands in his with a gentle tug. Ino felt her anger cool at the kind smile directed at her, finding her eyes captivated by his alluring baby blues. Damn him. How did he manage to manipulate her emotions so easily? Hey, trust me a little, yeah. The gentle request was punctuated with an equally soft squeeze from his large warm hands. Giving a huff to shake off the swarm of butterflies that had magically manifested in her stomach, Ino watched curiously as he frowned at the luxurious silver timepiece on his wrist. It seemed he had something planned after all. Okay, so what are we waiting for then? She asked impatiently. As if to answer her question, her ears caught the sound of loud neighing and the deep rhythmic rumble of wheels broken by the almost silent creak of turning spokes. Stepping straight out of a fairy tale, a majestic quartet of snow-white horses turned around the street corner, carrying with them an elegant carriage that practically screamed royalty with its elegant design. People hurriedly moved out of the way of the important-looking carriage, breaking up into whispers as the vehicle pulled up to the Yamanaka home. Ino couldn't help but gasp as the massive beasts pulled up to a stop before them. Unbidden, her hand reached out to caress one of the well-groomed animal's silky mane. The lead horse snorted nervously and pranced a little at her approach, but calmed at her soothing touch. The chatter of the crowd that had built up in the background fell on deaf ears as Ino delighted at the regal presence of the stallion she was caressing. So sorry, shouted the stately-looking older man in the dark kimono who jumped off the driver's seat, got a bit turned around. I hope you weren't waiting too long. Naruto rubbed the back of his head nervously, but laughed it off. Well, I was more worried you wouldn't show up, Nagata-san. I go where the boss says, replied the driver simply as he opened the carriage door with a graceful sweep of his hands, and tonight he said you're the boss. Ino couldn't help but feel a burst of excitement as Naruto gestured for her to head in before him. Carefully maneuvering up the steps, she was greeted with the splendid interior, a spacious two-seater bound in the finest leather along with a champagne holder and various other snack foods that looked abhorrently expensive. Plopping herself down and noting how it felt like she had just sat down on a cloud, Ino couldn't help the giddy sensation ballooning inside her as she took a glance at the wine selection on board. There must have been at least a dozen brands from all over the elemental nations, all well stocked and without a price label to make her feel guilty about guzzling them. Her expectations for the evening had already been shattered in the first 5 minutes. Talk about setting the bar high. How in the world did you afford to rent a carriage? She asked in wonderment as Naruto seated himself across from her. Their vehicle started off with a low rumble quickly drowned out by the clopping of horses' hooves. Through the small window Ino spotted the surprised faces of her parents watching from the living room window. Returning their hesitant wave, she gave them a bright smile of reassurance. Oh, I know a guy who knows a guy, Naruto answered evasively. Grabbing a bottle at random, he examined the label with a critical eye before nodding with satisfaction at what he found there. Skillfully popping the cork with little effort, Naruto searched through another drawer looking for something to pour the fine liquor into. Accepting the bubbling glass from her date, Ino gave the vintage an experimental sniff before sipping. Enjoying the way the carbonated quality clashed with the light fruity taste, she smacked her lips in a rather unladylike fashion before turning her attention to the compartment on the side of her seat. Well, you'll have to introduce me to this guy then, Ino exclaimed happily as she rifled through the snack drawer, greedily snapping up a package of chocolate-covered strawberries hidden between some gourmet confectionaries. The Mindwalker let loose a moan of ecstasy as the bitter cocoa mixed beautifully with the sweet zesty juices of the fresh just-picked berries that had been harvested at the zenith of the season. Offering the package to her partner in crime who was busily emptying a bag of what appeared to be pretzel wedges filled with peanut butter, Ino stuffed another of the mouthwatering fruit morsels into her mouth. She had to fight back another groan of pleasure as her taste buds flooded her reward pathways with dopamine. This was almost as good as sex, almost. So how am I doing so far? Questioned Naruto cheekily. Oh, I don't know, drawled Ino. She toyed with another strawberry, enjoying the way his eyes hungrily traced the sensual movement against her lips. You're doing okay so far, I suppose. Okay, he squawked indignantly. Who'd you go out with before? The Fire Lord's son. Shuddering slightly at the image of the overweight pudgy pig-like noble that she unfortunately had to protect for one of her missions, Ino stuck her tongue out at Naruto. I happen to have very refined tastes. Rigget, refined. Might want to wipe off the chocolate from your mouth before you say that, princess, he chided her teasingly. Ino blushed and grabbed a napkin to dab at the corner of her mouth only to find there was nothing there. Tossing the balled-up napkin at a laughing Naruto, she followed up with the first thing within reach, which happened to be her strawberry package. Naruto snatched the improvised projectile from the air, helping himself to 2 berries at once. Hey, Ino whined. Those are mine. Come get them then, he taunted while shoveling down another pair of the chocolate-covered snacks, quickly decreasing the size of the already dwindling bag. Lunging across the space between them, Ino made a wild grab for the sack of strawberries only to find them outside her reach as Naruto held them over his head. Cussing his parentage, she hopped onto his lap to gain the leverage necessary to reach her target. Fingers scrabbling wildly to snatch back her prize, Ino fell into a paralyzing fit of giggles as Naruto used his free hands to tickle her sides, tears springing to her eyes as he mercilessly assaulted her weak points. No. Stop it. She shrieked as she laughed hysterically. Now giving up on getting her precious back, she tried to squirm off his lap to get away from his searching hands, but found herself trapped in his grip when he brought down his raised arm to hold her in place. Seeing no recourse for escape, Ino fought back the only way she could, by tickling back twice as hard. The 2 blondes struggled against each other, trying to trap the other's hand while keeping one of their own free to attack. After a couple of minutes of back and forth, they finally called a breathless truce when they almost accidentally knocked over Naruto's glass of wine. Capitalizing on Naruto's distraction from keeping the liquid from spilling, Ino snatched back the bag of berries with a triumphant cry. Ha! I win! She gloated. In your face, Uzumaki, said Uzumaki chuckled and wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her closer to him so that their faces were inches apart. I guess you do, Ino-chan, he whispered huskily. Their faces were so close Ino's nose could pick up the whiff of mint on his breath. She was momentarily overcome with the urge to find out what brand he used by tasting his mouth. Feeling the gooseflesh break out across her arms, the kunoichi fought down a shiver, staring into the crystal lakes gazing serenely back at her. Ino swallowed ineffectually while running her tongue across her suddenly very dry lips. Yeah, she whispered back breathlessly, unconsciously leaning forward. The soft smile adorning his youthful features turned into a wicked smirk upon seeing her reaction. Naruto pulled back from Ino, leaving her mortified at her own subconscious reaction to his proximity. Trying to ignore a feeling of disappointment seems to have become a thing for Ino lately. Sliding hurriedly off his lap, and feeling a slight pang of regret at the loss of close contact, Ino decided to stay on his side of the bench. Snatching up glass of wine he had rescued, she emptied it with one swig before shooting her date a haughty look as if that was her response to his challenge. "So tell me about yourself, Ino-chan," Naruto said as he turned slightly face her, resting his back against the wall next to the window frame. Leaning back against her side of the carriage, Ino returned his curious look while propping her bare feet on his lap. Her shoes had fallen off during their little wrestling match over the now empty bag of berries and she hadn't bothered putting them back on. "Huh. Like what?" "We're on a date to get to know each other," Naruto pointed out dryly with a roll of his eyes. "You know, like your likes, dislikes, hobbies, dreams for the future? What is this, like our first team meeting or something?" Ino quipped while tossing the empty strawberry bag into a waste bin in a tiny compartment that retracted into the floor of the carriage. Rich people had the neatest toys. "Fine. I guess I can run with that. I like watching the sunrise. I always get this feeling of hope in that. I like peanut butter. I don't like bugs, and I hate that stupid cat the Fire Lord's wife owns. My hobbies are working with flowers. I like how calm I feel when I am putting together a bouquet or tending to the gardens. Oh, and I also like shopping. For the future, well, I am hoping to find someone to fall in love with and settle down. That and becoming head of the intelligence department." Seeing Naruto's deadpan expression, Ino crossed her arms defensively. "What? Don't judge. Just having a flashback to Team 7's first meeting," he replied with a snicker. "Well, why don't you tell me about yourself then?" Ino huffed. Raising Ino's feet up with one hand, the blonde male briefly crossed his own legs before gently propped hers back on his lap while considering his reply. "Well, as you've learned, I like to cook and I like to think I am pretty good at it too. I also like to write, something I picked up from Jiraiya while I was traveling." Seeing the narrowed eyes of his date, he quickly backpedaled. "Not his kind of writing, of course." "Oh yeah?" asked Ino after she finally relented her glare. "What do you write about then?" "Action-adventure type novels actually," he chuckled, scratching at his whisker marks in embarrassment. Ino had to resist the sudden urge to rub the back of her hand against his cheek. She had always secretly wondered what those marks would feel like, even all the way back in their academy days. Maybe she'd finally get the chance to satisfy that curiosity. "I've got a couple of interested publishers who are taking a look at it. They're loosely based off my own experience working in the field." Ino raised an eyebrow. If even half the stuff she had heard about some of the missions Naruto had been on were true, it'd make for one hell of a reading. The boy was a trouble magnet when it came to misclassified missions or just plain old bad luck. Who the hell managed to run into a legendary missing ninja on their first C ranker? "Nothing classified, I hope?" she asked. "I am not an idiot," Naruto retorted with a roll of his eyes. "Well, go on," she encouraged him with a nudge of her big toe. He poked back at the bottom of her foot, causing her to giggle slightly at the ticklish sensation. Seeing the devilish expression on his face, Ino quickly retracted her feet with a shriek before he could trap them, causing him to laugh. "I won't do anything. I promise." Seeing the assuaging gestures he was making, Ino blew a raspberry at him anyways. "Oh, come on. Where's the trust?" he moaned dramatically with sad puppy eyes. Conceding, Ino gingerly edged her feet back into his lap, ready to withdraw them in a heartbeat if he showed a hint of taking advantage of her exposed position. Her concerns were waylaid as he turned his body sideways and began to lazily massage her feet. Her body relaxed as his hands seemed to pinpoint every ache and tension in her foot. So what else?" she asked while closing her eyes at the pleasant sensation. It was going to be hard not to fall asleep between the tender attention he was paying to her feet and the rhythmic rocking of the carriage. "Well, I also like to draw," he said after a moment's thought. "I remember," she exclaimed with a laugh. "You used to zone out in Iruka's class and doodle comics in your notebook." "You saw that?" Naruto asked with surprise. "You weren't exactly trying to hide it," she snorted. "Figured you were too busy fawning over your Sasuke-chan," he retorted, causing her to blush faintly. Her childhood infatuation with the Uchiha was rather embarrassing now that she was older. Sure, he had been the dark, brooding, handsome genius of their year. The sort of guy clueless little girls who hadn't had real experiences in relationship would go for. But now that she was older, Ino really wanted to be able to go back in time and slap her younger self. Beyond just the superficial attraction, there was also the many signs and symptoms pointing at the fact that Sasuke would make for horrible boyfriend material. He didn't pay attention to anyone beyond himself and his problems. Arrogance practically oozed off him. He was antisocial and he just wasn't all that nice in general. Plus there was also the whole running away and betraying the village thing. Major point deduction. "You weren't any better with Sakura," she shot back. "If anything, you were worse." "I never stalked her back home," he countered with a smirk, "and don't deny it, I saw you do it." Flushing at the accusation that she really couldn't defend herself against, Ino blew out a breath at a strand of hair that had escaped her mother's formation during their tickle war. "I was like 12. Besides, what were you doing following me anyways? Now it was Naruto's turn to look slightly embarrassed. I was actually planning to ambush Sasuke and kick his ass so I could impress Sakura, he admitted abashedly. Ino shook her head and couldn't help but laugh. Guess we both grew up, huh? Naruto smiled sadly as he gazed out at the passing scenery. Yeah, I guess we did. Seeing the nostalgic funk her date had fallen into, Ino felt her own spirits dim somewhat. Things sure had changed a lot since their academy days. Life was simpler in their childhood. It was odd how all those little things that had seemed so important back then were completely inconsequential now. Ino had not seen those girls she had hung out with back in the academy for years now, only occasionally exchanging polite greetings when they passed each other by in the village. Her teammates that had felt like such a burden at the beginning were now closer than family. She wouldn't trade them for anyone else in the world. The vaunted genius of their year who was supposed to do great things had turned into a traitor on equal standing with his brother who was considered one of the most dangerous criminals the Leaf Village had ever produced. The dead last of their year who had had his dreams of being Hokage laughed at and spat upon was now the closest one to inheriting that prestigious mantle even though he had seemingly lost interest in his childhood ambition. Paddling her legs in his lap to shake him out of his peculiar mood. Ino jabbed her foot at his hands demandingly. Naruto looked startled for a moment, as if he had been woken from a trance. Smiling sheepishly at his date, he resumed his massage of her feet, the searing heat from his palms slowly working their way up to her calves. The migration of his hands to the upper parts of her legs was rather distracting to Ino as the intimate motion brought back memories of other locations he had caressed further up her thighs that one night. I guess there's not much else about me you might not know in terms of my likes. I am a pretty simple guy, Naruto continued. My dislikes, well, I have to say I've come to hate anything remotely snake-related. I also happen to dislike S-rank missions. Ino sat up straighter at his admission. What? No way, you're like always clamoring for S-ranks though. Naruto shrugged. I ask for them because I know I can do them. Anyone else they send might fail, which is no good for the village, but beyond that, S-ranks tend to suck ass with a straw. You're either sent deep into enemy territory where the expectation for survival is relatively low, or you're sent to take down a target that's pretty much a guaranteed one-way ticket even if you succeed. Intel for S-rankers tends to be a joke if you're lucky, and if you're not, well, plus the pay blows camel nuts. It's an S-rank though, exclaimed Ino in disbelief. How can the pay suck? Money goes up with mission ranking. Naruto chuckled darkly. You've never been on an S-ranker, have you? That's a common misconception for people who haven't. As you know, we get the majority of our income from going on missions. A cut of the revenue the village receives is divided up between the team that took on the assignment. But that only applies to missions that are being funded and paid for. The majority of AD rankers are problems people are willing to throw money at to make it go away. S rankers generally aren't bankrolled by anyone. They're classified under village security or some other nonsense. Hokage issued and all that. Only thing that applies is hazard pay. And they don't tend to give you too much when your occupation involves throwing yourself headfirst into every dangerous situation that comes along. So what? You're telling me you're getting chump change and genin salary when you're running an S opposite? Ino asked incredulously. That's about right, Naruto said, dark humor evident in his voice. It's why normally only Junin and Anbu take on S rank. It's not just a skill issue. They can afford to get by on their salary even if they don't get a boost to their income from a share of mission profits. Why are you still a genin? Demanded Ino in outrage. You definitely have the skills for Chunin, Junin even. You've been back almost a year now. Why haven't you gone for the exam? Hell, why hasn't Tsunade-sama just promoted you? Ah well, Tsunade Bakken asked me to hold back on my promotion so I can join the next Chunin exam that's supposed to be held in Cloud Village next month. I actually registered for it already. Something about needing me to help Konoha flex its muscle a little on the international scene. Ino relented in her anger on her friend's behalf now that she paused to think about it. In a way it made sense. Naruto was probably the most powerful genin in the world at the moment. He'd smash his way through the competition with ease, building up Konoha's reputation for producing powerful and competent shinobi. The fact that he would be upstaging Cloud on their own turf would be an added bonus politically, as the two villages was still in a somewhat Cold War state after the whole Hyuga kidnapping fiasco. I guess Konoha's reputation could use the help, admitted Ino. We didn't have any stellar showings in the past few years. In fact, the Chunin exam right before Naruto came home had been particularly disastrous for the Leaf Village. Saying their candidates got creamed would have been a monumental understatement. At least people could normally blame it on bias and favoritism when none of their shinobi made it to the finals to be showcased on the world stage. That doesn't really work as an excuse when the exam had taken place in your hometown. How embarrassing was it that none of your own people made it to the finals with a home field advantage? It was a good thing none of the fatality statistics for the Leaf Chunin hopefuls during the preliminaries were available to the public. That would have been like getting your ass beaten unconscious then having your face urinated upon by the victor. It wasn't an accident that Tsunade had asked Naruto to hold back for the Cloud Village Chunin exam. It had been a Cloud shinobi who had taken home the victory at Konoha's embarrassing debacle. Naruto destroying the competition in Cloud would go a long way towards evening the score. A bit different from our debut, huh? Asked Naruto with a grin. We had like half the rookies make it to the finals. I still can't believe you got a double KO with Sakura. I was pretty sure it was over when you nailed her with your mind swap technique. He mimed the body mind switch seal, getting surprisingly close to what it was supposed to look like. What happened? Did you miss or something? I am not sure, confessed Ino. It felt different. Normally when I slip into someone's body there's a brief moment of disorientation than I am in the pilot's seat. With Sakura the blackout time was much longer, and suddenly I found myself back in my own body. Weird. What is she like, immune or something? I don't know. I mean, it's possible, I suppose. When we actually try to delve into someone's mind instead of taking control of their body, it always works differently for each person, so I guess it's not inconceivable that she has some sort of natural defense against it. It could also be that I hadn't fully mastered the technique back then. I mean, I haven't tried it since, replied Ino thoughtfully. Maybe forehead and I should have a little spar. She paused briefly, wondering why there was so much venom in that thought. Placing that little tidbit in the back of her mind to be examined later, Ino turned her attention back to Naruto. Their conversation was cut short as the carriage finally ground to a halt. Startled by the abrupt stop, Ino looked out the window to see the bright lights of the big city of Kyoto glaring back at her. There was a polite knock at the door, causing her to scramble back to her side of the carriage and hastily put on her shoes, gaining her an amused look from her fellow blonde. Uzumaki-san, Yamanaka-san, we have arrived at our destination, came the muffled announcement of their driver through the doorway. Where is our destination? Questioned Ino as she stood up to follow Naruto, who was already at the door. Instead of answering, her date stepped out of the carriage before holding his hand out to her chivalrously with a pleased smile adorning his features. Why don't you come on down and find out? Taking his offered hand, Ino carefully stepped out of the carriage and gasped sharply at the sight before her. The building they were parked in front of was a standalone structure that stood out like a guiding light in a city full of buildings crammed next to one another. The only word that came to mind when she laid eyes on their destination was magnificent. It was pure snow white, a regal purity unlike anything Ino had ever laid eyes upon. The marble-like stone that made up the building glistened majestically against the backdrop of lights that illuminated the darkening night sky. Delicate pink hues of dying daylight from the setting sun outlined the three-story restaurant beautifully, highlighting the grandiose structure with an almost reverent aura. The artistic sign proclaiming it the ladies' last evening didn't need any fancy decorations to mar its elegance. The name itself held a weighty presence to those who knew of its reputation. The framework of the miniature palace was odd, more of a smooth-flowing architecture than the traditional defined straight edges of most building contours. Walls ebbed and flowed together, creating the illusion that this wasn't so much a structure built by man, but rather a formation that nature had shaped from its very essence during primordial creation. The entire backside of the construction, which happened to be made of an opulent one-way glass, peered out into the smooth gleaming surface of the Kappa Lake that was the backbone of Kyoto's tourist attraction. It would not be over-exaggerating to say that the building was a work of art in itself, perfection, or as close as mortals could achieve. The paved stone pathway that led up to the famous restaurant was lined with a minimal amount of vegetation. Each granite tile carved with realistic imagery from the distant history of the elemental nations. Figures depicting the struggles of men and women who had long been laid to eternal rest told silent stories to those who walked by, unmoving reminders of the many different backgrounds that made the ladies' last evening possible. Dual fountains lined up on both sides of the path sent water dancing up in the air merrily, entertaining couples as they strolled down the lane towards their luxurious dining destination. Extending an arm to the still flabbergasted Ino, Naruto grinned from ear to ear as she automatically hooked her arms around the offered limb, enjoying the softness of her body coiled against his. Nothing made a man feel more on top of the world than when he had a beautiful girl in arm. The envious looks he was receiving from the other men who couldn't quite tear their eyes away from Ino certainly didn't dissuade that feeling. The ladies' last evening, gasped Ino in astonishment. How? It costs almost half a year of my pay just to get in the waiting line for a table. Steering Ino down the rather over-the-top trail leading to the entrance, Naruto shrugged his broad shoulders nonchalantly. Well, I know a guy who knows a guy. Ino socked his arm, causing him to laugh. No, really, how did you get us a table here? Who says I have a table? I just thought it'd be a nice place to walk around. Bursting into belly-shaking laughter at Ino's devastated expression, Naruto had to double over in order to keep his balance as his body shook uncontrollably. Tears of mirth rolled down his cheeks as he pointed a shaking finger at the blonde girl. "Oh my god, Ino, your face," he wheezed between heaving breaths, "priceless." "Naruto," she growled with her arms crossed impatiently over her rather well-developed chest, heedless of the curious stares they were receiving from the rich couples who were walking past. "You better not be yanking my chain here." Regaining his composure, the blonde male rested his hands on her shoulders. The warmth from his palms was a pleasant contrast to the nip of nightfall. "Hey, trust me a little here," he implored with a gentle smile. "I want to show you a good night, and get to know you a little better. Would I lie to you?" Melting slightly at his tender tone, and cursing herself for being weak, Ino conceded and linked her arm with his again as they continued on down the path. "But really, how did you get us a table here, Mr. Genin Salary?" "The maitre d' and I go way back," replied Naruto effortlessly. "I sent him a message earlier today and he had a table cleared for us." "Well, look at you, Mr. Connections," teased Ino with a wide grin. "The heck type of history do you two share that gets him to backlog a bunch of nobles for you?" Naruto ruffled his hair with his free hand, smirking arrogantly. "Please, people bend over backwards to accommodate the future Hokage." Laughing at his antics, she allowed the deflection of her question to slide for now in favor of the excitement threatening to bubble over as they came closer to the entryway of the five-star restaurant. The ladies' last evening was rated as one of the top luxurious dining establishments in the entire Elemental Nations, often peaking at number 1 depending on the year. It wasn't just the lovely exterior and interior design. LLE boasted a world-class service team and a culinary staff that drew upon the best talents from across the lands. You could order food from all corners of the globe and there would be an expert chef on hand to deliver excellence to your demands. LLE was hailed by food critics as a culinary heaven that produced nothing short of masterpieces from their kitchens. Ino couldn't wait until she got to go back to brag to the girls about her evening out with Naruto. They were going to be so jealous. As they passed under the archway, soft music could be heard drifting out from within the entryway. Entering, Ino couldn't help but be riveted by the stylishly planned-out design. The lighting was dim, low enough to alter the mood. But not so much that it was difficult to see. Artwork lay scattered tastefully around the villa-like interior, ranging from watercolor paintings of far distant lands to pencil sketches of bizarre conceptions wrangled from deep within the artist's darkest dreams. Sculptures, statues and various other artifacts were tactfully sprinkled into the environment, spaced out evenly so that nothing clumped together to create an unbalance to the roving eye. The entire ground floor was a panel of unblemished see-through glass that was laid over a massive aquarium that boasted its own flourishing coral ecosystem that could be seen through the crystal-clear water. Schools of curious nibbling fish and swarms of lethargic cnidarians swam side by side underneath the feet of the diners. Crabs, lobsters and other spiny crustaceans crawled under the crushing blue depths of the gargantuan fish tank, busily poking away at what they found in the colorful reef far below. Each of the lower-level tables was separated into their own private fenced-off areas to ensure maximum privacy for those who had paid a fortune to dine in peace. The low murmur of conversation mixed in amicably with the music being played. Adding to the pleasant atmosphere of the restaurant, an elegant dance floor was kept bare at the center of the massive room, a handful of couples floating delicately across the ornate ground to a jaunty tune coming from an orchestra pit filled with seated men and women laboring over their instruments. A massive glass chandelier that was impossible to miss hung overhead, glittering light reflecting from its gems like 1,000 stars. A violinist strolled leisurely between tables, skillfully working his instrument to produce a sweet sound that tickled the ear. A lonely flute could be heard in the background, a wordless poetry tugging mournfully at the heart. In the far corner facing a table with 8 men, a woman wearing a beautiful dressing gown sat in front of a gracefully carved koto, plucking away at the strings while the men chatted and picked delicately at their meals. Scores of work staff wearing formal kimonos of varying styles and fashion that shared the only commonality of screaming class wandered between tables serving the patrons. A tall dark-skinned man was carefully pouring champagne into a curvy flute with an elongated neck, making conversation with the seated women enamored at his every motion. A woman in a dark blue kimono was carrying a tray with a flaming dish dispassionately towards her table, completely unbothered by the burning heat inches away from her hair, which had been done up to such an extent that it made Ino's look like a 3-year-old's poor attempts at imitation. When they were done, the servers seemed to vanish, fading away to the background to allow their patrons to enjoy their meals in privacy. The eagerness swelling inside almost had Ino jumping up and down with glee. Resisting the urge to pinch herself, Ino instead cuddled Naruto's arm, earning her a slight leering smile from him. She eased off on squishing the side of her breasts against his elbow, not wanting to encourage him too much. She couldn't believe it. She was really here. Ino had always dreamed of being treated like a princess. But being a kunoichi tended to make one a realist. Wanting something doesn't always mean you'll get it. But here she was, about to dine at a place normally reserved for nobility or the super wealthy, shooting Naruto a speculating look. She couldn't help but wonder just how much she knew about her companion. This whole mysterious friend of a friend business was beginning to bother her. Ino hated mysteries. As the couple in front of them was led away to their table by a smiling server, Ino finally caught sight of the man in charge of running the front for the ladies last evening. He was dressed in a chic gray suit that rested easily on his tall wiry frame. Immediately setting him apart from the other staff, a thick golden goatee protruded from a strong chin, winding upwards in a delicate curl that beset his severe expression. His single visible eye glared out harshly from behind a long strand of hair that was brushed carefully over his face, daring patrons to make a complaint. A lit cigarette hung limply from scowling lips, smoke lazily drifting upwards in an endless stream of gray. He looked rather young for such an honored station, but he had greeted each of the couple before them by name, a testament to his position and the power that came with it. Everyone seemed to treat him with a healthy amount of respect. After all, this was the man who, despite their money or status, had the ability to deny them entry as he saw fit. The ladies last evening didn't believe in refunds, and her strict storefront guardian didn't believe in second chances. Catching sight of Naruto, the stern face cracked like dried earth, forming the impression of a smile. The normally pleasant facial expression added to his rather intimidating look rather than detracting from it. Well, he drawled, finally taking the smoldering cancer stick out of his mouth. A perfect ring of smoke was blown in the blonde Jinchuriki's direction. Look at what the wind blew in. I might have to call the busboy to come take out the trash. Naruto smiled back cockily. Hell, Sanji. I am a bit disappointed. Didn't think such a classy dive would leave garbage lying around, and at the entrance of all places. What were they thinking? The two men shared a hearty laugh before clasping their hands in greeting, the simple handshake quickly morphing into a one-armed hug that involved a lot of enthusiastic back-slapping. When they finally broke apart, they sported matching grins on their faces. Honestly, Uzumaki, I thought you said you'd never be caught dead in an establishment like this, remarked the now-named celebrated restaurant host, leaning up against his podium. Not alone, I wouldn't, the blonde male retorted with a scowl, digging his pinky finger in his ear. A guy coming in by himself. How awkward would that be? Sanji finally turned his attention to Ino, who had been standing hesitantly behind her date. And you must be the lovely lady who convinced this idiot to grace my restaurant with his unsightly presence. Can't say you did me any favors, but I suppose your fine company makes up for this ruffian's uncouth appearance. As far as pity dates go though, I am pretty sure you could have done better than him. Takaya Sanji, at your service, madam. Ino took his offered hand in a firm shake, curiosity eating away at her. Yamanaka, Ino. He couldn't have been much older than Naruto, maybe 3 or 4 years. She had never met any of his friends outside of the Rookie 9 and Team Guy. Hell, she didn't even know he had friends outside their group. Pity date? Objected Naruto indignantly. Don't mistake me for yourself, Takaya. What was that? Demanded the host as he got up in the blonde male's mug. Don't think just because you're a ninja now that I won't kick your ass. My leg's been itching lately. It must have known you were coming. Ino couldn't help but laugh as the two men scowled menacingly at one another, shooting daggers with their eyes and rolling up the sleeves as if they were preparing to throw down. Knowing Naruto, he wouldn't hesitate to do just that despite their location. Really, boys, she said with hands placed disapprovingly on curvy hips, you're making a scene. And indeed they were. The line that had formed at the front was starting to fill with annoyed-looking aristocrats who had no doubt never had to wait for anything in their lives. A quick glare from Sanji and the grumblings wilted away to nothing. Ah well, I wouldn't want to expose Yamanaka-san to scene of violence on her night out, sighed Sanji dramatically. Follow me, I've got your table all set up. Stifling a giggle as she watched Naruto flip his friends back off while mockingly twirling an invisible goatee, the pair followed their guide who led them up the grand staircase situated before the dance floor. Ino ran her hand against the smooth hand railing, glancing downwards to catch a glimpse of an enormous angelfish drifting slothfully underneath them. Its single massive plate-sized eye blinked up at her as if winking, causing her to stifle a smile. The second floor mirrored the ground level in design, but was far more spacious and accommodating in terms of the seating arrangements. There was also a stage where a number of elegantly dressed women were performing a traditional flower dance, moving in time and rhythm to the steady beat of an unseen drum. The floors must have been built relatively soundproof as the music below could not be heard over the dull pounding of the hand instrument. Not that I expect someone like you to appreciate this, Naruto, grumbled the older male as he led them all the way up to the third floor, but I got you guys the best seat in the house. Ino gasped as they pulled to a stop at their table. Well, more like their section of the upper level of the floor. There was an entire room prepared with a low-seated dark wood tabletop that was polished to a reflective sheen. The futon cushions were expensive in appearance, practically a silent announcement of a lavish lifestyle, as was the smart bamboo shoebox that was at the entryway. There was no tableware to be seen. Presumably they would be getting them when they were served. The window next to the table opened up into the vast expanse of the beautiful nighttime lakeside view. There was even a balcony they could walk out into with a smaller, more intimate table set out with two comfortable-looking chairs placed opposite of one another. The steps leading down to their private balcony put it low enough so that it would not obstruct their view from the table within the room. The menu and drink selection can be found in the holder in the side walls, the one-eyed host explained, pushing on a wooden panel to open up into a shelf holder revealing what appeared to be a leather-bound book. Ring the bell when you need an attendant. Giving a short bow, the man gave the couple a small smile before retreating to the doorway. Enjoy your meal, a server will be by to bring you refreshments. Oh, and Naruto, Sanji said as he paused at the entrance, try not to fuck this up, huh? You wouldn't believe who I had to tell to screw off in order to get you this setup. Naruto flipped him the bird, earning himself a smirk and another smoke ring. The bamboo doorways slid shut with barely a sound, leaving the blonde pair to seat themselves. So what do you think so far, Ino-chan? Asked Naruto as he took off his shoes, carefully seating himself across from her without upsetting any of the lavish decorative cloths. It's amazing, she gushed gleefully. Look at the view. The scene outside their window would have made a wonderful inspiration for a painting. A majestic mountainscape stretched up off on the far distant shore, dyed a faint salmon by the final remnants of sunlight as evening came into full swing. The glowing moon hung in the darkening heavens like a serene orb, surrounded by the thousands upon thousands of tiny candlelight of stars that were slowly becoming visible. Boats could be seen lazily drifting about in the water, and at the center of Kappa Lake a massive lit cruise was anchored, an island of civilization in the hub of inky darkness. A soft rap on the doorway was heard before it was pulled back, revealing a young female server in a pink floral patterned kimono. She held herself in a demure kneeling position, showing all the grace and etiquette of a noble raised woman. Please excuse the interruption, honored guests, she intoned shyly. This one's name is Sayuri, and will be your humble attendant this night. She punctuated her greeting with a deep formal bow. If there is anything this one could provide for you this night, please do not hesitate to ring the bell. Sayuri gestured at the long length of golden rope hanging from the ceiling within reaching distance from the table. The two blondes traded perplexed looks as the girl continued to wait patiently in her half-prostrated position at their doorway, unsure of what to do. Neither was used to being treated with quite that much respect. Ah, Sayuri, said Naruto unsurely after a moment of silence, if you could bring us some tea while we take a look at the menu? Of course, honored guest. What blend would you like this one to bring? Seeing the flummoxed expression on her date, Ino stifled a snigger before coming to his rescue. Do you have Gyokuro? She inquired politely. Of course, and would sir have the same? Sayuri prompted. Sure. Yeah, Gyokuro sounds good. Ino finally couldn't hold it in anymore and snorted out a laugh after their attendant left with a soft snap of the bamboo divider that shielded them from the rest of the diners. Do you even know what Gyokuro is? She asked in amusement. I drink green tea, Ino, deadpanned Naruto flatly. I don't think this place has ever heard of something so layman. Commoner brew, Ino agreed snobbishly with a straight face, before quickly hiding herself behind the menu so that she wouldn't burst into another fit of giggles. God, what was wrong with her? She was acting like an airhead tonight. They'd probably throw us out on general principle if we asked for water, she added, enjoying the merriment on her date's face. Honestly, Ino felt a bit out of place at such a prestigious establishment. She had been raised in a rather modest lifestyle despite being from a prominent clan in Konoha. Having Naruto here made it a lot less nerve-wracking. Everything just seemed to roll right off that boy's shoulders and she couldn't help but be infected by his cheerful attitude. Ino's eyes widened comically as she began to page through the thick text that comprised what was the menu for the ladies last evening. They weren't kidding when they said LLE had a wide selection in their repertoire. Shed read through books published by the Intel department that were thinner than this. Holy crap, exclaimed Naruto, who was similarly flipping through the dense list of options. They got 40 pages dedicated to sushi alone. A quick scan through showed that not every single dish was unique. It was just that there were different sections of the menu, one divided for the types of food, another for the region from which they hailed, and still another by what season the food was normally served at, and on it went. A glance at the sushi section had her mouth watering as there were a few selections she had heard about, but never had the opportunity to try, mainly because it would burn a hole in her bank account. Noticing that there was no price tag next to any of the items, Ino felt a gnawing guilt build up against the temptation to order without restraint. Naruto wasn't exactly loaded by his own account. Naruto. How are you planning to pay for all of this? She asked hesitantly, hoping she wouldn't offend him. We're shinobi. I figured we can just eat and run, they wouldn't be able to catch us. Ino's jaws dropped, but she quickly snapped it shut as she spotted the look of suppressed mirth in his playful blue eyes. Huffing indignantly, she crossed her hands across her ample bosom, noting with pleasure how that simple movement caused Naruto brief distraction. I am being serious here, I don't want to bankrupt you. Hey, don't worry about it, he waved off. Order as much as you like, I've got it covered. Tentatively picking up the menu again, Ino shot him a curious glance. Another one of your friend of a friend's? Naruto just wiggled his fingers at her with a mysterious smile. A soft knock announced the return of Sayuri, who brought with her 2 elaborate ceramic cups, one decorated by a gorgeous phoenix for Ino and the other with a flawless dragon coiled fiercely around the mug for Naruto. A bottle of sake along with 2 smaller porcelain cups was also placed down at the table next to the pot of tea. Spring Daisoke sake, their attendant explained, seeing their confusion, compliments Gyokuro strong flavor very well. Sayuri quickly retreated to the doorway again, reminding them to ring for her when they were ready to order before withdrawing with another deep bow. Is it just me, began Naruto slowly, or is it just plain weird to have someone wait on you hand and foot? You're just not cut out to be a noble, Ino sneered with pretend haughtiness. Sure princess, jested the host of the Demon Fox, and I am sure your horde of invisible servants at home give you a foot rub before bed every night too. The two exchanged some friendly banter while perusing through the menu, trying to make up their minds on what they wanted to order. Oh sweet. They have ramen, exclaimed Naruto in excitement, causing Ino to roll her eyes at his antics. While there were some startling changes to the boy over his 3-year absence, there was still a lot that had remained the same. Really? You come to a world-renowned restaurant just to order ramen? She demanded incredulously. Well, it'd be world-renowned ramen then, wouldn't it? He countered glibly. Ino rolled her eyes, wondering how he could waste such a good opportunity to try out some of the finest food in the elemental nations. She for one was not going to let this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity go to waste. Well, I am going to try out their seasonal sushi medley, she decided. Holy crud, the smallest is like a 20-piece combo. This fish head curry ramen sounds interesting. You want appetizers? The thought of more food on top of the already massive serving of sushi made Ino frown. Her beautiful figure wasn't maintained because she binged on food at every chance she got. But this was probably going to be one of the few times she would ever get to dine in such a high-class establishment. Only if you help me with the sushi, she bargained. Seeing his affirmative nod, Ino flicked through the appetizer selection and felt slightly overwhelmed by the selection available. There were too many for the brain to comprehend. A menu wasn't supposed to be this complicated. Alright, forget this, grumbled Naruto, closing his booklet with a resolute snap. I am just gonna open a random page and order the first thing I point at. Really? She asked with a laugh. What if you get something weird? I swear I saw something about an octopus stuffed with elephant testicles or something. Where's your sense of adventure? Naruto challenged with roguish smile. Who knows, maybe elephant testicles taste great. Ino scoffed at his proclamation and shook her head. Yeah, you do that, testicle boy. Chicken, taunted Naruto. Sensible, corrected Ino, dismissing his goading with a superior tilt of her nose. The two continued their verbal jousting while browsing through the considerable selection of starters, occasionally interjecting with disgusted exclamations and comments on the entries they came across, finally agreeing on the sushi plate that Ino wanted along with a white curry udon because Ino refused to allow him to order ramen, and about a king's ransom's worth of appetizers. The couple signaled for Sayuri's return. Their order was taken by memory, because their server certainly didn't write anything down as far as they could tell, but she managed to recite their order perfectly at the end of their dictation, so they weren't exactly worried they'd be getting their order mixed up. So Naruto, how do you know Sanji? And what dirt do you have on a guy like him that gets you the best table in the house on a same-day notice? Asked Ino nosily as she accepted the cup of warm sake her date poured her from the bottle sitting on a small box of heated coals. Taking a ginger sip, she felt her eyes widen as the sweet belly-warming rice-fermented liquor trickled down her throat and warmed her entire body. This made the stuff they ordered at Amichi's taste like bathroom moonshine. What, Takaya? Naruto sniffed derisively. Don't let that fancy suit and upper-class talk fool ya. He was an alley jackal just like me back in the day. Gotta say though, never would have thought in a million years that red-leg Sanji would end up working at a place like this. Alley jackal? Ino tested the words in her mouth, her curiosity piqued by the unfamiliar term. Yeah, you know, Naruto said, making a wild gesture as if that would suddenly make her understand him. Ino squinted at the blonde in front of her as he poured himself a healthy portion of sake. No, I don't know. Street trash? Gutter rat? He tried with a puzzled expression. Konoha's Jinchuriki scratched at his head. It was obvious he was trying to convey something he felt that everyone was aware of, which made trying to explain it that much harder. You're talking about orphans, right? Ino said after a moment's thought. The demon host snorted, a hint of bitterness entering his voice. No, orphans got to live in orphanages. Gutter rats lived on the streets kicking the living shit out of one another to see who got first pickings out of garbage cans. Wait, you lived on the streets? Ino gasped in horror. But I thought you were raised at an orphanage before you got your own apartment. Who sponsored you for the academy then? I was at an orphanage until I was about 5, maybe 6, don't really remember all that well. One day they chased me out and told me to never come back. I bummed about on the streets for a couple of years before Gramps found me and got me set up with my own apartment and a seat in the academy. How did you survive? Demanded the shocked Mindwalker. It was inconceivable to her that their village would be cruel enough to force a child to survive on their own. Demon host or not, hell should someone have told the Hokage that the village's Jinchuriki was living on the streets. Seemed like kind of an important detail to miss. Naruto shrugged with a distant look in his eyes as painful memories surfaced. I wouldn't have made it if I had tried to go it alone. Don't let the cleanliness fool you. Konoha's streets are as unforgiving as Kiri's. We just clean up the bodies better. Out there you learned real fast that survival meant depending on others. Ino traded her sake for some tea, barely noticing the agreeable sensation on her tongue caused by the aftertaste of the alcohol combining with the expensive brew. Seeing Naruto's slightly bothered countenance, she steered his thoughts away from whatever memory was haunting him. So Sanji lived on the streets too? She prodded him. Oh yeah. The blonde male laughed. He had a few years on me, but we quickly learned to team up and take advantage of the nastier folks who had it out for me. We used to run this scheme where I'd go and insult some villager who had a hard-on for seeing my blood and have that person chase me down an alleyway. Takaya would be waiting to ambush them around a corner out of public sight. Naruto's whimsical smile turned rather ferocious. In the dim room Ino could have sworn she saw his whisker marks thicken for a moment. She dismissed it as a trick of a light after a closer examination. A kick to the knee to drop them, then one to the back of the head, chuckled Naruto nostalgically in reminiscence, making a pistol motion to his temple, and we'd be able to eat for the next few days with whatever we found in their wallet. That's terrible, laughed Ino, unable to help herself. As horrible as that was, it wasn't like those villagers hadn't deserved it. Why didn't they report you? Well, it was illegal to mention anything to do with my Jinchuriki status back in the day, so a lot of people probably didn't want to raise too many questions that might end up with their heads separated from their necks, plus no one ever managed to catch us in the act together. At best they'd only see me running like hell before they got knocked out. You're a thug, Naruto, accused Ino sardonically, jabbing a well-maintained nail at him. I can't believe I am going out with a thug. I thought girls liked a bad boy? He jibed, topping off their teacups. We like pretend bad boys, corrected the Mindwalker. The real deal is kinda scary. Did you like sell drugs too? Oh come on Ino-chan, what you take me for? Whined Naruto. It's not like we do that anymore. I pretty much stopped that sort of thing when I entered the academy. Weren't you like Sanji's meal ticket? What did he do after? By then he was old enough to work odd jobs and prizefight for money in the underground fight rings, so he didn't need to fleece people as much either. I'd let him and a few others I ran with back in the day crash at my place when they needed it. A few others, huh? Remarked Ino with a scrutinizing gaze. So am I going to get to meet more of these, friend of a friend's? Maybe, he replied airily with a wave. So now that I've told you a piece of my checkered past, it's your turn, Ino-chan. What if I don't have anything dark and checkered? She shot back inquisitively. Oh please, everyone's got a bit of history they keep to themselves, snorted Naruto as he lifted his cup to take a sip of tea. Oh? Asked Ino coyly, spotting a perfect opening to get back at him, like the fact that you deflowered Hinata then Tamari? The blonde seated across from her choked on his drink, hacking violently as the hot liquid backed down the wrong pipe. Ino tossed her head back and laughed uproariously as her date struggled to regain his breathing rhythm from her surprise attack. Damn, you girls really do tell each other everything, mumbled a red-faced Naruto under his breath. Whether the redness was the result of choking on the tea or embarrassment was hard to say. I feel all sorts of cheap, the Yamanaka heiress mock complained. You're like sloppy thirds in our group. Naruto chuckled good-naturedly, wiping the last of the liquid from his chin with a napkin. Well, they didn't have any complaints, did they? He asked brazenly. Ino flushed and turned from the mischievous look he was giving her. No, they certainly didn't. A few drinks and had both Tamari and Hinata drunkenly sharing their exploits with the blonde Jinchuriki. It still burned her ears to think about some of the mind-boggling things Naruto had done to them. The boy apparently spared nothing when it came to helping his lover achieve satisfaction. Didn't think so, smirked the blonde male. So back to you, Ino, dark and terrible secret, now. I don't have any, she insisted, shrinking in her seat. Oh come on, protested Naruto, you've got way too much dirt on me as it is, it's only fair. Oh fine, fine, she relented, pausing to give it some thought. A particular memory shot to the forefront of her mind, much to her internal humiliation. Shooting the blonde male who was watching her with eagerness, she gave him a hard glare. You better not tell anyone what I am about to tell you, Naruto. He made a crossing motion over his chest with his finger, then mimed zipping his mouth shut. I mean it, Naruto, if this gets out I am gonna kick your ass, she threatened, waving a fist in his face. It's like you don't trust me, he snarked back smartly. Fine, Ino said while crossing her arms, probably the only reason I am telling you this is cause of all the alcohol I've consumed tonight. Still hesitating, she glanced back uncertainly at Naruto. Seeing the puppy dog eyes he was sending her way, she caved and finally surrendered to his go-on motions. Sakura and I used to practice kissing together back in our academy days. Naruto's eyes widened and he burst out into a fit of laughter after a moment of disbelief. It's not that funny, protested Ino weakly, her cheeks warm with mortification. Was this before or after you two became rivals? Asked Naruto after he regained his composure. After, Ino admitted embarrassedly, practicing for the emo duck butt king the first take it, snickered the blonde male. Now it was her turn to laugh. The moniker brought an oddly accurate image of the 12-year-old Sasuke to her head. What did you call him? What, the emo duck butt king? I thought everyone knew that one. Oh wait, you were a fangirl. Probably no one told you cause they didn't want to receive a beatdown. Ino gave him the double one-finger salute from across the table, half tempted to lob something at him, but she didn't want to get thrown out of the establishment for rowdy behavior, not before they got their food anyways. Well, I certainly like a freaky girl, hummed Naruto, flashing her a dazzling smile. Ino's stomach did a little flip-flop, causing her heart to skip a beat. So what were you and Daddy talking about? She quickly asked, hoping to change the subject. Just regaling him with tales on how I pulled one over the intel department back in the day. Apparently they never figured out how I managed to sneak in and out of their interrogation facility without anyone noticing. Course, that didn't stop them from pinning it on me. What happened? Ino questioned with interest. The younger Naruto had been dismissed as a troublemaker at best, but if she really thought about it, he had managed to pull off some amazing stuff for someone who wasn't even a genin yet. How many 12-year-olds managed to outrun Anbu, or put one over the Hokage? Before he could answer, a soft rap at the doorway interrupted their conversation. Sayuri had returned with their selection of appetizers, along with 2 small bowls of miso soup. The tray she hefted with one hand was astonishingly full, showing that the girl had some impressive arm strength to be able to so effortlessly carry it around. As their attendant set the plates of food before them, both blondes could feel their stomachs rumble a little when the tantalizing scents of the fresh-made dishes wafted up to tickle their noses. Ino immediately seized her pair of chopsticks as soon as Sayuri had retreated from the room, choosing to snatch up one of the perfectly fried golden gyozas from the platter. Her taste buds sent their approval to her brain, lighting up her reward centers in a chemical frenzy. The Mindwalker felt the urge to shudder at the pure ecstasy assaulting her mouth at the moment. Try the jellyfish, suggested Naruto enthusiastically, who had already polished off a quarter of the pickled seafood dish. The cool crunchy noodle-like tentacles had a mildly sour kick to them, but the copious amounts of sesame seeds scattered throughout helped counteract the acidity to create a savory fusion of flavor that was pleasantly refreshing. So what happened? Repeated Ino as she took an experimental sip of her cooling miso soup. It had the perfect balance of tofu and seaweed, just the way she liked it, delicious. Well, Naruto said after he swallowed his mouthful of the lightly battered tempura shrimp he had been chewing on. IT is pretty stringent with their security checks of just about everyone and everything that goes into the facility. Ino nodded sagely. The amount of time it took her to go from the entrance to the underground facility was ridiculous. There was even some talk about adding a cavities search into the day-to-day security protocols. Luckily that had been quickly axed due to the uproar amongst staff when the idea had first been proposed. Ibiki was still grumbling about it, wondering if they were all just that squeamish or if there were that many people sneaking contraband in using their rectal cavities. But there is one person they never check, Naruto said with a wicked smile. Wait, really? Ino felt a stab of anger at the injustice of it. She had to stand still and pretty much be groped all over for 15 minutes at 4 separate stations every day, but some clown got to just waltz on through security? Who? she demanded. The Hokage, Ino paused in her fury to stare blankly at Naruto for a moment, her mind trying to process what she had just been told. You impersonated the Hokage, she said slowly. I don't even have words for that. You do know what treason is, right? That thing where you do something that's a crime against your village and ends up with you either thrown in a cell in IT for the rest of your life or have your head removed by sharp pointy objects. Naruto chuckled and waved his chopsticks at her. That only applies to ninjas. I was still a student back in the day, so I'd have gotten a slap on the wrist at worst. Course if I did it now. Ino rested her forehead on the table to cool her overactive mind. I am on a date with a moron, she moaned pathetically. Naruto poked at her scalp with his chopsticks, prodding her to see if she'd get back up. It's not like I prank people anymore, besides you have to admit it was pretty funny. What did you do? She asked, getting back to a more proper sitting position. It wouldn't do to have Sayuri walk in and see them acting like 3-year-olds. I hid random sex toys throughout the office during my inspection, laughed Naruto. Damn, I wish I had been there when Ibiki walked into his office and found the blow-up doll in his chair. Ino had to cover her mouth with both hands to stifle the laughter threatening to burst forth as she could imagine the exact expression on her boss face. That might explain the strap on dildo Anko keeps on top of her desk. Oh god, I gave that to Anko. Asked a horrified Naruto. She doesn't use that on the prisoners, does she? Wait, what am I saying? Of course she does, poor bastards. Surprisingly, Anko just has to threaten them with it. Most men crack like an egg when they see the size of that thing strapped to her waist. Nah. More often than not she tends to bring it home to experiment with Kakashi, said the blonde girl, forming air quotes with her fingers. TMI, TMI, shouted Naruto frantically with fingers in his ears. I did not need to know that. The couple steadily worked away at their appetizers, trading stories of their genin days as they polished away the food. Everyone had done the Tora the cat mission, and no one managed to catch that little beast without some harrowing story of having to dive into rapid rivers full of flesh-eating fish. Marching through swamplands filled with sinkholes, or in Naruto's case kill and cut open a giant snapping turtle that had swallowed the little furball when it had gotten into the training area 44, aka the Forest of Death. The temptation to leave the cat in the slow-moving reptile and call it in as a failure had been great, but Kakashi had quickly nixed that conspiracy amongst his genin. Seriously? Demanded Ino in disbelief. Honestly, I thought it was just a rumor. You really ran into one of the 7 swordsmen of the mist on your first C rank? Ran into him and killed him, confirmed the blonde male, jabbing his chopsticks at her to emphasize his point. Well, Kakashi-sensei did anyways. I ended up fighting Zabuza's apprentice with Sasuke. We were lucky he didn't like to kill people. We would have never made it back from our first C ranker if Haku had taken us seriously. Gotta say, Zabuza was one badass motherfucker. Course it was a bit sad how it all went down. The demon of the mist brought low by chakra exhaustion and a few greedy mercenaries. You have horrible luck with missions, observed the Mindwalker, snatching the last piece of gyoza from the plate while Naruto was still reaching for it. Gloating at his pouty expression, she made sure to chew with her mouth wide open so he could see the last morsel vanish down her throat. Hungry azure eyes roamed her neck region, tracing the motion of each swallow, occasionally making its way lower. He was by no means hiding the fact that he was checking her out, something that brought an odd feeling of satisfaction to the blonde girl. Real classy, jeered the Jinchuriki. Ino stuck her tongue out at her date in reply. She was doing that lot tonight, wasn't she? Sayuri appeared at the doorway to take away their now empty dishes, prompting a suspicious glance from both shinobi, though they didn't say anything in her presence. You think she's spying on us? Whispered Naruto conspiringly after she left. I mean, how else did she know when we were done eating? Lucky guess. Asked Ino skeptically. Their suspicion was quickly waylaid as their server returned with their main course. The ladies last evening certainly delivered in terms of the presentation of their food. The white curry udon was exactly as advertised. Not a speck of color besides white could be seen in the dish. Everything from the broth down to the vegetables had been dyed a milky hue, turning the normally hearty presence of the soup dish into a tranquil pond. It was alike staring at a Zen garden except in food form. Ino's sushi dish had an even more mysterious appearance. At first she wasn't sure what Sayuri had set before her. It was a plate covered by a large glass dome filled with a cloudy white mist that obscured the contents from view. When the cover was removed, the vapor quickly dissipated, but not before chilling Ino's skin as it escaped into the atmosphere. The 20 pieces of hand-crafted sushi were placed inside a ceremonially decorated bento box, complete with painstaking artwork depicted lovingly along the sides. There were exactly 20 compartments. Each of the bite-sized morsels contained within a work of art in of itself. It was almost too pretty to eat in her opinion, but she certainly wasn't here to admire at the food. Taking up the steel chopsticks that had been placed in front of her, Ino glanced at the card placed on top of the dish, instructing her to start eating from the top right and moving left and down and starting the process again at the next row, snatching up the first of the tantalizing delicacies, topped with what appeared to be a thinly sliced salmon piece decorated with cod roe. She carefully worked the entire sushi roll in her mouth. Her eyes widened in surprise at the firework of flavors that had exploded on her tongue, nearly choking as the fresh wasabi brushed on the bottom activated like a kick to the face from Rock Lee. The harsh dry stinging in her nose caused tears to well in her eyes, but the enhancement to her palate brought on with the pairing of the spicy mustard was undeniable. Eagerly moving on to the next piece, she was astonished by the way the taste of the perfectly grilled eel harmonized with the leftover essence from her last bite. Quickly chewing through the second sushi piece, she snatched up the third, confirming her suspicion that the flavors of each sequential piece of sushi built upon that lingering taste of the last one. Screw this, thought Ino happily as she munched on the next morsel in the lineup. Naruto isn't getting a single bite. The white curry udon seemed to have found a place in Naruto's heart, judging by the pleased expression as he carefully worked the noodles into his mouth, careful not to splash broth onto his suit jacket. It was almost a shame to see such a masterpiece get eaten. Damn, this is some good stuff, he exclaimed as he took a careful sip of his tea. Glad you didn't order that ramen now? Teased Ino, more like regret, lamented Naruto with a mournful air, probably would have been amazing. Ino chuckled and popped another sushi piece into her mouth. 20 pieces was a lot, but with the way the dish had turned out she'd have happily downed 2 orders even if she regretted it tomorrow. How come you never brought Sakura here? Asked Ino curiously. I mean a fancy place like LLE. A girl could fall for you pretty easily. Naruto grinned disarmingly back at her. Well, that's good to know. How's my progress with you? Averting her gaze, the Yamanaka tried valiantly to ignore the heat building up in her cheeks. Instead, she diverted his flirting with her original question. Don't try to distract me. Why haven't you brought Forehead here before? The whiskered blonde leaned back in his seat, a contemplative look on his face. I don't know, it just never really occurred to me back when I was chasing Sakura. Besides, I doubt Sanji could have pulled off these seats for me until this past year when the owner pretty much named him the de facto manager of the entire place. By then I'd already decided to move on. Really? Ino raised her eyebrows. I mean, this seems like a surefire way to impress a woman. Naruto shrugged. I guess I just never put too much thought into it. I wanted to go out with Sakura because of what she represented to me. If someone like her could accept me, then that meant I had finally made it out of the street life. But I never really gave much thought about what that really meant. Dating's more than just asking someone out and spending time with them. It's getting to know them, both the good and the bad. Maybe I was just too much of a kid to understand that back then. So why me? Ino asked quietly. What makes me so special? Is it just cause you slept with me? I mean, you did with Hinata and Tamari too, but I didn't hear about you going out of your way to set something like this up for them. How do you know you're the only girl I've brought here? Naruto questioned with a playful smile. Maybe I bring every woman I want to take home here. Sanji pretty much said you've never been here, reminded Ino with a roll of her eyes. Idly walking his chopsticks across the table, the blonde of Team 7 shrugged after a moment's thought. Maybe you're the first girl I really wanted to impress, Naruto answered uncertainly. An awkward silence fell between the two shinobi as they both went back to eating, each lost in their own thoughts. What was Ino supposed to say to that? Naruto seemed to genuinely want to have a relationship with her. But she just wasn't sure. Despite her good looks, or maybe because of them, Ino had a rather bad dating record. Most the men she had gone out with had in the end had only one thing in mind, and she had quickly denied them that when she found out their aims. It made her a bit wary and suspicious when it came to guys declaring their interest in her. Maybe all this fancy attempts at wooing her was all a ploy just to get her back in bed with him, though maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing. The Mindwalker ruthlessly crushed that last thought, not wanting to give her mind time to explore that avenue too deeply. Time to change the subject. So what's it like living on your own? Asked Ino after a moment of racking her brain. She had been tempted to move out of her parents' place for a while now, but the allures of coming home and having someone take care of you had kept her with her family so far. Besides, she actually managed to save what she earned instead of blowing it all on rent and food. Naruto gave her a blank look from across the table. I don't know, it's not like I've lived with anyone before. Well, I mean, is it hard to get by on your salary? I've been thinking about moving out, but it just doesn't seem worth it at this point in my life. The blonde shrugged. I managed to make ends meet, though back earlier in my career it was a lot harder. Gramps paid for my rent up until I actually made genin, but once I got the headband I was getting by on what I could make off D ranks and the pitiful pocket change they hand us as our salary. Ino winced as she recalled just how much that was. She could blow it all in one shopping spree and probably not even get a quarter of what she wanted. Hey, if S-rankers don't pay out, how the heck are you living so well? She asked as the thought occurred to her. Having been inside Naruto's apartment, it certainly wasn't what you would expect of someone getting by paycheck to paycheck. Bounties, he replied simply. That's the one high point on S-rank missions if you're careful and have the time. Bounties? Sure. You're sent deep into enemy territory. You're bound to run into someone famous and worth a lot of money to some other country looking to collect their head. That's my compensation for running an S-op. Ino grimaced as she imagined a bearded Naruto running around with a bloody sack full of heads thrown over his shoulder like some psychopathic Santa Claus and shuddered slightly at the image. I've paged through the bingo books. Some of them are worth a lot. I think Asuma-sensei was somewhere in the millions, she said. How often do you manage to run into someone like that? Surprisingly, not all that often, Naruto laughed. It's not a guaranteed thing, but when you do, the payout's nice. Save up some of that cash instead of spending it all. Some careful investments and voila. No need to worry about money. Investments? She probed, quirking an eyebrow at him. Yeah. I have a stake in 3 companies. One's a shipping business out of Wave Country. A friend of mine came to me with the idea a few years ago looking for capital to fund his venture, and I handed him some cash before I pointed him towards Wave. I also got partial ownership of a coffee bean plantation near Suna and a company that's trying to build skyships. Skyships? Asked Ino in disbelief. That sounds like something out of fiction. Well, it's more like a giant balloon with a ship hull tied to the bottom and propellers on the back, explained Naruto. They already have a prototype that works on a small scale. They just needed funding for building larger ones. I mean, can you imagine it? Flying ships? It'd pretty much negate all the terrain issues we have in traveling. You could bypass bandits and other dangers by floating on overhead, plus they'd make for excellent observation posts in enemy territory. Most jutsus don't have that good of a range. Ino mulled over the idea in her head, not quite able to wrap her mind around a floating ship, or the fact that Naruto of all people had financial investments. She'd heard the term thrown around once or twice at clan meetings, but beyond that she didn't know too much about it. Have you had any returns yet? She asked skeptically. Well, the shipping business is doing well, and the coffee bean plantation's first batch of crop is set to be harvested soon. Most of the money I've made off the shipping company has been funneled into the other 2, so I haven't seen much return yet. But once the skyship manufacturer sets up shop, I figure I can pretty much retire, he replied smugly. Right, like you'd know what to do with yourself if you stopped being a shinobi. Laughing at the gloomy storm clouds forming over her date, Ino continued eating her dish. You're so mean, Ino-chan, moaned Naruto. I call it like I see it, she replied around another mouthful of exquisitely handcrafted sushi. Their good-natured banter continued on throughout dinner, and the 2 blondes took the time to learn more about each other. It really was surprising how little they had known about the other given how long they had been friends, but perhaps that was more due to their association as the Rookie 9 than a real friendship to begin with. The 2 friends finishing off their meal with gusto, unminding of table manners as they fought over the last scraps of food before Sayuri returned to remove the empty dishes. If their attendant felt anything was out of place seeing the blondes throwing wadded-up napkins at one another from across the table, she masterfully hid her feelings on the matter. For dessert, they had ordered a simple pecan chocolate chip waffle dish served with 3 scoops peanut butter ice cream drizzled with a fine white sauce that Ino couldn't get enough of. Inexplicably, there were also strips of crispy thick-cut hickory smoked bacon ringing the edges of the plate, a strange combination to be sure, but it went unexpectedly well together. Ino had been pleasantly surprised when Naruto had asked Sayuri for the peanut butter ice cream in place of the vanilla, flattered that he had remembered the small detail she had shared with him about herself. The amount of care and attention he showed her was both exhilarating and distressing at the same time. She couldn't help but find herself intrigued by her blonde companion. The idea of them being together slowly gaining traction much to her shock. Ino was currently at the pleasantly buzzed stage of drinking. Not so much so that she wouldn't be able to walk straight. But she was beginning to find everything funny. The young couple had migrated outside to their balcony table. Enjoying the refreshing night air now that the sun had set and the stars were out, the cloudless night was picture perfect. The full moon seeming unusually close to the planet as it loomed overhead. A nearly empty bottle of wine of an unknown brand and year that Sayuri had brought them along with their dessert lay midway between the 2 shinobi, their mostly empty glasses held loosely in hand. No, seriously, laughed Ino as she took another sip from her wine. Why the heck are you so afraid of ghosts? I don't know, groaned Naruto as he leaned back in his seat, one arm thrown casually over the backrest. It just doesn't seem right, you know. If they do exist, God knows how many are following me around after the number of people I've killed. An imaginary line of angry dead shinobi following the Jinchuriki everywhere popped into Ino's head and she tittered at the image. It's not funny, Ino, he whined. I mean, what if they do exist? Even if they were, they can't do anything to you, Naruto.
Well, I don't want a bunch of dead assholes hanging around watching me poo. Ino spluttered out a mouthful of wine as she cackled at her date's distressed retort, the picture of a couple hundred dead spirits trying to squeeze themselves in a stall with Naruto squatting over the toilet sent her into stitches. Naruto continued to pout as the pretty mind walker fought to regain her breath. After reducing it to a handful of giggles, Ino reached for another refill of the tasty red wine only to have a few drops come out. Ah, she said with a crestfallen face. I think that's enough drinking for the moment, said Naruto gently as he took the now empty bottle of liquor out of her hands. You can never have too much alcohol, contradicted Ino with a childish glower. She shivered slightly as the cool night air blew against her exposed skin. Damn, she could feel her nipples getting hard. Sneaking a peek at Naruto to see if he had noticed, she was startled by her own disappointment when it appeared he hadn't. Seriously, what was wrong with her? Oh yeah, you remember what happened the last time we got drunk? He asked with a sly grin, the whisker marks adding to his foxy expression. Heat crept into her skin as she blushed attractively. Oh yes, Ino remembered, vividly. Shit, her nipples were getting harder. No way he wasn't going to notice now. Why did she decide to wear the thin lacy bra again? Fine, she pouted. Naruto glanced at his timepiece and frowned slightly. Well, it seems we have a decision to make, Ino-chan. Oh yeah, the Yamanaka leaned forward on the table with her head propped on one arm, making sure to angle herself so that plenty of cleavage was exposed. A smirk graced her lips when Naruto took a glance down at the open invitation, then doubled back for another peek when he noticed her predicament caused by the chilly air. She preened internally as she watched him swallow visibly before tearing his eyes away from her chest area, appreciative smile curving his lips. It's 10:30 at the moment. If we leave now I can get you home a little after 11 o'clock, probably at an hour that won't have your father camping out at my apartment waiting to slit my throat. But, she asked eagerly, Ino was having a great time and she wasn't ready for the night to be over just yet.
Naruto smiled warmly as he reached a hand out across the table, palm up. Ino placed her hand across his and returned his grin when he closed his hands around hers. But I am having a lot of fun with you tonight and I'd love to spend more time with you if you'd like the same, he continued, fingers intertwining with hers. Ino bit her lip in silent contemplation. Part of her was very keen to carry on with their date, to explore where this growth in their relationship would lead. She felt like she had gotten to know a bit more of the real Naruto. The side he rarely showed anyone, not even Sakura. Plus he was just an all-around fun guy to hang out with. Naruto had already heaped surprise after surprise on her tonight. No doubt he probably had something else planned. Yet the eagerness was also what made the decision so difficult. She was having the time of her life, enamored with his charisma and more than a little drunk. Letting this continue was dangerous, because she knew all too well how it might end if she let it, and every minute she spent in his company was making it that much easier for her to allow herself to let go. You'd risk daddy skinning you alive just to have a bit more time with me? She asked softly, searching his eyes for deceit. Plenty of boys had claimed similar things in the past, but when push came to shove it had all been empty boasting to impress her. The eyes were the best measure of honesty. Even the best liars couldn't avoid the natural ticks in the window to their souls, not unless they were sociopaths. Ino was relatively certain Naruto wasn't a sociopath. I'd take on all of Otto for one more minute with you, Ino-chan, he whispered huskily. His gaze was unwavering, no hesitation present. Belly warm with wine and fuzzy feelings that needed further exploration, Ino graced him with a heartfelt smile. Mind made up. Alright Uzumaki, you get to enjoy a few more hours of my company. The Mermaid's Palace was an innovative fusion of nightclub, casino, diner and entertainment district all by itself on board a massive retrofitted cruise liner that was always seen pedaling about on the Kappa Lake no matter the hour. The former luxury Ocean Voyager boasted 3 separate dance floors, 2 dining halls, a theater, a casino, 2 decks dedicated for shopping alone, a floor for entertainment, multiple swimming pools on its open decks, and rooms at the bottom of the hull for those who wanted to rent out a space for more private activities. Its reputation was a well-earned one. Hailed as one of the hottest hangouts for the young and wealthy, there were hushed whispers that perhaps the owner of the Mermaid's Palace was involved with less reputable business ventures, but the air of danger only added to its mystique and allure for those seeking excitement. Unsurprisingly, people flocked from all across the elemental nations to party on board the luxury liner or at least wait in line to try to get on board in most cases. Naruto and Ino arrived at Dock 17 where an unending crowd sought entrance to the party ship waited impatiently for a ferry to bring them on board the boat once it was deemed there was enough room for more guests. The line of humanity that snaked together in the immeasurable waiting queue was suffocating to even look at. Ino had been fairly certain that they'd have to turn back and find another place to go to once she laid eyes on the horde of people seeking entry. Despite her good looks, she doubted they'd be getting in just because she batted her eyelashes at the bouncer. But lo and behold, Naruto had marched right up to the head of the line as if he owned the place, not even pausing to acknowledge the disgruntled people glaring at them from the line. Judging by how quickly the entry guard pulled back the red velvet rope holding the crowd back when they spotted him, Ino wouldn't be surprised if Naruto had in fact neglected to mention that he had some ownership of the ship during their lengthy dinner conversation. There had been much protest from the line, especially the group of young women who had just been refuted entrance despite flashing enough skin to put a strip club to shame. The massive dark-skinned bouncer had scowled and told the complainers to shut the hell up or get out of line if they didn't like it. The griping continued, but no one moved. Naruto led Ino to a smaller, more private boat. Away from the crowded ferry most the other disgruntled line waiters were being packed onto. The reserved boat was a miniaturized version of the larger transport, with generous spacing where a group of less than 10 could seat themselves comfortably in the lavishly designed interior. Despite the other boats still being grounded, a nod to the captain from Naruto had them taking off for the glowing dot in the distance without further ado. 10 minutes of light snacking washed down with some soft drinks and they had found themselves on board the massive cruise, unmolested by the security personnel that had simply moved aside as they waltzed past the checkpoint where dozens of others were being searched. Ino was getting ready to interrogate her date on just what kind of connections he had with the luxury cruise party line, but put it off in favor of admiring the dance floor they found themselves on once past security. Hundreds of people were swaying and bouncing to the psychedelic beat blasting from the speakers, the semi-darkness and blinking strobe lights illuminating flashes of sweat and skin. The dizzying flashes of color was a shock to the senses. Ugly if examined closely, but absolutely mesmerizing if you weren't sober. It was doubtful anyone here was sober. People rocked to and fro in time to the sound and slight shift of the waves, all dancing like it was the last night of their lives. There was something primal about the movement of the dancers, as if the music called up something so old and deep within humanity that the higher conscious couldn't truly express in anything less than motion. The blonde girl found herself on the end of more than one lecherous stare as they cut through the crowd, but the gawkers quickly looked away when Naruto shot them a menacing glare. The few that had dared reach for her quickly withdrew their hands when he bared his teeth at them in a growl noticeable even through the din. Naruto rested his hand on her lower back gingerly, gently steering them between frantically rushing club goers. His large frame easily shielded her from being jostled by the other guests on board the ship, more than once sending some inattentive person reeling backwards. Though she didn't need the protection, Ino greatly appreciated the gesture. The bar was crowded, but Naruto had volunteered to get them some beverages while they considered their next plan of action. After receiving a warning not to accept any drinks from strangers, and returning with a "Do you think I am stupid?" glare, Ino found herself alone by the tables, watching the writhing crowd with interest. Clubbing had never really been her thing, but she'd been to a few with the girls, none quite as big as this one though. "Well, hello there, little lady, you look like you could use some company tonight." Ino turned and raised a golden eyebrow at the three men who had approached her from behind. The dark markings on their skin branded them as members of the Yakuza, criminal empires that spanned beyond villages and even nations. These sophisticated mobsters did everything from threatening the local mom and pop store for protection money to running the intercontinental opium trade that had its poisonous fingers in just about every walk of life. On general principles, shinobi didn't mess with these ruffians unless they were directly related to the mission objectives. Ninja might be stronger, faster and better killers, but there were a lot of Yakuza, enough that if they ever decided to start trouble it would prove troublesome, to borrow Shikamaru's catchphrase, even for a village full of shinobi. "I am fine, thank you," she replied tersely, turning to move away. She found her arm trapped by the lead man, a shirtless thug whose eyes gleamed with naked lust as he stared at Ino. The blonde felt a shiver of disgust build in the base of her spine. There was hardly any doubt what this vulgar animal wanted with her. Don't be like that, pretty lady," he leered, eyes roving across her exposed skin. "The boys and I have a private room below where you can entertain us, only seems fair, after all you were on our boat." The two other men sniggered, moving forward eagerly, their intentions clear. Ino considered her options. She could stab them. The kunai she had on her was more than adequate for her to kill them with. Hell, she could do it with her bare hands. Of course that might bring an untold amount of trouble on her head if someone recognized her, but by the gods that was tempting. Screaming went against her pride as a kunoichi, and it was doubtful she could be heard over the noise or if anyone would even help anyways. Jerking her hand back, she glared at the three men. one of her hands snaking towards a hidden kuani. I am warning you, asshole. Touch me again and you'll regret it, Ino snarled. Oh feisty, slurred one of the goons drunkenly. I like that. You're probably a screamer, aren't ya? Why don't you come downstairs, scream for us, pretty bird? I promise, well, be gentle. We have a problem here. Ino had never felt so relieved to hear Naruto's voice before.
Turning to scold the blonde for taking so long and leaving her alone to be harassed by these low-lifes.
She felt the words die in her mouth when she caught a glimpse of his scowling visage. There was something decidedly different about Naruto as he stood rigidity with hands drawn into fists by his side, body tensed up like a coiled spring ready to explode outwards with violence. The steely quality in his cobalt eyes seemed wholly unfamiliar on the normally kind-faced Jinchuriki, a dangerous presence that raised the hair on the nape of her neck. Who the foo? The threats being issued from the three men fell still as their mouths hung open when they caught sight of him. Evidently it wasn't just her. Holy shit. Uzumaki, blurted out the lead man, eyes widening hilariously. His frightened gaze darted over to Ino, who had suddenly found herself with a warm firm arm wrapped possessively around her waist. The motion seemed so natural that she barely noticed it happening. She watched in bemusement as the thug's face took on an ashen countenance. It didn't seem possible, but the thug's eyes widened even further. She's your woman. The Yakuza shrilled, doing a mighty impression of a frightened prepubescent boy. His cronies had taken on a deathly pale appearance, mouths still agape. The lead man took a step back hesitantly as if unsure of whether he wanted to run or not. Despite not knowing what was going on, Ino saw an amusing opportunity to exploit the situation based on their reaction. Wrapping herself around Naruto's shoulder, she nestled herself closer to him as if to emphasize to them just who she was with. The hand at her waist tightened noticeably, but not to the point it was painful. Damn right she is, glowered the demon host, eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. I'll ask you again. Do we have a damn problem? His voice deepened into a frighteningly inhuman growl as he punctuated his statement with a threatening noise from the back of his throat. All three men snapped ramrods straight and bowed sharply at the waist, all arrogance and pretentious airs gone. 1,000 apologies, stammered out the leader while his lackeys quavered in their position of respect. We hadn't known she was with you. A sharp thrill of fear stabbed at Ino as she felt the killing intent boiling off her date. Beads of sweat had broken out visibly on the three men's forehead, but they remained in their submissive positions, suffering through the moment of silence like cornered animals. After what seemed like an eternity, the dangerous aura finally dimmed, allowing them to breathe again. Disappear, snarled Naruto harshly. The three men scrambled over each other to get away after his abrupt dismissal, racing to see who could put the most distance between them and the spiky-haired blonde. Ino let her hold on Naruto loosen, but his own remained securely around her waist, a pleasant reassuring weight. Ino, he murmured lowly, drawing her closer, are you all right? Chuckling at his concern, Ino cocked her head to one side, examining her date. Even through the dim lighting, she could see that the whisker marks had definitely thickened, and this time it was most certainly not her imagination. On impulse she leaned forward and pecked him on the cheek, noting how the whisker marks were not in fact just skin aberrations like most thought, but actual grooves that cut deep into the epidermis. I am a big girl, Naruto. I can take care of myself, Ino reassured him playfully. Thanks for the save though. I was gonna start stabbing people and that probably wouldn't have ended well for anyone. She wiggled her kunai to emphasize her point, hoping the slight levity would calm him down. Seeing no reaction, Ino searched his eyes, startled to see flecks of gold glint unnaturally in the normally clear watery sapphire. His breathing was still more labored than normal, a sharp motion in his chest that she could feel against her form due to the closeness of their bodies. Naruto continued to hold her close, his grip relaxing but still protective. Ino could feel a hot slick dampness that was starting to build up between her legs, but all thoughts of embarrassment was out the window as she remained firmly captivated by his intense gaze that still radiated hostility towards those men who had threatened her. The naked aggression present was turning her on like nothing before. Something about having Naruto so jealously possessive over her made him suddenly all the more attractive. A man who knew what he wanted and wasn't afraid to defend what he considered his. She could get used to that. The noise and sights of the people around them seemed to fade away to nothing. Ino leaned forward unconsciously, lips parted, noting absently how Naruto was inching towards her as well. Well, Mad Dog Uzumaki still has what it takes to send my men running like the little puppies that they are. The amused purr broke the two blondes out of their trance, and both took a hasty step back, cheeks flaming with mortification at their interrupted moment. The woman that had addressed them was garbed in a deep mahogany dress with a ferocious golden dragon emblem that coiled around her like a living thing. She had a striking face that overshadowed her full bosom, the classic beauty of her appearance almost unreal to take in. Dark midnight locks fell around her shoulders like a luscious drape, her ruby lips clamped sensually around a long wooden pipe sending smoke curling in the air. The only thing that marred her perfection was the rough uneven skin around the left side of her neck, the remnants of a burn etched in the form of a spiderweb pattern that stretched down past the plunging neckline of her dress. She did nothing to hide the blemish, bearing the remnants of her wound proudly for the world to see. Around the Amazonian beauty, standing like silent stone sentries, were half a dozen sharply dressed men fanned out in a protective circle around their leader. All bore the same dark web marking on the left side of their neck, just barely visible over the collar of their dark suits. Homage to the woman before them. The assortment of blades and various other instruments of war had partygoers carefully skirting around the hostile-looking group. Crap. More Yakuza, thought Ino, tensing up. She was startled to notice how her companion relaxed visibly at the appearance of this woman rather than get more agitated. Madam Sin, Naruto intoned, dipping his head respectfully, though there was a hint of mockery in the gesture. It has been far too long. The older woman shook her messy raven curls with a huffy toss of her head. Indeed it has, Naru-chan. I hear you've been back for almost a year now. It took you that long to come visit me? A pout would not have looked out of place given her playful tone of voice, but her glacial features were all business. Ino could feel the curiosity burning inside her. There were so many questions she wanted to ask at that moment. Why were the Yakuza scared of Naruto? Who was this woman? Just how much of his past was he hiding from his friends? From her? Naruto laughed sheepishly, rubbing the back of his head with a free hand, unaware of the hole being burned in the side off his skull by a set of curious eyes. Time keeps getting away from me. I was planning to come see you, honest. The regal-looking woman rolled her eyes. Why don't you introduce me to your lady friend here? Ino Yamanaka. Meet Misato Kurosaki aka Madam Sin, said Naruto as the women exchanged a polite but rigid inclining of their heads. If there is something illegal, questionably legal or questionably real, she's the woman to go to if you need to get your hands on it. Flatterer, reproached Misato expressionlessly with a puff of her pipe. Don't think a few honeyed words will make me forgive you so easily. You'll have to earn your redemption, Naru-chan. Ino felt somewhat self-conscious as the older woman eyed her up and down, not bothering to hide the fact that she was examining the younger girl. She was hardly insecure about her appearance, but Misato would put most models to shame despite her scars. After a long moment of feeling suddenly very naked despite her clothing, the Mindwalker let loose a breath she hadn't known she was holding when those penetrating dark eyes moved away from her. Not a bad catch, Uzumaki, the smoking woman finally decided. First girl you bring around and ID give her a 9 out of 10, she wild in bed? Ino's mouth hung open in utter shock at the shameless question that had just been issued about her, in front of her. The group of stoic-looking Yakuza didn't even so much as bat an eyelash at the crass inquiry. Like an animal, affirmed Naruto with a teasing squeeze to Ino's side, causing her to blush harder. Well, I'll up it to a 10 then, the older woman commented. You taking her to the Velvet Room? Nah, we're just here to mingle and have fun, replied Junchuriki with a shrug. You treat her right or you'll hear from me, got it? Threatened the older woman with a stern glare. Naruto raised his hands in front of him in mocking defense, earning himself a scowl on top of the sharp glance. Returning her harsh gaze to Ino, Misato gave her another once-over. If this idiot gives you any trouble, come find me and I'll straighten him out. But fair warning, little girl, if you hurt my Naru-chan, shinobi or not, I'll have you and your entire family feed the fish at the bottom of Kappa Lake. And with that, she turned and gave Naruto a curt nod and sauntered away. Her contingent of bodyguards formed a human barricade around her, easily pushing through the crowd to allow her a personal space no one else was afforded. Feeling oddly threatened even though the woman had been a civilian, Ino reacted the only way she knew how, by punching Naruto in the arm, hard. OWW, he whined, rubbing at the sore spot where her fist had collided. What was that for, Ino-chan? I can't believe you said that, she shrieked, face alight with indignity. Her date smirked and snaked his arm back around her waist, closing their distance. Ino squirmed angrily in his grip, but felt her breath hitch when the irate fury wilted at the sudden intimate proximity between them. His naturally musky scent, unhidden by cologne or deodorant, tickled her nose pleasantly, a nutty fragrant lightly spiced with something exotic. Nothing untrue was said, rumbled the blue-eyed blonde, his voice dropping down to a low octave that was more felt in the chest than heard by the ear. God, it wasn't fair. How can anyone have such an effect on her? Her thighs quivered, as if in response to his voice. She was going to wet her panties at this rate if he didn't stop doing that territorial alpha male impression of his. Falling into the friendly embrace he was giving her, Ino sighed as her anger melted away in his arms. Her face rested against his chiseled chest, her nipples perked up in reaction to his scent, which was slowly engulfing her as she rested in his gentle hold. Jerk, she mumbled sullenly into his suit jacket, resentful at how effortlessly he had diffused her. Where's my drink? Aw crap, groaned Naruto. I left before the bartender finished when I saw those clowns hassling you. Come on, sighed Ino, towing him by his hand. I'll come with you this time. After the two finally managed to retrieve their beverages, a citrusy cocktail for Ino and tumbler of amber liquid on ice for Naruto, they settled at a recently vacated table, one of those tiny round ones that were too tall to be practical, requiring chairs that were so high up that even sitting on it when sober was a dangerous feat. So, gonna tell me why a bunch of yaks are running scared from you, mad dog Uzumaki? Ino asked sarcastically after taking a sip of her drink. Naruto had suggested it, and she couldn't disagree with the taste, just enough sour to offset the bitterness of the liquor with a sweet aftertaste that affectionately balanced out the pH level inside her mouth. This was what alcohol was supposed to taste like in her opinion, contrary to what hard liquor fanatics might claim. The demon host turned away and looked out into dancing crowd, the surge of humanity all lively and stirring to the tune of the DJ. A singular organism reacting to the sound and light stimulation in the environment. Ino didn't push further, knowing that her friend was simply gathering his thoughts on how much he wanted to share with her. By the time he returned his attention back to the blonde girl, she had managed to finish off half of her drink. Life wasn't easy for me as a genin, he conceded with a sigh. Old man Cage couldn't help me once I got the headband, and even before then his hands were tied. Too many people would have cried favoritism if he gave me more support. Hell, he risked his title and authority just to make sure I had a roof over my head. I never would have been able to live on my own and put food on the table with my earnings as a genin, not with the way the villagers charged me anyways. Ino scowled sympathetically as she thought about all the people that had made Naruto's life hard. She really had to wonder how growing up like that he hadn't turned out similar to Gaara when they had first met him. It would hardly have been surprising if he had. Assholes, she groused, earning her an appreciative upwards turn of the lip from her friend. There was another long spell of silence as he examined the crowd intently. Finally he turned, opening his mouth several times and pausing, as if unsure how to phrase what he wanted to say. I had to do some side jobs for a while to keep things going. I earned a bit of a reputation with Underworld because of that, he finally bit out, discomfort evident in his slouched posture. The Mindwalker placed her glass down and gave her fellow shinobi a hard stare when he did not elaborate. Naruto, you know we can't seek outside employment once we've taken the oath, that's treason. Naruto snorted dismissively. Yeah, well, treason kept me warm and full, so fuck the asshole that put down those rules. Where were they when I needed a meal? Or when I needed to pay for heat to keep me from freezing during the winter? Ino looked away from the angry blonde, feeling for his situation, but torn knowing her friend had broken one of the cardinal rules of being a shinobi, loyalty above all else. Theirs was a profession that lied, cheated and murdered, but even shinobi held some things sacred, otherwise what did they have left? But loyalty was a two-way street. No one had stepped up to help Naruto when he needed it. Ino certainly hadn't. He had done what was necessary to survive. How can she fault him for that? You gonna report me? Naruto gruffly asked. What? Asked Ino startled. Of course not. The look of frank relief on his face was rather insulting. Who do you take me for? She demanded with an incensed huff. I am not so shallow to turn in someone for trying to survive, let alone a friend. Naruto sighed and reached out to take her agitated hands in his, rubbing a silent apology into her flesh with his thumb. The two blondes fell into a comfortable silence, nursing their drinks and watching the crowd, their hands slowly becoming more intertwined as time passed. So, did you work for Madame Sin? Ino probed, breaking their silence. The Jinchuriki barked a laugh at her question. Worked for is the wrong word. Madame Sin was a title she gained after she came into power. He gestured languidly at their surroundings. Back when I ran with her there wasn't all this fancy shit, she was just Misato, a fellow former street urchin albeit older and more settled in life. So what's her story? Inquired Ino, unable to contain her nosy side. You don't just end up the head of a Yakuza gang by accident. Naruto stared considering at her across the rim of his glass, as if weighing his words. I don't know her whole story. I don't think anyone does but her. I know she's got swift fingers. Must have worked as a pickpocket lifting wallets at some point. She knows her way with words a bit too well, especially with the upper class folks, so maybe she worked the skin trade for a while. Fights as well anyone who grew up having to defend their sleeping territory every night. But this is all just conjecture. All I know for certain is that she grew up on the streets like me, clawed her way out of the poverty and misery. The ice in his glass clinked together melodiously as he swirled the amber liquid. His tired smile turned grim as the story continued. Then she met a man, a merchant's son, Jinshu Yukihara. He took her from the fighting and living day by day, showed her life meant more than just the next meal, gave her affection, eventually loved her, and maybe, just maybe she learned to love him back. They were betrothed, set to be married, and for a while Misato allowed herself to believe that she had escaped the life of an alley jackal. Ino listened to the tale being weaved, mesmerized by the quality of his voice and emotions present. It was obviously more than just a story to him. It was a commentary of his own life, a reflection of similar suffering. She had an idea of how it was going to end already. There are no real fairy tales in life. What happened? She asked quietly. Turns out her fiancé's family were getting powerful a bit too quickly for some of the old blood's taste. They hired some Yakuza to threaten them, but they wouldn't be cowed, so they did what Yakuza does best. Ino looked away as he drew a thumb across his neck with a macabre smile.
By the time I met her she was as disillusioned as it got. She had given up on life, lost hope and all that shite, but there was still a fire that burned in her. You don't survive the streets by letting every loss weigh you down. You get angry and channel it towards something, sometimes constructive, most time destructive. Misato was ready to die, but she was determined to take those bastards that had robbed her of her happy ending down with her.
How did you two meet? She asked interestedly when she had regained her composure. Funny story that, laughed Naruto. She was running from some yaks she had pissed off, killed a couple of their buddies with a crossbow. Just my crap luck that she ended up breaking into my apartment to hide. I came home to find a bunch of tattooed skinheads about to rape a beaten woman in my home. You can imagine how I reacted. So you threw in your lot with her to help her gain vengeance? Didn't take you for the crusader type, Naruto. Hell no, chuckled the blonde male. She didn't tell me that until a couple years later. Nah. I was an angry kid back then. I pranked people cause it felt good to get back at them without really hurting anyone. That would have gotten me in some serious trouble. Naruto stared reflectively into his drink, a bitter smile on his face, but deep down I think just wanted to hurt people, the same way they had hurt me. I didn't understand why I was suffering. Maybe I thought if I hurt them on the outside they'd understand the pain I felt inside, I don't know. He took a long sip from his whiskey glass, taking the time to mull over his thoughts before continuing. But I recognized the pain I saw in her eyes, so I offered her a place to stay for a while, had a few more unwanted visitors come by while she was healing up, but I took care of them. She saw the potential in having an academy student backing her up and offered me a cut of whatever we could take from the bastards we tangled with. I needed money for food so I didn't think twice, and the rest is history. The Jinchuriki raised his tumbler up in a silent toast to his sordid past, his face twisted into a bitter parody of a smile. And somewhere along the way you two managed to birth a criminal empire, Ino remarked dryly. Naruto shrugged, knocked back the rest of his beverage before stealing a sip from her glass, smirking smugly as she sulked protectively over her cup. I ran with her back when it was just the two of us against the world. By the time we finally caught up with the man who had been in charge of the gang that had killed her fiancé, she had her own crew, finances, territory, the whole head gangster package. I pulled out after I graduated from the academy and we sort of went our separate ways for a while. He stared absent-mindedly at the empty glass he was twirling on the table. Light reflected off the clear surface of the cup as it spun on the edge of its rim. Ino took a sip from her glass as she waited patiently for him to start up again. Finally the movement of the glass came to a halt. She went on to look for the family that had ordered the hit on her lover and I moved on to Team 7. I did odd jobs for her now and again. Things her crew wasn't suited for. She would take care of my rent for me. Occasionally I'd find money stuffed under my doorway when my bank account looked particularly slim. I never did ask how she knew. The blonde's expression turned gloomy, pain evident in his grimace. Then old man Cage died. Ino's eyes softened when she saw the sad demeanor Naruto had taken on. Even after almost 5 years it seems Sarutobi's passing still bothered him. She hadn't known the longest reigning Cage of Konoha very well, but she recalled a grandfatherly man who frequently stopped by the academy to encourage the students. It had been a dark day for all Leaf Shinobi when the disciple of the first and second Hokage had passed on to the next life. It was a tough time for me, but I thought I could stick it out, that things would get better. Like Misato, I had come to believe that maybe I had finally crawled my way out of that shitty existence. Even if old man Cage was gone, I would live a good life to honor his memory. Snorting in derision, the blonde glared at the clear tumbler he held in his clenched fist. The highball glass cracked audibly and then exploded into shards under the intense pressure of his grip. Ino let out a startled yelp at the unexpected motion. Blood poured from the open wounds on his hand, dyeing the pieces of broken glass as they fell from his lifeless grasp. "Let me see that," she said with concern, gently taking his hand in hers. "Don't bother," Naruto replied curtly, "it'll heal soon enough." Picking the shards of crystal out of the cuts in his hands, she watched in fascination as his skin began to close up from the shallow lacerations. Ino had heard of his unnatural regenerative capability bestowed by the Kyuubi, but this was the first time she had witnessed it directly. It was different from medical ninjutsu. The skin didn't scar over. The bleeding flesh seemed to simply knit back together, not a single sign of previous damage visible. Sasuke running off to get butt raped by Orochimaru was the final nail in the coffin. The blonde continued sardonically, closing his eyes as she caressed his newly formed skin. I was angry again. Hated the world for being cruel enough to give me hope then taking it away. I wanted to fight, to lose myself in physical pain so that I could take my mind off of the ache that the fuzz ball couldn't heal for me. Ino cupped his hand in hers, stroking them gently without thought. The tender smile she received from him warmed her insides. Misato had gotten into a bit of hot water by then, fell into the same trap as her fiancé's family, got too big too quick. Other Yakuza gangs didn't like the new competition, so they formed an alliance to take her group out. When she came calling, I answered. The Yamanaka watched as he clenched his hand again, observing the way his muscles bulged in that simple flexing motion. When he opened his eyes again they were sad and pensive, a far cry from their usual playfulness. I am not proud of what I did, but I stand by them. I can understand if you don't want anything to do with me anymore. The amount of torment present in his expression cut deep into Ino's heart. She had no idea how much her friend had struggled while she had been gripping away over some silly crush over a boy or complaining about her lazy teammates and sensei. Taking up his hand again in both of hers, she brushed the back of his palm against her cheek, smiling kindly at him. Don't be an idiot, she replied with a teary smile. I've killed plenty of people as well. I can hardly point fingers. I doubt any of them could claim to have not deserved it anyways, though honestly, how much of a challenge could a bunch of Yakuza be? You'd be surprised, said Naruto. A lot of yaks are disgraced samurai who decided honor wasn't worth cutting their bellies open for, or academy flunk-outs who don't know anything but fighting. Many of them can use chakra and know their way around a weapon. The better ones could probably go toe-to-toe with Chunin as long as it's a straight-up fight. Really? Ino asked surprised. Had my share of close calls back in those days. He snorted with a harsh laugh. The Kyuubi wasn't as agreeable with his healing when I was younger, had only put out if my life was in imminent danger. I could heal from most injuries given enough time, but I doubt even I can regenerate a limb or my head. Sounds like there was a war out in the streets, commented Ino thoughtfully. I never heard about this though. How did no one notice? Naruto shrugged. Crime rates used to be much lower back when the Uchiha were policing Konoha, but after Itachi and his little tantrum it pretty much fell to Anbu who were already stretched thin as it was with lower recruit rates during peacetime. No one wanted to go out and die for your country when there was a chance for a good life back at home. He absent-mindedly entwined his fingers with hers, raising her smaller hand up to examine them with curiosity. They were much smaller than his, soft and feminine despite their occupation. Anyways, Anbu is more about keeping foreigners out more than keeping locals from killing each other. A bunch of yaks killing each other meant one less problem they had to deal with down the line. Oftentimes they just disposed of the bodies and cleaned up the aftermath. Well, you hardly seem like the angry kid anymore, prodded Ino. Jiraiya straightened me out when he took me out of the village. Maybe it was having someone who genuinely cared about me enough to involve me in every aspect of their life, or maybe it was seeing the bigger world that put my problems in perspective. The thoughtful look on his whiskered face took out a lot of the age and pain. That was more like the cheerful knucklehead Ino knew. I don't know what it was, but somewhere along the way I made peace with it. Yeah, my life was hard, but I got it better than some and ill work to make it better every day. Grinning at the small smile on his face, Ino decided that as much as she wanted to get him to open up about his past, it was time to move on to something more fun. Tugging the surprised Naruto onto his feet, she dragged him out towards the dance floor. Enough with the doom and gloom, she shouted excitedly over the dull thump of the music, "Show me your moves, Uzumaki." And dance they did. Ino considered herself to be a pretty good dancer. She had taken some classes as a child, but was no stranger to the club variation that was made up of a lot of hip gyration and body grinding. Judging by how skillfully Naruto matched up with her movements, he was no stranger to this particular style either. Ino pulled the chopsticks holding her hair up, allowing her long pale silky locks to fall in a messy bundle carelessly over her shoulder. Something about the wild beat of the heavy bass and the enthralling synth rip being produced made her want to let go, to forget all her worries and problems and just exist in this moment. She grinded her hips erotically against Naruto, shaking her backside enthusiastically in a circular frenzy at a dizzying tempo in beat with the escalating music. Ino had practiced that particular motion in front of a mirror until she had perfected the sexually charged movement just to see if she could, but had never done it for any guy before. As she slowed her dancing in time with the music, His hands clasped the sides of her hips, rough and wanting, but not insecurely so. His breath sounded heavy with desire as he nuzzled her hair, sending a shiver down her spine as he trapped her earlobe in his lips. His teeth nipped at the flap of skin and cartilage, sending jolts of pleasure that caused her spine to arch in response. Ino let loose an intense moan that was lost in the heavy sounds of music and cheering dancers, pressing her backside along Naruto's hardening length as he suckled on the sensitive flesh along the side of her neck, a trail of heat creeping down her skin towards her collarbone. The electricity running through her body at the points of contact with his lips was almost terrifying. Turning, she gazed up at her date, noting the hungry desire in his eyes. Throwing caution to the wind, she pressed up to kiss him. His mouth was warm and soft, practically searing her lips with heat. Knotty hands found a firm grip on her buttocks, the jolt of his touch causing the mindwalker to groan against his lips. He worked his hands, kneading away at her bottom like soft dough. She should be mad. Really, really mad. Naruto was groping her. But damn his skillful hands, she didn't want him to stop no matter how much her quickly silenced rational mind protested.
As Ino continued to kiss him, she felt his heated tongue gently probe her lips. Yielding to his demands, she parted her mouth guardedly, allowing his searching tongue entryway. She had never kissed someone this way before. The alien sensation was odd but not unpleasing. Touching his exploring tongue with her own, the young couple found themselves lost in a haze of pleasure as they made out shamelessly on the dance floor.
Finally acquiescing to the biological needs of the body for oxygen, Ino reluctantly pulled back from Naruto, panting slightly as hormones flooded her body with urgent need. This was not good at all. She wanted so badly to continue what they were doing. Her body was practically screaming at her to pounce him, to take him somewhere dark and quiet away from prying eyes and give him a private show that would leave them both sweaty and most probably very naked. Judging by the perceptive gleam in his eyes, Naruto's brain had the same idea, definitely not good. Tearing herself away from her desires took Herculean effort, more than she thought she could muster, but somehow Ino managed it. She turned around and went back to dancing, shivering as she felt his hands find their way back onto her waist, fingertips trailing mischievously against her body. Ino fervently hoped the aching desire building between her dampening thighs would die down if she wasn't looking at him. No such luck. Soft lips found their way back to her sensitive neckline, trailing teasing nibbles up the reactive skin. Ino groaned audibly as Naruto found his way past her collarbone. She could feel her nipples straining against the fabric of her bra, wanting to feel the attention of his skillful tongue and suckling lips. His throbbing members seemed to have awoken fully now. The heat from the blood-filled organ burning passionately against her buttocks even through his pants and her dress. Gods above and below, if there wasn't the fabric between them, Ino couldn't even begin to imagine how that might feel. Instead of being disgusted as she would have been with any other guy, Ino was finding it harder and harder to turn her mind away from certain activities with the blonde man behind her that she knew she really should be contemplating. A pleading whimper escaped her lips as his fingers slipped their way past the modest cut of her dress and crawling maddeningly slowly up her leg. Rough hard skin scraped their way against her smooth thigh, coming dangerously close to the moist wet lingerie that was the only barrier between his searching hands and her aching womanhood. He traced his fingertips delicately against the damp fabric, stimulating the lips of her opening with electrical fire at the brief contact, and just as quickly, the hand was withdrawn and back at her waist, leaving Ino a quivering mess, barely able to stand if not for the man holding her up from behind. She turned and watched through lidded eyes as Naruto raised the hand that had reached below her dress and licked each finger. Her eyes remained riveted on the pink tongue that flickered against each digit, mind wondering just what that fleshy appendage would feel like elsewhere. After a long moment to recover her senses, Ino turned and wrapped her warms around Naruto's neck, determined not to let him win. The two blondes continued to move and writhe to the wild rhythm being played, their bodies taking on life of their own as they moved from song to song. The night was still young, and so were they, with desire setting their blood afire. The two shinobi danced away the hour, taking time in exploring the new level their relationship had opened up to. "Alright, I am pooped," Ino gasped as she fell into an open bar stool. They had finally retreated from the dance floor when her feet had begun to ache, and now found themselves back at the bar. A much happier Naruto was downing a fruity-looking cocktail complete with a miniature umbrella of a gaudy orange. "Let's go hit up the craps table," he said as their bartender placed the tropical mojito Ino had ordered in front of her. "You sure gambling while sloshed is such a good idea?" She laughed, taking a tentative taste of her drink. "Not bad." "Fine, I want, but I'll watch you." Not quite following the logic but agreeing amiability nonetheless, Ino allowed herself to be led towards the casino area, noting how the room was beginning to sway a bit more than the calm waters of Kappa Lake warranted. Maybe it was time to put a pause on the liquor. Horny Ino plus more alcohol was probably going to equal naked Ino back in bed with an equally naked Naruto doing bad things. The fact that her mind was cheerfully green-lighting that prospect was a major warning sign she had already crossed her thresholds on how much she should be having. The blonde girl blinked stupidly when Naruto produced a gold brick the size of a candy bar from his inner jacket pocket to present to the cashier person. A massive stack of chips was handed back over to the whiskered blonde. Naruto, she asked slowly, why are you carrying around a bar of gold? In case I needed it. When do you ever need a bar of gold? Ino deadpanned. Like right now. Shaking her head, she took some of the chips from him, rolling the 100-piece between her knuckles dexterously despite her state of intoxication, noting how it weighed a lot more than it looked. She had never really gambled before. How hard could it be? Half an hour later she found her answer to that question. Oh my god, laughed Naruto in absolute hysterics, you suck Ino. I've never seen anyone so bad at gambling in my life and I've seen Ba-chan go at it. Ino pouted, it wasn't her fault the stupid dice kept rolling against her. They're cheating. I just know it. The Yamanaka grumbled as they made their way from the casino tables that had pretty much swallowed up all the money he had traded in. Of course they are, chuckled Naruto with a nudge to her ribs, the rules are rigged in favor of the house to begin with. Ino scrunched her nose up cutely and scowled. Naruto smiled and ducked in to steal a quick kiss, pleased when she did not pull away from the public display of affection. The pretty blush adorning her face when he pulled back elicited a second, much longer kiss. Hands clasped together, the two blondes moved to the upper deck of the cruise liner. Wanting to get away from the noise and bright lights within, Ino shivered against the chilly air, beaming at Naruto as he eased out of his jacket and placed it around her. His solid build was made apparent when the suit top easily dwarfed her curvaceous frame. The leftover heat from his body made a toasty ward against the frosty evening air, causing Ino to snuggle happily into its warm embrace. Thick powerful arms added to that layer of protection, gaining him an affectionate peck on his jaw as a reward. The two shinobi found themselves leaning over the guard railing, staring out into the distant harbor in Kyoto. Truly it was the city that never slept. Even now with the hour pushing past 2 in the morning there were still plenty of lights to be seen on shore. Ino rested contentedly against her date, wondering at what point she had gotten so comfortable with him. His figure covering her from behind just felt natural, never mind the fact that his hands were crossed over her boobs. He didn't realize it, but the way the cuffs of his sleeves were rubbing against the hardening tips of her breasts was maddeningly distracting. Of course she wasn't going to tell him that. What would you have been if you hadn't become a shinobi, Ino? They had been trading off on random questions to continue to learn more about one another for a while now, and so far Ino had compiled quite the list of random facts about her blonde friend. Apparently Naruto used to have a teddy bear named Bobo which she found absolutely adorable, or that he had once swallowed a live baby rat on a dare and been sick for 2 days afterwards. Gross. Oh, I don't know, replied Ino thoughtfully as she gazed out at the distant shore. She smiled when Naruto rested his chin on her shoulder, nuzzling her hair affectionately. My family have all been shinobi, you know. It's never been a question what I wanted to do even way back then. I supposed I might have been a dancer, or maybe just been a florist. Ino the dancer, huh? Asked Naruto with a smile. I would have paid to go see you. She giggled at the thought. You make me sound like a stripper. I'd probably have picked a better stage name than that. The blonde girl huddled closer to her personal fleshy heater as a particularly cold gust of wind blew across the deck. The chill only served to contrast against the protective warmth she was receiving from the man holding her. She could really get used to this. Alright, your turn, said Naruto. Ino racked her brain for a question, but the combination of abundant alcohol and late hours seemed to have robbed her mind of the ability to think. Instead, she turned and examined her companion in consideration before pressing her lips against his. The kiss seemed to have caught Naruto off guard, but he quickly rallied and returned the effort. It was different from their little make-out session on the dance floor. There was little lust behind their current affectionate activity. It was simply an exploration of each other, as if they were trying to wordlessly gauge the other person's feeling through the contact of their lips. Finally breaking out of their lip lock, they returned to their prior position, staring out quietly at the bay. There really wasn't much to say. The attraction between them was evidently mutual. Their silent contemplation was broken by a particularly violent shiver from Ino, prompting a look of concern from her date. Maybe it's time to get back, Naruto suggested. Think your dad's broken into my apartment yet? Ino laughed at the thought of her father skulking around inside Naruto's home, kunai in hand waiting to murder the man who had dared take his baby girl out past midnight. The ride back to Konoha was strangely subdued, but the atmosphere was comforting. Part of Ino had been expecting, even wanting a heavy petting and make-out session in the warm carriage that afforded them privacy. Honestly, if he had starting removing her dress and taken her then and there, she not have refuted him. Surprisingly, he hadn't, despite the throbbing length visibly protruding from his lower region. Instead, they had kicked off their shoes and cuddled together on one side of the cushy seats, a thick woolly blanket that had been hidden under the seat compartment covering their bodies. Ino leaned up occasionally for a sleepy kiss, and received a soft stroking to her backside in return, but other than that the couple was content to simply enjoy their close proximity. Their carriage pulled to a halt, signaling an end to their long ride home. Stepping outside after straightening up both themselves in the interior, they were surprised to find themselves at the gates of Konoha rather than inside her. "I am sorry, sir," apologized their chauffeur. "Konoha has explicit rules against vehicles within after hours. I am afraid this is as far as I go." Ino watched as Naruto pulled up to whisper something to their driver, before pressing something into his hands which earned him a gratified smile from the older man. As the carriage turned to leave, Ino called out her thanks to the driver, getting a merry wave over his shoulder. The Mindwalker looped her arm around Naruto's, heedless of the interested looks they were receiving from the graveyard shift gate guards manning the post, nodding in greeting as they walked past. Let the gossip spread, she couldn't care less at this moment, she was walking on cloud 9. Konoha was the opposite of Kyoto at nighttime. There was almost no sound to be heard save for the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustle of some other nocturnal critter going about its business. A shadow would flit by overhead occasionally, a shinobi off on some nighttime errand or returning from a mission. The streetlights were on, dim but illuminating the pavement well enough to safely navigate even given their inebriated state. Naruto was humming happily to himself, content with how the night had gone. He had arranged for this special night as an apology for having taken advantage of Ino. Despite what Ino might say otherwise, he still carried a small amount of guilt for having taken away her first time in a drunken stupor. There had been some tribulation on his part, perhaps because of the genuine attraction he had for Ino, but the night had turned out fantastic, far beyond his wildest dreams. Ino herself was contemplating thoughts of a different nature. While Naruto had been lost in his own world and allowing her to steer them, her feet had unconsciously been making a steady path towards his apartment rather than her home. The Mindwalker bit her lip in an internal struggle, sneaking a look at the happily oblivious blonde at her side. She really wasn't ready for the night to end, and at this moment, despite any lingering doubts she had in her mind, Ino wanted to show Naruto a bit of appreciation for what he had done for her. No man had ever made her feel so special, paid her the kind of attention he had. It was supposed to be a date to get a feel for each other. And she had gotten enough to know that they were more than compatible. It scared her because she had never been in a real relationship before. All prior attraction she thought she had now revealed to be superficial in face of her rising feelings for the man besides her. But as scary as it was also exhilarating. She was right at the edge of the cliff. A single step would send her over into an area she had never been to before. Naruto blinked in surprise when he found them standing in front of the stairwell to his apartment. "Ino," he said, confused. "What?" The blonde-haired goddess before him turned her gaze away shyly. Naruto, unable to find the words, or perhaps just too embarrassed to utter them, Ino instead put her hand around his face and pulled him into a deep, passionate kiss. He reciprocated, though hesitantly as if unsure of his own actions. She trailed her lips down his throat, eliciting a husky growl from the male, her hands running themselves mindlessly against his body, exploring the hard muscles he earned from years of hard work. "Wait, Ino," he murmured against her hair as she worked her hands lower, reaching for his awakening member. She could see the way his length strained against the fabric of his pants, a representation of the physical yearning he was suffering through because of her. Reaching down, Ino ran the edges of her nails against his manhood through his pants, silently delighting at the way he groaned her name. The power and control she had over him at the moment was intoxicating. She couldn't wait to find out just what else she could do to him. "Wait," he growled, seizing her by her shoulders and halting her stroking motion. Ino gazed back into his eyes, startled by the intensity she found there. "Naruto," she whispered softly, gently breaking from his grip. Leaning forward until her lips were near to his ear, she gave his cheek a soft, chaste kiss. "Please, Naruto," she pleaded, taking his hand and resting it against her pounding heart. "I want this." She could see the way his pupils dilated with desire at her words and could feel her own body reacting to his touch. He closed his eyes for a long moment, taking a deep, steadying breath before resting his hands on her shoulders again, putting her at arm's distance. "You have no idea how much I want it too," he murmured softly. "Then why?" she asked, hurt by the sudden rejection. Her eyes searched his face for answers, but found nothing except passionate longing present. "I feel there is something special growing between us," he whispered hoarsely. "I want to nurture it, to see what can happen between us. As much as I would love to take you upstairs right now, I want to take it slow. I want any relationship between us to be more than just about sex, Ino-chan." You deserve more than that. The tender care mixed in with the lustful hunger in which he delivered his explanation made him all the more desirable to Ino. Here was a guy who she had pretty much just offered herself to with no strings attached, and his response had been a no because he wanted her to have something more exceptional. Any doubts she had fled her mind. Naruto could protest all he wanted, but she was going to find a way into his bed tonight one way or another, consequences be damned. A familiar-sounding sharp clearing of a throat threw a bucket of ice water over Ino's arousal. Seeing the alarmed and slightly frightened expression on her date's face, she didn't have to turn to know who it was most likely standing behind her. Well said, Naruto. I am glad that one of you managed to keep a responsible frame of mind. Ino buried her face into Naruto's chest, not wanting to see her father's scowling form at the moment. She was absolutely mortified. Her dad had just seen and heard her offer sex to a boy she had in his mind only gone out with only once. He was most likely going to never let her leave her room again after this. Inoichi-san. Naruto greeted neutrally after schooling his expression. I see you managed to bring my daughter back in one piece. The Yamanaka clan head replied gruffly. Come along now, Ino. Say your goodnight to your friend before we head back. Ino didn't turn. Instead, leaning forward and giving Naruto a tender kiss, they stared into each other's eyes for a spell. A silent and spoken promise to explore this passing between them. Another pointed uncomfortable cough from Inoichi interrupted their moment, finally breaking the two blondes out of their own little world. Sighing, Ino turned to follow her father away. At least Daddy wasn't yelling at her, yet. Ino-chan, called out Naruto just as the father and daughter were passing by the gate, would you be my girlfriend? Judging by the stunned expression on her father's face, he hadn't expected the brazen question to be asked in his presence despite Naruto's well-known lack of tact. Grinning, Ino turned and gave a cheeky wave. I'll think about it, she called back. That's all I can ask, princess, Naruto said with a wide goofy grin. Hearing the strangled choking noises her father was making, Ino decided it was time to leave before the poor man spontaneously combusted. How was your evening, Daddy? She asked sweetly as she led the stuttering and convulsing clan head away. Ino felt her eyes roll back reflexively as Tenten asked the same question for about the 100th time since they had started their B-rank escort mission together. On paper, it was an important protection mission for the diplomat Suna was sending to continue their renewed alliance between the Leaf and Sand Village. The very peace and prosperity the two villages had enjoyed for the past 3 years depended on their skill and savvy as kunoichi. In reality, it was just Temari headed back to Konoha after having returned to her home for half a month to catch up with her brothers and make her quarterly report to Suna's council. The kunoichi from Sand was practically an honorary leaf ninja at this point. She handled as many missions for Konoha as she did for Suna. The girls always nabbed the babysit mission for Temari when they could so that they could spend more time with their friend, but unfortunately for Ino only Tenten had been available this time around. The trip up to Temari's homeland had been one big trial in patience. The normally pleasant trip meant for catching up soured by the weapon user's obsessive prodding for gossip. Tenten seemed absolutely fanatical about knowing every aspect of what exactly Ino and Naruto got up to when they weren't in public, convinced they must be going at it like rabbits at every chance they had. While it certainly wasn't far off the mark, it also wasn't any of her darn business. Don't deny it, Ino, teased Temari. Nobody smiles as much as you have been lately unless they've been getting it often, and getting it good. Ino felt heat creep into her cheeks as Tenten sent her a victorious look. Had it really been that obvious? She forced her traitorous cheek muscles into a more stern expression, but as if to reiterate what Temari was claiming, they quickly relaxed back into a smile when she wasn't concentrating. It had been nearly 3 months since she had agreed to be Naruto's girlfriend. Frightening how it felt like she couldn't quite recall what her life had been like before the blonde goofball had become a part of her day-to-day. The past weeks had been blissful for Ino. She had never had a steady boyfriend before. The experience was not only new, but quite pleasant. Having someone who was always willing to spend time with her, taking her places she had never gone before, and of course making out whenever the mood struck was truly a different experience. Who said nothing good came from a drunken one-night stand? It hadn't been a difficult transition going from being friends to being a couple. Their shinobi associates were already well acquainted with one another, and despite their good-natured ribbing were happy for the pair. Naruto didn't have any family they had to break the news to other than Jiraiya and Tsunade, and both were fine with him settling down. The Toad Sage had in fact been more than fine, but a few threatening gestures from the Hokage had put the Spymaster in his place, that place being a new dent in her office door in the shape of a human, of course. All it took was one dinner for Ino's mother to give her blessings to the new couple's relationship. Mio had been adamant that Ino keep Naruto after she discovered his culinary skills when he had offered to help with dinner. Inoichi seemed rather bipolar in his stance with their relationship. He genuinely seemed to like Naruto as a person, but couldn't help himself when it came to protecting his daughter. All in all, it had been smooth sailing for them so far, and Ino certainly had no complaints. Well, maybe that wasn't entirely true. An unexpected benefit of having a steady boyfriend was having someone always willing to pick up the tab. Ino had barely spent a dime on herself ever since she had started dating Naruto, and despite her protests he always waved her concerns aside with a smile and a stolen kiss. Part of her was chagrined at his almost chauvinistic behavior, but she knew that he only wanted to show her how much he cared. Being male, showing feelings wasn't his forte, so she reluctantly let him pamper her if only to make him feel better. The little gnawing guilt was slightly assuaged by the fact that she knew Naruto had deeper pockets than he let on. Hell, just the recent publishing of his adventure novel probably netted him quite the sum in terms of royalties. Tales of the Heroic Shinobi was a smash hit amongst the civilians who got to live vicariously through the comical protagonist who seemed to bumble from one misadventure into another. The real shinobi got a laugh out of trying to spot the half-truths and hidden jokes within that only someone working in the field would understand. Already Naruto had begun to drop hints at the fact that he wanted to buy a house and move out of his current apartment. His less than subtle probing of whether or not she'd consider moving in with him left her heart fluttering in excitement. There wasn't much of a decision to be made. If he did ask, she was going. She loved her parents to death, but having her own place with her boyfriend simply outweighed any benefits staying at home brought. Plus, it would give them even more chance to do what was fast becoming Ino's favorite activity with her blonde boy toy. They were about 4 dates in when Ino had given in to temptation. It had been a simple movie night, snuggling together on his couch over some stupid romantic film or another. Honestly, she couldn't even remember what it was about anymore. The absent-minded caressing of his hands had driven her wild, stroking the flames of desire until she couldn't take it anymore. She had quietly excused herself to the bathroom where she had quickly stripped out of clothing. Giving herself a quick rinse, she dried herself before heading back out to the living room sans clothing. So engrossed in the movie, he hadn't even noticed her nude state until she had stood blocking his view of the television, hands on her hips. Chivalrous as he was, even Naruto didn't have the willpower to deny her when she was naked. Unlike their first drunken encounter, they had both been completely sober and she had a very vivid and cherished recollection of every nasty little thing they had done together that night. After that, almost all their dates ended up back at Naruto's apartment. At this point, there wasn't a single piece of furniture in his home they had not sullied with their activities, but it wasn't just all sex. Even though she acknowledged there was plenty of chemistry there one night out, part of her couldn't help but wonder if it had all just been the alcohol. Naruto quickly proved it wasn't. It hadn't been the glamour and the new experience that had enamored her so. It had all been him. Even the simplest things they did together, activities she had done hundreds of times before, was so different when it was with him. Ice skating, training together, hell, even fishing. It was Naruto who made those activities fun, and Ino was more than happy to go along with anything as long as he was there. It was scary how quickly she had become accustomed to having him in her life, and how much of a hole he left when he wasn't there. Her boyfriend had left a couple days ago to, quote, kick all sorts of ass. At the Chunin exam finals being held in Cloud, Ino had no doubt that he would return with a flak jacket, but already she missed her blonde goofball. It was stupid. He had barely been gone 3 days and she could already feel her mood beginning to drop because she hadn't heard his voice or felt his touch. It was always like this when one of them had to leave for a mission. You know what? My sex life is none of your damn business, Ino said as she removed her clothes and shoved them roughly inside the bathhouse cubby. The trio had decided to stop by at their usual inn right along the border of Suna, where they could enjoy the comforts of the complimentary hot spring offered to the guests. The Homie family-run Traveler's Lodge saw little business due to its location so far from the main roads, so the kunoichi were guaranteed their privacy. Following her 2 friends into the steamy outdoor hot spring, Ino let loose a sigh of pleasure as she immersed herself in the heated water. Nothing relaxed her muscles more than the soothing warmth of an outdoor hot spring. Well, that wasn't entirely true anymore. There was that thing Naruto did with his tongue, and when he was done. It kinda is because we're your friends, contradicted Tenten with a wag of her finger, interjecting herself into Ino's daydreaming. Hinata's been going out with Choji for years. Why don't you go harass her? Groused Ino crossly. Hinata had been far too polite to intrude upon her privacy beyond comparing notes on things they had done on dates with their respective boyfriends, and Sakura had been strangely absent the past 2 months. Tamari and Tenten, on the other hand, had spared no efforts to hound her for details on her sex life pretty much from day one. That's cause nothing's happening, sweetie, laughed Tamari, rinsing her hair with the heated mineral water. Choji's too sweet to take what he wants, and Hinata's too shy to give away anything that's not asked for. We want all the nasty dirty details from the bedroom, not how they held hands after a candlelit dinner. That is if you manage to stay in the bedroom, leered Tenten as she poked a foot at Ino. Naruto seems like the impatient type. I bet he'd take you on the living room floor when he gets in the mood. The weapon mistress' jaws dropped when her friend flushed, but did not rebuke her statement. Oh my god Ino, you filthy animal. You have to tell me, please. We usually don't make it to the bedroom, Ino reluctantly admitted. The blonde mindwalker shrank into herself as Tenten squealed loudly at the revelation. Ino hadn't been acquainted with the term rug burns until she had started dating Naruto. Those few medical ninjutsu she did know was seeing quite a bit of practice, though it was doubtful they were invented for the purpose behind why she had to use them so often. Tamari snorted as she served herself some sake that was being kept warm in a wooden basket floating about in the water. Do you ever make it to the bedroom? 'Cause I know we never did. He usually carries me there after we're done, said Ino as she sunk herself deeper in the water in embarrassment. Why was she telling them this again? Stupid mouth. Tenten let out another squeal as she sent a wave of water over the mindwalker's head. You lucky bitch. So not fair. What are you complaining about? Laughed Tamari. You're not exactly Ms. Repressed either, seeing as you're sleeping with both Neji and Lee. Yeah, but that's just sex, replied the weapon user with a pout. I am not actually dating anyone. Both blondes turned and looked at their friend in surprise, hearing the slightly sad tone in her voice. Smelling a confession coming on, both blondes traded a puzzled glance. Peculiar behavior from Tenten was nothing new, but it hardly ever spelled anything good. But I thought that's what you wanted, said Ino as she scooted closer to the dark-haired Kunoichi. Tamari slung a friendly arm over the downtrodden girl's shoulder. I don't know, sighed Tenten. I mean it's fun and all, but at the end of the day we're just friends. Soon enough Neji will get married off to some clan member or other and Lee will eventually find that special girl he'll want to settle down with and love with all his heart. Oh come on Ten-chan, said Ino, bumping up affectionately against her depressed friend. You're a great catch. What guy wouldn't want you? Besides, it's not like I am exactly getting married to Naruto or anything like that. Yeah, but would you say no if he did propose? Countered Tenten sharply. What? Spluttered Ino. What type of question is that? We've only been dating for like 2 months, and I thought we were talking about you here? Tenten grinned impishly. All pretense of sadness vanished, moment of self-pity over. So, would you? Even Tamari had a glimmer of interest in her eyes as she moved into Ino's other side to block her from escaping Tenten. Damn, classic pincer maneuver. You know, Naruto's never been one to hesitate to go to extremes, Ino, commented the older blonde thoughtfully. What if he did ask you to marry him? What are you guys even talking about? We're like 17. Exactly. Exclaimed Tenten excitedly. We're shinobi, we're not going to live forever. I know that. You know that. Naruto knows that. He's always been alive in the moment type. I've seen you two lovebirds. Would it be so surprising if he did pop the question? Ino fell silent as she sank up to her nose in the water. Honestly, she had not given it any thought. It was nice being with Naruto. She felt special and had more fun in these few short months than she had in years at a time in the past. But marriage? That was so far off her radar she hadn't even given it a second's thought until Tenten had brought it up. They hadn't even gotten around to dropping the L word yet. Okay, well, maybe that wasn't entirely true. Ino had a hazy recollection of Naruto whispering those words to her as she drifted off to sleep in his warm embrace after an hour or two of passionate lovemaking. He had sounded so vulnerable that she hadn't brought it up, and he hadn't repeated the words to her while they were awake, but it still sent a nervous quiver of delight in her heart whenever she recalled those precious few seconds. Come on, what's there to think about? Demanded the bun-haired girl. You've got the one-man orgy fest as your boyfriend. All the fun, none of the guilt. Cage bunshin all night, baby. The suggestive wiggle of Tenten's eyebrows brought a laugh from Ino. She'd be lying if she said she hadn't considered the thought, but so far she hadn't worked up the courage to ask yet. One Naruto was enough to take her to the heights of heaven and back. She might not be able to survive 2 or 3. As far as ways to go out, it certainly wouldn't be a bad way to go. What is with you and your fascination with orgies? Asked Tamari with a perturbed look on her face. You won't understand unless you've tried it, replied Tenten simply, a wicked smile curving her lips. What's there to try? Demanded Tamari in disgust. I can barely stand it with one guy most times. PSH, you'll get it once you've been spit roasted. What? A cock in the mouth and one in the bum. Oh god, Tenten. I did not need that image in my head, moaned Tamari. Ino ignored her friends as they continued to gripe and banter about the different aspects of sex, her attention lost in the haze of possibilities. Her mind whirled as it ran wild, trying to recall if there were any signs or indications of Naruto dropping any clues as to his intentions for a proposal. Had certainly never raised the question with her. They had never discussed the topic of marriage or what a long-term relationship meant. but he did keep bringing her hand up to examine her fingers. Had he been sizing them up for measurements? But had had to ask her father for her hand in marriage, and while Inoichi had grudgingly come around to accepting their relationship, it was unlikely he'd let them run off and get hitched 2 months in without throwing a fit. Even her mother, who loved the blonde boy like her own son, would explode if she were to announce that they were getting married. Then again, Naruto didn't grow up with the same education as most people. Did he even know he had to ask her father for permission? Hadn't he been hinting that he wanted her to move in with him when he got his new home? Living together was practically the first step towards marriage. Holy crap. Oi Ino! Shouted Tamari, finally shaking the younger blonde out of her stupor. I am sorry, what? Asked Ino in confusion. Tamari rolled her eyes. Wake up from your daydreaming, sweetheart. I've been trying to get your attention for the past minute. Are you leaving with me or what? The Mindwalker was startled to see that while she had been lost and thought the early evening sky had darkened to a purple haze, Tenten had apparently already left for their rooms, seeing as there were no signs of the bun-haired girl, probably off to ritualistically count and polish her many pointy throwing weapons before turning in. It was practically a mental illness. Yeah, I am coming. That night, sleep did not come to Ino as she laid wide awake in her futon. Tamari's light snoring and Tenten's half-mumbles, punctuated by the occasional perverted giggle, barely registered to her as she lay awake in the darkness. The question Tenten asked continued to echo in her head, chasing away sleep as her mind turned over the possibilities again and again. Would it be so bad? In her mind's eye she conjured up an image of them together, although a bit older. Naruto had filled out a bit more, the hard edges of his face having fully left young adulthood behind. Her figure had finally settled fully into that of a woman, her steps echoing the confidence of someone who was comfortable with who she was. They were holding hands as they walked down the street, the band of gold on their fingers evident for the world to see. On his shoulders, a happy blonde child with his whisker marks and blue eyes, but her smooth platinum hair bounced happily as they walked towards a modest 2-story home similar to the one she had grown up in. A small smile worked its way to her lips at the picturesque imaginary family in her head. No, it really wouldn't be so bad, would it? Sakura sighed as her eyes gazed blankly at the medical textbook that she was supposed to be combing through. There was a very urgent need for a solution to a new brand of poison they had distilled from the body of one of Konoha's fallen shinobi. She knew the work was important, that time was of essence, and that every second she dawdled meant that another life may be claimed before an antidote could be created to counter the new toxin. But her heart just wasn't in it, as it often had lately. Her mind wandered to a certain whiskered blonde that had recently been taken off the market, so to speak. It had taken quite a bit of self-reflection before she could even contemplate the problems she faced internally when it came to her teammate. Sakura had come to terms with her feelings of jealousy, analyzed and taken it apart 100 times over in order to understand the emotion down to its most microscopic level. She hadn't become infatuated with Naruto or fallen in love the moment he was no longer available. It had been a slow, steady process that had taken place over the years of their friendship. A part of Sakura had simply come to assume that they would eventually end up together. It wasn't all that surprising that she would subconsciously come to that conclusion. Naruto had always been the one person who had been there for her. Since their days as cadets at the academy, the Jinchuriki hadn't hesitated to let the world know exactly how he felt about the Rosette, boldly proclaiming his feelings despite her every crushing rejection. It had been irritating. An obstacle that a younger Sakura had felt was an unfair hurdle thrown at her by life in her quest to be with her one true love, that one true love being the dark and deliciously brooding Uchiha, of course. When she had been chasing Sasuke, the constant denial from him had been painful. A small taste of what she had in turn thoughtlessly inflicted upon Naruto. The repeated rejections should have destroyed her self-esteem, left her confidence to shreds, but Sakura always had Naruto to fall back on to console herself. Even if she didn't have any feelings for him, there was someone out there who found her worthwhile. Selfish as that thought was, that belief was what had carried her through some of her darkest moments during her early adolescent years, much to her shame. With the formation of Team 7, Sakura finally got the chance to know the boy as more than just the person who pestered her for dates or constantly embarrassed her in front of her peers with his incessant vying for attention. There was more depth to him than he let on, something hidden beneath the clown mask he so skillfully put up for the rest of the world. Sakura quickly found herself categorizing him as one of her closest friends despite their continued animosity over any romantic aspects to their relationship. Their time as genin saw Naruto tone down with his open courting of her, but increased the intimacy they shared whenever he comforted her after another failed attempt to get at Sasuke. During the early developmental stages of her shinobi career, Sakura had come to trust him as her emotional anchor, the immovable wall that she could take shelter with when she was distraught. After Sasuke abandoned the village, things again changed. Her feelings were left in turmoil, and Naruto had been hardly any different. There were times when she felt that there was no one in the world who understood the pain that she was going through, no one save Naruto, who had been besides her every step of the way. Her parent and friend were outsiders, people who could not relate to what had happened to Team 7. With Kakashi-sensei constantly away on missions, Sakura had come to depend on Naruto for her emotional well-being more and more. They both had different ways of dealing with their loss. Sakura was sad and reflective, often seeming despondent to anyone who didn't know her well. Though she continued to carry out her duties as a soldier of Konoha, there was little enthusiasm in her actions. Naruto had taken to vanishing for days at a time. No amount of prying from her could get him to speak on where he disappeared to, but he always seemed to reappear when she needed him the most, so she hadn't pushed the point. Sakura lost count the number of times he had held her while she cried during that time period. She had stayed over at his place more than once, too tired to go home after an emotionally exhaustive episode. His care and attention felt good, a gentle healing rain on a soul that had been wounded with abuse. A small part of Sakura had begun to understand that maybe her affections for Sasuke had been misplaced.
A relationship should be about two people caring about one another, right? Who had cared for her more than anyone since they were children? Who had been besides her through thick and thin, always ready to lend an ear no matter the time of day? But she had been too hurt to pursue those strands of thought, instead focusing her remaining attention on strengthening her bond with Naruto as a friend.
The medic's eyes wandered absent-mindedly to the line of photos she kept on her desk, one of her parents and standing with her younger self at her graduation, proud smiles all around, another of Team 7 when they had first been formed, Kakashi-sensei mussing up the hair of the scowling boys flanking the only girl on either side, various photos of friends and colleagues, and finally one of Naruto and her standing together, beaming at the camera. The last one had been taken just before he had left with the Toad Sage. The blonde had his arm slung over her shoulder, a large friendly smile on his young features, making a thumbs-up gesture. Sakura smiled sadly at the photo, noting that her younger self had looked a touch embarrassed at the close contact. She recalled having enjoyed his closeness even if she would have rather died than admit it at the time. If only she had been more honest with herself. Maybe. Well, no point entertaining what-ifs. The 3 years he was gone left a hole in her life, a void she learned to fill by becoming stronger as a kunoichi and as a person. Sakura learned self-reliance, training day and night under the watchful eye of the Hokage to become one of the village's most skilled medical ninja. She completed her Chunin exams on her second try, passing with flying colors in comparison to her first attempt. Slowly the wounds left from losing one of her teammates to treachery began to heal, and her mind allowed itself to wonder about other possibilities. They were older now and more settled with their feelings of abandonment from their teammate. Maybe he might go back to pursuing her when he came back. Naruto's triumphant return had left her stunned. Gone was the vertically challenged lanky and awkward blonde boy, replaced by a tall broad-shouldered Apollonian gift to women. His once youthful and expressive face had become sharper and more masculine, lean muscle replaced by rippling girth that strained against the fabric of his clothing. But the changes were not only physical. While their friendship picked up as if there had never been a pause, his desire to pursue her as a romantic interest seemed to have evaporated. Sakura had buried any unsettled feelings deep, telling herself that they would never work out as a couple anyways. She might have even convinced herself of that if it didn't seem as if half the village women had suddenly developed an open interest in her teammate. Whispers followed Naruto about like eager butterflies, giggling women not even bothering to hide their ogling of the blonde as he passed. It did not help that the Jinchuriki seemed to have become much more suave and confident during his time away with Jiraiya. The easy charm that he exuded seemed to enrapture women without him even opening his mouth. Sakura had quashed feelings of jealousy ruthlessly, sending them into the deepest recess of her mind where she would not have to confront them, and for a while it had almost worked. Then Ino went and dropped the bombshell about her one-nighter with Naruto. All those repressed feelings broke free of the dam she had been carefully building, raging forward in an uncontrollable torrent. She could only watch helplessly from afar as her former rival went through a whirlwind romance with her teammate. It hurt a lot, an open-handed bitch slap to her pride as woman. Any harbored hope she held crumbled. Sakura had resented Ino, she couldn't deny that. If it wasn't for her, maybe there still might have been a chance that Naruto would have eventually revived his affection for the Rosette. Sakura had avoided the couple for the longest time, unable to stand being in either of their presence without those dark emotions boiling to the surface. She threw herself into her work, taking on more cases and missions in an attempt to bury her feelings of loss. But keeping herself busy only left her tired and hollow. There was no escaping her feelings. It took time and distance, but slowly she came to recognize that perhaps she had no one else to blame but herself. Sakura had had her chance, squandered it because she had been too young and foolish to understand the opportunity that had been offered her. Could she blame Ino for being happy? For Naruto wanting to be happy? Sakura wouldn't lose two of her closest friends over her own mistake. It took effort and practice, but slowly she reintegrated herself back into their lives. At first it was a simple wave and a shallow smile, acknowledging them whenever they ran into each other. Slowly, she remembered how to speak to them, able to carry out a conversation without her voice trembling. The hardest step had been forcing herself to be in both their presence at once, but even that familiar sting began to ease with repetition. Now she only felt a bitter stab of loneliness whenever she saw them together instead of the dark monster trying to break free of her ribcage. Time would render these feelings moot, and maybe one day she would find someone who could make her smile like Naruto had, but still the treacherous thought echoed in her mind whenever she saw the two blondes share a lover's whisper, a tender smile or a passionate kiss. That could have been me. The prickle of tears in her eyes she learned to blink away, her lips trained to quirk into an indulgent smile mirrored by everyone else, the playful words of disgust well rehearsed and aptly timed, but the sensation of her heart dropping like stone was not something she could hide from herself. Sakura sighed as she closed the textbook, a quivering hand reaching up to brush aside the stray tear that had carved a groove down her face. So maybe she wasn't entirely over it yet, but what could she do about it? Her chance had passed. If she didn't learn to move on, then she would lose him altogether. That was something she would not stand for. So lost in her thought, the pink-haired Kunoichi nearly jumped out of her seat when the doorway to her office slammed open, revealing the blonde male of her thoughts. Seeing his grave expression, Sakura felt a knot of worry build in the pit of her stomach. Naruto rarely looked that serious, but when he did, bad things tended to happen. "We've got him," he growled, an eager gleam in his eyes. "Who?" Sakura asked cautiously. Him could mean any number of things in their profession, but somewhere in the back of her mind she knew exactly who he was talking about. "Sasuke. We know where he's going to be." Her hand tightened reflexively into a fist at the mention of his name. The pain in her heart was suddenly replaced by a rush of excitement mixed with a small measure of anger. "When do we leave?" she demanded. Her blonde teammate tossed her a travel pack wordlessly before exiting the room. "Thanks for watching."